Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Let Us Head Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Voiced Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku had a loving family, until he didn't. Izuku had friends, until he didn't. Izuku always talked and murmured, until he didn't. It actually was a progressive change that led to his life to be what it currently was. It all started a few years back, the day that Izuku became Deku. The day that Izuku was diagnosed quirkless. The very first time he realized that life was unfair was at that doctor's office. But the first time he connected being quirkless with being lonely was the next day at school. Kaken always was a bit mean to everyone, but once he realized he was quirkless, Kaken was not the only one mean to him. Kaken started encouraging everybody to be mean to him. Izuku remembers thinking at some point that it was probably okay. If the teachers at preschool also called him names, he probably did something wrong. If Mama didn't say anything about him being treated poorly by his peers, she probably knew what he was doing wrong. If Papa stopped saying goodbye before going to work, he also probably noticed how bad Izuku must be behaving. Izuku thought it was mean from them to not tell him how to be good. But maybe it was something he had to figure it out by himself. He was already 4 after all, almost an adult, he thought. By the age of 5, he already knew that being quirkless was bad. Kaken made sure to let him know as everybody else. Papa went from not saying goodbye before work to not talking to him at all. Izuku had to either eat before Papa came home or eat at his room while Mama and Papa ate at the table. It made him a little sad, but the adults must have their reasons. Maybe the conversation was only for grown-ups. Yeah, that must be it. He was just too young to understand, right? Every once in a while Mama forgot to give Izuku his meal to take to preschool. But that was okay too, she worked really hard after all. He could do just fine with only eating dinner, until Mama stopped cooking dinner. By age 6, Izuku was almost another kid completely. Mama now ignored his existence completely. He got himself to preschool. He got himself dinner, whatever he could find in the cabinets when no one looked. He got himself dressed and learned by watching videos how to tie his shoes and how to open cans of food. He even learned how to wash his clothes, and more importantly, he learned to be silent. Hisashi, as he called now to his father, really liked silence. He was almost never home, leaving for months at a time. But when he was, Izuku knew better than to let him know he was there. Izuku knew that people really disliked the quirkless, but there was no one that hated the quirkless more than Hisashi. It started with some pushing and pulling, but after only a few days the pushing from Hisashi escalated to full kicks. It really catched Izuku off guard, but liked to learn, and he learned quickly that to not be kicked you hide. Just like in preschool. Izuku was grateful though. Apparently Izuku had many things that, according to the news lady, the quirkless didn't have. He had a home, he had a family, he had food. Most of the time at least. Izuku was grateful for that. Izuku liked to pass the time watching videos in his room. He was glad he knew how to read. Having subtitles really helped to be fully silent. He even turned the lights off, to give his parents the full experience of not having any children, to feel completely invisible. Through videos and the news, Izuku learned that the quirkless don't live long. It must be a disease then, he thought. He was probably slowly dying, and his parents were only mourning. Everyone mourns differently, right? The nice lady on the news said that most quirkless were dead by the age of 30. Izuku remembered thinking that it was probably painful towards the end too. Why else would the nice lady say that most of the quirkless commit suicide? Izuku was getting used to pain. Maybe Izuku was going to make it past 30. He could become a hero before 30 and die a hero, right? That was enough for him. Izuku really loved heroes. He remembered reading about how a hero must have a strong sense of surviving skills. He was young, all right, but Izuku was really good at surviving. He fed himself, he was an expert at hiding, and he knew how to handle pain. Izuku could make a fine hero. The first quirkless hero, save people and die young. That sounded like a dream to him. Except Izuku soon found out he wasn't quirkless. Izuku had never heard of a forced quirk manifestation before. After all, they were rare and not something that people ever talked about, especially since they never happened for good reason. It was actually a good week. Izuku was used to having multiple scrapes and bruises all over his body, but this week he only had 3, both his knees and 1 on his upper arms. It was because Kaken had been sick, and without him the other kids had lost interest in trying their quirks in Izuku. Kaken had chickenpox, and although he was a bit worried about him, Deku knew there was no good in visiting him while he was sick. It was also the last week before summer break. It was a really good week. He didn't get to eat cake the week before for his birthday, but Kaken had remembered and let him play catch with the other kids without making fun of him first. He also asked about the bruise in his leg but didn't dig deep when he saw he was uncomfortable. It was the little things that let him know Kaken was great. Izuku was sure Kaken was still his friend. He would be a great hero. There was no good in telling him that it was actually not true. Kaken didn't remember his birthday, nor did he let him play, nor was he worried about him. That day Auntie Mitsuki gave Katsuki a gift for little Izuku, which he was too occupied opening while the other kids played without him. Later that day he would trade the All Might figure for a Silver Age 1. And after seeing the bruise he just wasn't interested enough for him to keep asking. But Deku didn't need to know that. Maybe summer break would be just as good. The day that everything went downhill was almost too well planned for anyone to make any questions or to raise any suspicion. Almost. When Izuku came back from preschool he immediately knew something was terribly wrong. To begin with, the front door was open and for the first time in months he didn't need to go through the window to have access to his own house. It was awfully quiet too. No sound of his mama cleaning or the radio making white noise. Mama was nowhere to be found. A chill went through his spine. She should be home. He knew her schedule by memory and that day she had the night shift. She should be home. But the only person at home was Hisashi. Izuku was way too young to understand that he was drunk, but he was also smart enough to associate the bottles in the ground with bad news. It was too late when he saw him on the couch. If he remembered correctly, it was the first time in 3 weeks that he was home, and he was definitely not pleased to see his son. "Why do you even come back if you don't have a key?" His words were slurred and barely audible, but Izuku could hear him anyways. "Leave already." Izuku was left standing. He had homework to do and decided it was best to ignore him and make himself as invisible as possible. He knew that he was probably going to fall asleep soon anyways. Hopefully be gone by the sunrise too. He went straight to his room. For some reason Mom was sleeping inside his room. Was he supposed to go to hers then? He didn't want to wake her up. Are the quirkless hard of hearing or are you just stupid? A tall shadow rise before him. His father, who he hadn't heard coming, was standing before him. "I said leave." With barely any time in his hands, Izuku dropped to the floor, avoiding a slap by merely a centimeter. What a mistake that was. He knew, he really did. He should not avoid any punches. Somehow frustration was a way to anger his father a lot more than he could handle. Izuku was usually not scared of Hisashi. It hurt a bit more than Kaken's quirk, but it usually ended a lot faster too. But this time something was different. Hisashi wasn't angry and drunk. He was furious. His wrath was immeasurable, and it probably had something to do with the fact that he was supposed to leave for a 3-month period instead of coming back in just 3 weeks. A small spark was the only warning he had. Suddenly fire was erupting from the tall man's mouth, his eyes glowing with something far too evil for a little kid to escape. Being on the floor, it was his back that received the blow. Hot, unbearable fire soon melted his preschool uniform, pain spreading like a deadly disease. The air in the house was hot and thick, and although he wanted to scream, he didn't. The pain alone sucked all the air from his lungs. His ears ringing and everything sounded mellow for a second before every sound collapsed again. When did his mama wake up? When did the floor start shaking? Or was he shaking? "You are going to burn the house down." It was probably the first time in weeks he heard his own mama's voice. "We cannot afford another place. Don't be ridiculous." She was being so loud. The fire felt so loud too. The house was loud. The air was loud. The air was loud. "You should have dropped him in an orphanage with the other quirkless then." Hisashi's voice was lower, but not a murmur type of lower. "Then we could do with the extra money this leech takes." Stop. His murmur went through the walls, echoing oddly. They were going to send him away. It hurt. Was he going to lose his parents? It hurt. Was he going to die before being a hero? It hurt. It hurt so bad. "I'll kill him now and problem solved then." It hurt. His back hurt. His ears hurt. It hurt so bad. He was going to die. His father grabbed him by the arm and held him down. His legs pressed against him and trapped him under the man. He almost let a scream out when his back hit the dirty floor. "You are being stupid. Get off of him." One single hand covered his mouth and nose with such force that he felt his skull pressing the floor. Izuku wanted to vomit. He couldn't breathe. His tiny hands were doing nothing against the crushing force on top of him. The muscles of his neck were burning. His ears were burning. Did he catch on fire? The panic built up in a second. His chest closed off on him. His mother suddenly screaming stopped and the air was loud again. He couldn't take a breath. His whole body felt weak. His heartbeat slowed down. His vision got blurry. But his brain was going faster and faster. His hands felt hot and sweaty on his face, a huge contrast with how cold Izuku's were getting. Izuku was going to die. He didn't want to die. He had to live past 30. He had to be a hero. He wanted to live. The look of Hisashi's eyes would be the subject of his nightmares for the next decade. The pure hatred and malice within those black voids was a reality he couldn't face. How is it that it took him so long to notice? His parents hated him. He ruined their lives. He took away their friends and reputation. He ruined their relationship. He wanted to live, but how was he allowed to with all the things he had done? He turned his father into a villain, his mother into a stranger, his friend into his bully. He was bad. He didn't want to be bad. He needed time to mend things up, to be a hero, to save others, to make someone happy. He just wanted to make people happy. He felt a bile rising up his throat, a high pressure behind his now closed eyes, feeling as if they would pop out if he opened them. He wanted to vomit. No, it wasn't vomit. He wanted to scream. His contained cry for help felt like an uncontainable waterfall. A desperate explosion of water encapsulated in his mouth. Stop, 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 stop. And just like that, the waterfall broke loose. The windows exploded and he was finally able to breathe again. Hisashi was far away from him in just a second, in the other corner of the living room, completely unconscious. His mama was kneeling on the floor, both her hands on her ears, blood on her hands, water in her eyes. The air was silent again. Actually, everything was silent. Mama's cries and his desperate breathing. He liked silent. Izuku felt tingling. All his body felt kind of numb. It was nice. He could see his mama yelling at him, but he couldn't hear a sound. She looked scared, almost as scared as he was a few seconds ago. He liked to think she was worried for him. She was horrified by him. She was horrified at herself. She couldn't hear herself either. He wanted to get up and help her, he really did, but he was so tired. So tired. His green eyes felt dull and his eyelids heavy. His mouth was dry and his throat tingly. Izuku could remember his mother saying a few years back, sometimes you have to sleep on things. Maybe this was one of those times. Maybe a nap would make him forget. Maybe a nap would make him understand. As he tried to fight it off, he felt himself slipping away. Maybe a nap would bring some happiness back. Oh, how clueless kids can be. Izuku woke up in a muzzle. He panicked for a few seconds before realizing it let him breathe normally. It was weird. He still felt numb and confused. The lights were off and his room looked really messy. His notebooks were all over the floor, and so was what he recognized as the first aid kit they always had in the bathroom. It was actually surprising that it was in his room since he wasn't allowed to use it. Everything was a bit fuzzy, like when you wake up from a really long nap, but worse. It was as if the air was heavy and the bed sticky. He identified it as what happened after eating something that was bad or when he had a cold and no one to help him change the covers. Maybe he got a fever. He was alone, but there were multiple murmurs outside. It kind of felt as if he wasn't supposed to even be able to hear it, but he could. Izuku tried to sit straight and then stand up. However, his legs gave in when a sudden pain climbed through his back. It wasn't all a dream then. It really did happen. What exactly happened? Being careful of the glass shards, he stood up with help of the bed frame. His first reaction was to try to pull whatever was on his face off, only growing more frustrated when the metal pieces started to dig deeper in his cheeks and nose bridge. What was it? Why could he not pull it out? Walking up to the only mirror of his room, he tried to the best of his ability to see what was that odd thing on his face. His eyes grew big as a 6-year-old could open them. It was the device he saw owners put on big dogs. Why was it on him? It was uncomfortable and cold, a little sharp too if he tried to move it around. No one ever paid attention to him. Why put a muzzle on? He didn't talk that much, did he? Were his parents that upset with him? As if a bucket of cold water was dumped on him, he started remembering the events of the night before. Desperation traveled through his veins and his eyes started getting wet. Did he kill his parents? No, that couldn't be. He would be in jail if he did. Whose murmurs was he listening to? He tried to listen more closely, and when he tried really hard to focus, it was as if the conversation became more clear. They were talking about him. He recognized his mama and Hisashi, and with a closer inspection, a third voice that sounded different. Someone on the phone. It stopped. There was a sudden silence and the door opened, both his parents looking at him with something indescribable in their expression. The tall man he once called father looked curious and slightly scared, but his mother, oh, he didn't even need to look at her face. She was shaking, her hands moving and staying as a barrier between the door and her husband. Her other hand still had the phone on it. Hisashi looked at him, not saying a word before grabbing the phone from his wife and leaving again. Something in his eyes like telling him to behave. Almost the best interaction with his father in years, he dared say. Deku, sweetie, his mama started. It took him a moment to notice she was talking to him. Since when did she call him Deku too? And sweetie. It was weird enough that she was talking to him at all, but her voice sounded unsure, as if she said something that could get her in trouble. There will be new rules around here and I need you to listen. Okay. He could do that. Maybe that way they would take the muzzle off. No, you are keeping that for now. He didn't even realize he was touching it, but her mother's hands took him away from the device. You know how you are quirkless, right? As if they would ever let him forget. Well, you are cursed. A deep voice interrupted her. You are quirkless and cursed. Cursed? His mama also looked confused, more tired than anything he would say. Your voice is cursed and you are to not ever speak again. Am I clear? He couldn't talk anymore. That was dumb. He felt just fine. His throat didn't feel sore or anything, and what kind of curse was he talking about? Since when did he ever talk to him? Your voice hurt Papa last night, Deku, his mama explained, her voice filled with something nasty. And it hurt me too, she ended. Izuku was getting anxious. Was that why he fell asleep so fast? Did he pass out? Was his illness progressing faster? Maybe it was here where his painful death was going to begin. But he could still make it past 30, right? Do you know how people that hurt other people are called? Right. His eyes grew bigger, and although impossible to see with the muzzle on, his lips were trembling. You don't want to be a villain, do you? Oh no. Of course not. This was their fault. How did his parents let him be so bad to the point he was going to be a villain? They were supposed to stop him. He wanted to be a hero. That is what I thought. She sighed, letting go of his hands that she had so hardly pressed together, as if letting go of the burden that letting him know was. You will learn to talk with his hands, and once you do, we will take this thing off for you to go to school. Okay. When school began, they just went on vacation. Was he supposed to use this thing for the next 40 days? That was insane. Even a kid like him knew that was far from okay. You won't speak in the house or outside of it. From now on you are mute and will present yourself as such. Hisashi's words were harsh and did not leave room to argue. You will tell everyone it was a fire-related accident, and that is it. Bet you wouldn't like people to know you are a villain, right, son? Right. Lying. That is it. A little lie that would keep him out of jail. How kind of his parents to cover for him. Maybe they did worry for him. Maybe he could still be good. Even a villain has some good within. Right. From that day on things were a bit different. A nice lady would teach me every day about sign language, like his mama said how to talk with his hands. Luckily enough, she taught him in the same building where his preschool was located. After all, it was a government-owned school. She had a government patch in her blazer, and Izuku thought that since he was so young, maybe the government was trying to make him good before it was too late. He was a bit scared of being taken to jail first. But the lady said that she wasn't a policeman, nor did she have any contacts with that kind of department. She was just a lady sent for quirk management, or lack of it, he thought. The police were somewhat involved in the whole incident. But being Izuku quirkless, they just took what the head of the family said and put it in the records as if they were investigating themselves. Izuku's quirk status was never legally changed. The next few weeks were pure torture. The personal classes were hard to understand for a kid his age, and having the house for himself all the time was getting bad. His parents never once checked on him and vanished like dust. The food cabinets were soon completely empty, to the point that Izuku had to look for food somewhere else. Izuku didn't live in the best neighborhood, but a few blocks away he knew there was a convenience store, and if he was careful and silent he would find sealed packages of food about to expire or just a few days expired he would take home. At first he had to break the food in really small pieces and maneuver through the muzzle to get the pieces to his mouth. The device was tight, but he grew used to it, and in only 3 weeks the nice lady took it off permanently. Although the poor woman was under the impression he was only put in it for their sessions. She told him that he was doing fairly well, but still recommended to not speak for the time being, or to start doing it when he was by himself first. Young Izuku thought it was a trap, maybe to prove if he really understood that he could do damage. He stayed silent, always having a notepad and a pencil to communicate with others, even though he didn't have anyone to talk to. Not even when he started going to school again. They mocked him even harder now. Being quirkless and mute, there was not much he could do. He was even afraid of having the hiccups. He didn't want to hurt anyone. He could still remember the blood in his mama's ears. He really missed her. He just wanted to see her. Having no contact with people at all was hard. Izuku was so lonely, but he found some comfort in his hero analyses notebooks, going through them faster than he could get new supplies for the next one. Good enough, the nice lady that taught him sign language gave him notebooks to practice in. And since he was getting so good, she had no questions every time he asked for a new notebook. He was a liar anyways, so what if he added a lie about what he used so many notebooks for? A few months into the school year, the lady stopped coming to teach him. Izuku was sure he had enough knowledge to communicate his need, and when in doubt he could just spell the word he wanted to say. But he wasn't sure a few months were enough to teach him a whole language. Although he wasn't sure how it was supposed to be useful when not even his teachers knew how to use it. Most of the time he had to use his wonky writing to say the answer to the questions on the board, even when the teachers would still ignore him and tell him to speak up. It was okay, they didn't know better. They didn't know he was cursed and could hurt them. He was the liar. He was always the odd one out. He wasn't sure anymore if he could be a hero. He really hoped he could, but he was doubting himself. It was one chilly night, walking after fetching a bag of gummies out the local dumpers, that he saw the hero. For the first time in months, Izuku was excited. Every night he started thinking of ways to talk to him, how to draw his attention without annoying him, how to approach him while not putting the hero working in danger. He could tell him if he could be a hero right. He would know. And if the hero was always waiting for him to finally have the courage to approach him, well, he wouldn't admit to it. It started slowly. Izuku was a bit scared of hurting anyone, and to be honest, he was a bit scared of people in general. Not that you could blame him for it. He thought he was being really sneaky about it. And it was a little adorable watching him look at the hero from as far as possible. Being as smart as he was for his age, and having so much time in his hands too, he was able to figure out his patrol route in the days and time he was on it. 3 days a week he could see the hero if he went to a specific spot right in between the dumpster, where he got most of his food, and his home. The hero seems to have taken a liking to one of the buildings near that convenience store, and was usually seen taking a break and munching on some type of food that came in bright-colored packages. Izuku would climb the side stair of the building to get to the top and watch the exact view the hero saw right after he left. Eraserhead watched from a distance a small kid going to that exact same place and sitting in the same spot where he was. It was a mixture of confusion and curiosity, if not a bit of worry too. What was a kid so small doing outside so late at night? Why was no one watching him, and why did it try to sneak a view of the pro hero? He made sure to stay near until the kid went back down the side of the building. It wasn't that tall, but very dangerous nonetheless. He also followed the kid back home, just once, to make sure he wasn't just going around from far away. It was odd, but nothing more. He almost always saw the kid munching something and then going back the same road. He appeared to have a home just fine, and the lights seemed to always be on when he got there. Well, maybe he followed him twice. Maybe a night trip for a snack. It made sense. He knew there was a gas station very close to where they were. It just wasn't really good to eat that late, even if he did so himself. It didn't sit right with him. Why did he go out to eat, and why did the kid want to watch him? He wasn't really eye-catching, especially for little kids that only saw a man jumping in the dark dressed like a homeless person. This kid wanted something. One night he decided to go a few minutes early, at the recommendation of his husband, just to see the child's reaction to a change in schedule. However, the little one was already out and about. He watched him appear from the direction of the store, a pack of some type of candy in his hands. Surprisingly enough, the kid ate half of it, left it on the side of the building, and climbed on top, taking something out of his pocket and leaving it there before climbing back down and retrieving the candy from the floor and running away. Did no one tell him to not eat things off the floor? Primarily from the street too. He waited until the time was right to not raise any suspicion and went to the same spot, taking his jelly pouch out. There it was. Behind a small rock was neatly folded with paper. A note perhaps. A drawing. Of him. Aizawa had to fight the urge of looking in the direction where he knew the kid was watching from. Instead, he watched closely. With just a black crayon, the kid managed to draw an indent-friendly image of him in his hero uniform. The lack of color was extra funny because there are arrows pointing at his specs that read yellow and another one pointing to his head saying red, probably meaning his eyes. Hisashi would love it. He debated between taking it and sighing and leaving it there. It was too much to think that the kid would know what hero he was just from stalking him. But he wanted to assert some type of communication. That way they would both acknowledge their presence and maybe could talk about what the kid had to say. At the end, he decided to take the drawing and leave one of his jelly pouches. Not that he had anything on him to write with or something more kid-friendly. The kid liked to eat at night. He would probably like it too. He left, watching from an appropriate distance while the child picked up the jelly. Funny enough, he didn't seem to know what it was and tried opening it and putting a bit in his hands like some kind of hand cream maybe. It wasn't until he smelled it that he tried dumping it in his mouth. Eraserhead could feel a slight smile coming. It made sense if he couldn't read. It was really dark and maybe he didn't even know many Japanese characters on the package. He was probably what? 4, 5 tubs. The way home was simple and a bit earlier than he should too. As soon as he stepped foot in his house, he could sense the smell of bitter coffee. His husband really was the best. The best out of them with kids too. He would know what to do. Home. Welcome home, Shu. He walked to the kitchen and kissed him on the cheek, already taking the cup of coffee from his hands and trying to pull the drawing out with the other. Any news on your little fan? The blonde laughed at his own lame joke. Oh, you are going to love this. He proceeded to give him the now wrinkled paper without unfolding it. He left it for me to find where I always sit. Excited. The most famous of the two took it and unfolded it, a tiny squeak escaping from his lips. OMG. That's adorable. He immediately shut up at the same time his quirk was erased. Sorry, it's just that it is so cute. Shu, he continued to do a cute little dance and then hang the gift in their fridge with the help of a cat magnet. What did you say? Did you get his name? Nothing really. He just left it on the building before I got there. He bit his lips. Thinking. He was watching though, and I left him a jelly pouch. A jelly pouch. For a kid in development. Great. The eye roll was a clear sign of sarcasm. Just talk to him. He is probably a sweetheart. There is something that is bugging me. He heard a hum, and sipped his coffee. He drew me with red eyes, right? Does that mean he saw me in action? Hisashi paused for a second, slowly walking towards the master room. Aizawa followed him suit. Maybe. A yawn couldn't hide the worried expression on his face. The options are, you helped someone he knows and they told him, or he has seen you fighting. Either way, I don't like the picture the little listener is painting. Shu, you should try to get a name at least, just to check the public records. The pro hero signed and changed into more comfortable clothing. He knew his husband was right, but at the same time it was illogical. There weren't any indicators of the kid being in utter danger, and he couldn't just go with the night trips to get junk food. As far as he was concerned, the kid could just be sneaking out to buy something out of his reach, or their parents could work in the convenience store. He had always been a logical man, and logic dictated that if the child did not approach him, he should not chase after it. But he just couldn't let go of his gut feeling. The kid won't even make direct eye contact. How am I supposed to get him to talk to him, let alone tell me his name? More junk food. I don't really know. Most of the time kids approach me first. Maybe try looking at him to begin with. He may be scared of you. Next time leave a note back. Some stickers too. He didn't say anything back. Just gave him a short kiss and went straight up to the bathroom to wash his teeth. He was too tired to shower. He had a point. If he didn't acknowledge the kid at all, it would never be up to him if the small greenie talked to him. Showing something might be the right option for now. Stickers right. Kids like that. Some weird snack maybe to catch his attention. He didn't seem to know what a jelly pouch was, so he could play around with something similar. Kids couldn't be that hard to understand, he hoped. The next time he was due to that patrol area, he made sure to have some sticky notes, a pencil, and some All Might stickers. He hated it, but they were the top sellers apparently. A thank you note was waiting for him, next to another drawing, this time of best genists. Interesting choice. Was this going to become some sort of collection of him? He didn't mind. Kid drawings added a cute aspect to his patrols. Maybe he could ask for a present mic drawing for next time. Still no eye contact though. So he did. He left a thank you note for the drawing and a few All Might stickers next to his present mic request. He had to admit, he felt kind of funny when waiting for the next drawing. Maybe he didn't hate kids that much anymore. Or maybe he did, but he would make an exception for this one. Izuku is smart, even if everyone tried to say otherwise. That is the one thing in life he was certain of. He could learn really quickly and could always find a way to adapt to situations. He wasn't sure how to adapt to this one. After months of the absence of both his parents, things were finally falling apart. The first thing that ran out was obviously food, but he found a way around it, even if it took a toll on his body. The next thing to run out was school supplies, but he managed to take most things out of the lost and found of school. After that came the medical supplies, for which he just simply stopped taking care of himself, choosing to just cover bruises and else from his bullies with more clothes. But now the house has stopped working. He was aware of the existence of bills, however he didn't completely understand how they worked. It took a lot more time than it should, but after a while of no one paying for anything, the lights would not turn on and the water would not get hot. And only a week after, the water would just not come out at all. He knew adults were supposed to take care of that, so it would only make sense that no adults meant no service. Izuku needed a bath, so he stayed late and took one at school property in the gyms. He knew he wasn't allowed there, but he did so anyway. He really wanted to see Auntie Mitsuki. She was really nice to him and was sure to let him take a bath at their house, except that Kaken would not like that and already had a hard time at school to try to make it worse by making him angry. The highlight of his days were the drawings that he now did for the pro hero. He was hesitant at first, seeing as there was no real connection to the drawings and what he wanted to ask him, but the pro hero seemed to take a liking to them, to the point he made a request. Present Mike Huh. He remembered the name from Kaken's mouth one or twice, but he didn't really know about him and he didn't have any means to look him up now that there was no Wi-Fi or even electricity at his house. He couldn't even access to the school computers as they were strictly watched for and only the older students could use them. Primary school wasn't really any better than preschool. He dared say it was worse too. The teachers barely tolerated him, most of the time treating him as if he didn't hear rather than just not speaking. He was often forced to stay after class to clean as a result of being a troublemaker, as if the other kids didn't constantly try to antagonize him. He was tired, oh so tired. Maybe it was the poor eating, the night terrors, the bullying, or even just the constant feeling of putting everything around him in danger. He was too tired for his age. Izuku's green hair was slowly becoming matted, his curls losing their form, his eyes losing their shine. He was doing poorly in school too. Not because it was hard for him to understand, but because he couldn't for the life of him find something useful in it. What was the point in studying if he wasn't going to be graded fairly anyways? Even learning had lost its spark. One of those days, those especially bad days that were becoming more and more frequent, he was trying to get some information on Present Mike to make his drawing for that night. He entered a merch store. If it was a hero, he was sure to find at least a picture of him there, with just a piece of paper that said Present Mike on it. He went in. He showed the paper to the person on the front desk, and a really old lady takes her time putting on glasses and reading the note. She smiles fondly and takes a good look at Izuku, a frown appearing in her face. "Are you looking for anything special, dearie?" she says, and Izuku thinks she may not be happy to later discover he has no money. "This is what we have of him. His merch runs out fast, so there is not much left. I'm sorry." He makes sure to give her a big smile, and the poor lady looks a bit sad. Present Mike, a blonde with leather all over. In most pictures he appears smiling or yelling. His immediate thought is that he was wrong. He looked more like a rock singer or a DJ if he had to be honest. All his merch looked music-related, and he cannot possibly remember the last time he heard music. He used to like to sing. Maybe Eraserhead was a fan himself. He did dress all black after all. It looked right by his alley. He tried hard to remember all the details he could, making a mental map. He was sad he didn't have any yellow crayons to make the drawing pop, but it will have to do with what he had. "You look sick to some degree, sweetheart. Are you okay?" Startled, he turned around, the old lady staring at him, analyzing him. "I have some tea and crackers if you would like." He debated it. She seemed nice, and in his experience, women seemed to be less harsh with him. Not that he knew many. At the end he was about to refuse. He was never taught about stranger danger, but in his shoes it was just hard to trust anyone. "Please, being old is really lonely." She took out the crackers. They were plain ones, but it had been 2 days since he last ate, and his stomach growled awkwardly. He nodded. That afternoon was hard for him. He really didn't notice how he missed having someone treat him as an actual person. He spent more than 2 hours with the lady. She liked to talk a lot. Her name was Nima. She had no grandchildren, and her husband had been dead for a decade now. She had 3 ferrets and an intense love for radio shows. She lived alone, and she was 71, and the most important thing, she was quirkless. Izuku cried for an hour under her care. The lady was the first one to hug him in maybe 1 or 2 years, and she even promised to bake him some apple pie if he came back another day. She helped him with his present mic drawing and gave him some used color pencils she had laying around. She didn't even have all the colors, but he was so grateful that she didn't even question him about his muteness. That day Izuku learned that the quirkless could live up to 71 years old, but he was also reminded that being quirkless meant being lonely. Maybe he could open a hero merch store instead of being a hero. That night Izuku had the courage to attach a note to the drawing. He had to think hard about what to put in it, but ultimately decided on something simple. What is present my quirk? He added a bunch of random music notes to the question as if to convey his message. He didn't quite write it perfectly, but he hoped he got an actual answer. He waited for the pro hero in his usual hiding spot. A few minutes later than usual, a black shadow jumping from roof to roof appeared and settled in his usual spot. The pro got there, drank his jelly pouch, and opened the drawing, reading the note too. Seemingly taken back from it, he looked up, his eyes searching for something, finally falling into his green one without too much hustle. He had been exposed. "It is called voice." He yelled in his direction in the least casual way a man could scream from a ceiling. It was the first time he realized the child had green eyes. Shouta lived to regret following the idea to catch his attention by letting him know he knew he was there. He saw the little kid freeze like a deer in highlights and the run at top speed to the other direction. It took all his mental strength to not follow him, and the guild started to eat him alive for the next few days. He can't help but notice the kid didn't look too good that day. Maybe he should have followed him. At his next patrol, the jelly pouch and stickers he left were still there, and the kid nowhere to be found. Izuku didn't leave his house for 5 days straight. He wasn't exactly sure why he was so scared of the pro talking to him. He just wasn't ready for him to treat him like everybody else. The quirkless might be kind to him because they understood, but he didn't know if the pro would still want his drawings if he knew. If he really knew. If he had to be honest with himself. Izuku would admit to not being able to recognize his own feelings. Most of the time he did just fine ignoring them or not labeling them. But now there was a sudden feeling he could once remember. The feeling of loss. It was silly. He rationed. He knew that very clearly. You couldn't really miss something you don't have. But getting to take a smile out of the hero with his drawings was something he really cherished. It created a bubbly feeling in his chest that made him smile. Izuku wanted to make everyone smile. And that made him remember he wanted to be a hero. Right. He wanted to be a hero. And heroes were really brave. Heroes didn't hide when their cover got blown. Izuku had to be brave. He had to give his drawings to him. And maybe if he was brave enough he would go to school too. He really hated school now. Kaken's power was getting more powerful by the minute, and Izuku's body could feel the strain it would take when he saw his classmates' eyes. Most of them instigated that Bakugo showed them his power, some even brave enough to join the beatdown. By now there were no other kids that had it so bad against them, and although it wasn't easy, Izuku didn't want other kids to become their targets because he was missing school. He can take it. For Bakugo's learning and the safety of the other kids. He could turn his curse on someone's blessing. At least like that quirkless, useless Deku would have some worth. If he could make a hero smile, that would give him some worth too, right? That day Izuku decided to do the bravest thing he could think of. He ripped a page of his hero analysis notebook and kept it in his fingers, one of his favorite pages for sure. He wanted to show 2 things. He wanted the hero to know what he admired him, to the point that he thought of things he could do to improve, and secondly, he wanted to show the hero what really defined Izuku. And if he thought it was creepy and ran away, well, he would be heartbroken, but at least would be able to anticipate the blow before it got too strong. He didn't want to trust. Before he could gather the courage to get out of his very dark house, he heard a noise. Steps that usually would be quite hard to catch were unbelievably loud. He got nervous. There was a reason why a pro hero was assigned this part of the city as their patrol, that being how dangerous it could be at night. Would a thief be so loud? The sound stopped. Izuku opened the front door without really thinking, curiosity getting the best of him, and the lock had been broken for weeks now, so it wasn't safe anyways. The light of the common area of the apartment complex hit him like a hammer. He really had been in complete darkness the last few days. After a few seconds of adapting to it, some tired and alerted black eyes watched him with caution. Hands rising in the air as proving innocence. Immediately panicking at the sight of the last person he wanted to see face to face, he froze. His heart rate skyrocketed and his breathing irregular, his poor green eyes a mix of fear and shock. His throat suddenly felt so dry and he felt as if air vibrated, as it happened when he was really stressed. Why was he here? Why did he know where he lived? The man in front of him moved slowly, as if treating an injured animal. He opened his mouth and formulated a sentence, but there was nothing to listen to. No sound came out. Both seemed confused by this, and before anything else could even happen, Izuku made the sign for leave and closed the door on his face. The green little kid hid himself behind the door as his hands trembled. He began pulling his greasy hair with both hands. Undoing knots always helped him calm down. It was also the first time he noticed how long and unhinged his hair was. No wonder he attracted ugly stares at school. Wait, if his hands were empty, where was the hero analysis page at? Looking around, he knew he had dropped it in front of the dark-haired man. Not the best way to deliver, but truth to be told. Avoiding seeing his reaction would spare him a little if the man didn't ever come back. Why was he here anyway? Izuku slept the whole night in front of the door, guarding it, making sure the man would under no circumstances come in. Terribly afraid he was waiting outside for him. Terribly afraid of that being the last time he would see him. Aizawa waited. He really did. Guilt and rage building deep within. He should have stalked the kid, he knew that beforehand, but he was just so worried when he missed the drawing and after he never picked up the jelly. He was so worried something happened and it was not him avoiding him. He was right to be worried too. It was the very first time he could see the kid in detail with good lighting, and his whole body reacted to it. He was just trying to see if he was home, nothing more, but suddenly his walk was undisguisable and he ended up with the kid face to face, if only for 5 seconds. The pro couldn't believe he hadn't noticed before, yet the kid looked awful. At first sight, when he opened the door, he reacted as if unaware of light. Not one tiny glow coming from inside, even so that was not what shocked him. What really caught his attention was the hurt animal appearance he held. His hair, he was sure that it was BLCAC, was actually a deep green, greasy, matted and wild. His clothes were the same ones he wore a week ago, obviously old and dirty. His hands were red, scrawny. The whole kid was a mess. His eyes had huge eye bags for someone his age, and his eyes were just lacking in every kind of way. All of his screamed neglect in the best of scenarios. He didn't even want to think of the implications of the child opening the door to just about anyone. His husband would absolutely lose his mind when he tells him that the kid used sign language. A kid so young too. It was definitely something quirk related. The kid must have a silent quirk to some degree, because he knew for sure that the second he tried talking, the kid completely killed his voice. Without a doubt, an impressive control of it, considering the shock he was in. Or maybe he didn't do it on purpose at all. He would have to look into it. One way or another, he knew that if he was reluctant to leave the matter alone, he was sure as hell not going to leave it now. This kid needed help. He just didn't know how to ask for it. Only God knows how long he has been in this state. Probably a long time if he couldn't even bring himself to trust a hero. He had to save this kid, in any way he would allow him. But first he needed to cool down. Waiting for the kid to come out was not the best idea, and he had to make a plan of action. From watching the house to see if he could locate his parents and asking to see the public records of the property. That would probably give him at least a family name to go about. His heart already ached at the idea of the horrible things he would uncover. The page in his hand filled him with a sense of duty. This kid holded him on a pedestal he had yet to earn. Eraserhead had a few calls to make, and a kid to save. On the other side of the city, in a nice and cozy apartment in a nice neighborhood, there were 3 men with sour faces discussing work matters. Kind of. I would love to just remove him from his house, Eraser. But you know it's not that simple. I understand, but that could even be used in court, right? Matted hair doesn't happen from a day to another, and I can testify seeing him out late at time multiple times. The room went silent for a minute, all adults present wishing to resolve this easily. So I get that this is frustrating, but getting the kid out not knowing for sure if he can stay out could make it worse. Right. His husband was right, and by the expression on his face he also knew that he was having a hard time just like him. Child neglect cases are always hard for both of them. Both of them having rough childhoods made them want to help in any way they could. However, at times it was just not that easy. Our best course of action would be to get some evidence of abuse or neglect first, Tsukachi said, breaking the tense atmosphere once again. That way we can avoid a he say versus she say kind of situation. I saw the kid for weeks and I was just now able to see him up close. He signed there is no way I will be able to get evidence from him, especially now that I scared him away. The detective had to admit it was a hard situation. Kid cases most of the time didn't have a happy ending. And the probability of the kid ending in the system was high, assuming the parents didn't actually get away with it. The system was never kind to kids either. Most of the time couples want to adopt babies, and those kids that are a bit older just grew up in foster homes. How about this? I can open up a case if you report it first that seems to catch their attention. But that would mean you would have to follow the case, make a statement, and possibly go to court. The blonde looked a bit conflicted. Aizawa usually didn't get to follow many cases at all, and he was afraid that this one could take a toll on his mental health if it went too far. But he also knew that this kid already meant something for him, and that he never backed down from a fight. I'll do it. Both the other men smiled. It was to be expected. What about the public records? Nothing. There is no evidence of any mute kid living there. Even more, that house hasn't been lived in for months now. Didn't found any mute kid with those descriptions either, nor with some type of quirk that could make sense in this scenario. Any missing kids? Said the blonde, stress palpable in his every movement. Also no. And the last residents, maybe they know him or that is not public records. Oh, the three stood there, coffee in hand and words setting in. This kid didn't have a name yet and was already causing problems. What would even happen to him while they collected said evidence? Lord knows how long he has been uncared for or what he had been through. He still didn't even know how or since when the kid knew his eye could glow red, and the implications of him being in some type of altercation were not so good. What if he wasn't even mute? There was the possibility of him just knowing sign language, or that he just imagined it in the heat of the moment. Very unlikely. If only he had pushed the matter a little harder and sooner. If he had tried to get closer to the kid or tried to get him to ask somehow for help. Maybe if he had just given back a paper with questions or had taken his drawings as something serious. If he had paid attention to a hand in his thigh made him come back to earth. His husband rubbing calming circles with his fingers. A sympathetic smile was all he needed to focus again. Damn, he really loved this man. Even knowing that this affected them both, Hisashi was always there for him. The ratio host was mostly frustrated for not being able to help in any capacity. Hell, he didn't even know his little listener looked. And still he would be there as long as he could lend a shoulder for his partner. He had to focus now. No more ifs. They didn't even notice the intimacy of the moment they were having, making the poor detective a witness of some weird heated stare contest. He pretended to cough. That would be less embarrassing than asking them to get a room. Less funny too though. What we can do for now once the awkwardness was gone, he continued, is take a statement from you with my lie detector quirk. That should be enough to ask for a deeper investigation. I will suggest for me to watch the kid in order to further confirm where he is staying at and what is he doing. They both nodded. There was a lot he didn't know. The information he had was limited to those nights he had patrolled, and so he couldn't give a precise answer of what happened during the day. Maybe we could ask schools around the area. A green kid like that should be easy enough to identify. God, Hisashi could be smart when he wanted it. If any school identifies him, they could be liable for not reporting it, Tsukachi added. So it's possible that they hide it to maintain their image. And God, did that break a heart. He said it so matter of fact that it was only logical to guess this was not the detective's first encounter with a horrible school environment. At least now they had a plan. Green Rescue, as the loud blonde named the mission. During the next few days, Izuku was busy. As busy as a 6-year-old could be anyways. He wasn't stupid. He could see that Eraserhead had sent someone to investigate. What they were investigating was still a mystery yet. He was so very hungry, and he would eventually have to go out for food. And so he did. He waited until it was a day where the hero was not supposed to be there, and he also went to a different hour of his usual schedule. He wished he could go whenever, but the trash collector went there first thing in the morning, so his best option was to go there late at night to avoid any weird stares. Except this time he felt a very obvious pair of eyes following him. Izuku knew the 3 best dumpsters near his home as the palm of his hand, and he also knew that they were well hidden from the general public to give the neighborhood a better look. Therefore, a tall man with a coat and hat just randomly being near them both times he went in to look for supplies was a thing that generally someone as cautious as him would notice. He knew the man was watching. The man knew Izuku knew he was watching. They both saw each other and said nothing. At first, the boy thought that the man was going to try something funny on him, being that the reason why he would always take what needed and leave as quickly as possible. But he discarded the idea on day 2. Then he thought it was one of those people that gather at night in alleyways to sell or buy sugar, but he also threw that idea away. The man was too neat for that, and he settled on the idea of him being a detective, one that wanted to make it clear that Izuku was being watched every time he left the nasty apartment. The green-haired kid was reasonably scared of the police. Thoughts of being arrested for his curse soon turned into nightmares that wouldn't let him sleep. Perhaps it was time for Izuku to let go of the place he called home, even if he didn't have anywhere else to go. Maybe the old lady Nemo would want to take him in. But then again, she was really old and probably already had enough struggles being quirkless herself. Izuku couldn't even fathom the idea of bringing harm to her. The exact night that Izuku planned to leave his hideout was the same night that everything would change. For a safe and fun trip, one has to be prepared. But well, this was no trip at all. After all, when you go on a trip, you have a final destination. Izuku didn't know where to go. He heard it everywhere. Not having a home was hard, but going to jail would be worse, right? So Izuku did the only thing he could think of. He started packing. He really wanted to have one heck of a day before leaving the house for good. He filled the only bag he had, a bright yellow one that his mother gave him when she still loved him. It was all muddy and he did his best to pack. TCH it up with glue, but there was still a small hole on the side. He grabbed a family photo, his hero notebooks, his color pencils, and all the hero merch he could fit in it. Most of it were clothes anyways, so it would come in handy. Not that he was really thinking of practicality because, well, he is only 6. Leaving the bag near the entrance, he cleaned his face as well as he could with an old rag and went on his way. First, he wanted to visit Nima, hopefully eat something and help her however he could. And he did. The old woman's eyes almost spilled a tear or two when she saw him again. She was always so kind and motherly, didn't ask any questions and let him write down anything he had to say, even going as far as teaching him some new words and showing him some of her favorite card games. He really hoped that he would always be able to visit her. Izuku was way too young to understand, but she tried looking out for him, accidentally spilling sweet tea on his shirt and offering to wash it for him, asking him to wash his hands when they got sticky from the cookies, secretly putting some band-aids in his pockets for the cuts in his hands and fingers, asking him to let her brush his hair. That was where he put the line at. Only his mama brushed his hair, even if she didn't do it anymore. He just wasn't ready to let anyone else touch it, nor him either, to be real. Nima wanted so badly to ask Izuku for so much more, but was happy enough knowing that he promised to come back for more snacks. His next stop was a food stop, but he decided he wanted to put the fruit and cereal bars Nima gave him in his bag first. They looked so good, but he had eaten already and could only stomach so much anyways. As soon as he stepped a foot in his apartment complex, he could feel in his bones that something was going on. That should have been his clue to leave, but he walked up the stairs to his apartment anyways. Door wide open made his swallow hard. The noise of things being shoved and pushed around coming from inside the house. Thieves? No, they wouldn't be so obvious. He remembered what happened the last time he found the door opened. He wished he was wrong. He wasn't. The noise came from his parents' room, so, without questioning it, he tried grabbing his bag. But the sound of things moving around stopped as soon as he did. Asashi was here. He looked much older than Izuku could remember. The unclean shave and messy hair made him look 10 years older. They stare at each other, both stunned, one angry and one scared. Do not tell me that. He failed to finish his own words, instead watching his son tremble on his feet. The man spun around and quickly walked to the bathroom. More noise. He immediately recognized what he had in between his hands and regretted so much not leaving when he had the chance. Feeling overpowered was a feeling that he did remember. Asashi grabbed him by the arm and pulled hard, almost lifting him in the air. He felt as if he grew a ton too. There was no way of staying calm. It was way stronger than in his dreams and a lot angrier too. I'm not risking it again. It was the first time he actually tried to fight him off. He agitated his hands in front of his face, his head hanging low to avoid showing his face and mouth. But soon the hand left his arm and got a handful of his air, forcing him to lift his eyes to his level. Dirty little rat. It was barely a murmur, but he heard it. The distinctive clink of metal was all he could hear before being muzzled. He knew the device was still in the house. That is why he never used the main bathroom, too scared of sharing the same space with it. Izuku started silently crying, defeated, setting it as he pulled on the leather straps. A metallic taste filled his mouth and his cheeks stung the harder he pulled. He couldn't avoid it. He was desperate, angry at himself. He wanted his father to give back every one of the tears he cried. He wanted him to put the torture device and see what it was like. Pure humiliation followed him as he was dragged to the front door. His breathing was harder and the sobs were so very painful. He trained so hard to not use it anymore. He put in the effort to be good. He hated him. He knew at that moment that he hated his father. He allowed himself to do so. He was a villain. A hero would recognize his efforts. They would. Eraserhead put stickers when his drawings were more detailed. He understood. Go. He was pushed out the door, landing ass first. You don't live here. Go. Effing away. Already. His bag was thrown at him. The things scattered everywhere down the complex stairs. Sobbing and shaking like a leaf, he stood up, only to be kicked down the stairs. The tall man stood tall on top of them, huffing with plastic bags full of things. How can you even still come here, after everything? By now he was yelling, coming down the stairs and not even giving him a second look. Goddamn, no wonder no one wants to rent this rat hole. The man continued talking to himself, blurting insults left and right as he walked away. Got in the once family car and drove away. He stayed there, once because his tummy hurt so bad and then because his crying didn't let him see properly. It took a few minutes of shaking, but eventually his mind went into autopilot. His body erased the pain and he felt himself go numb. It didn't happen often, but when it did he could never clearly remember the time in between naps. It happened once or twice at school, but teachers dismissed it as not paying attention and he wouldn't argue. Probably a symptom of his curse, right? Piece by piece all was mechanically retrieved into the backpack once again. Step by step, it kind of felt like being asleep or just in a body that wasn't his. He couldn't tell, but he walked straight to the dumpster, probably because that is where he was going to go next, and sat there, not even realizing he was still crying. How long was he there? Aizawa wasn't even supposed to be on call that night. He was called in to cover a shift in a more mellow part of the city and they called for because he was known to always take on more than he should. It was on his way home that he received a text from Naomasa. It is short and concise and it puts a sour half smile on his face. We have enough to start to get him out. On one hand, just the idea that it took him barely a few days to find evidence of neglect made him angry. On the other hand, he was just happy to finally be able to take the kid out of that place. It was one of those cases he wanted to see from beginning to end. If possible, he would try to speak with whoever takes him in, whether it is another relative or foster family. However, there was something that just didn't feel right. Aizawa knew for sure that Naomasa was good at his job. But at the same time, he knew that if his kid could detect him, he would be most definitely aware of the detective's presence. The mental image of the greenie being paranoid about being followed felt like swallowing a rock. He didn't want to think of him being scared outside of his house when he probably didn't feel safe in it. If the case was clear to start, there was no wrong in him checking for himself the state of the little one, right? If just to get some peace of mind. On the way there, he could not stop his heart from racing, his gut feeling spiking as he got closer by the second, and there was nothing in there that would reassure him. The place was completely trashed inside out, as if a tornado entered that apartment alone. A number of papers, clothes, and other random things made a path from downstairs to the main door. The door was wide open. He could see it from the rooftop of the building next door. Aizawa tried to keep his cool. He could recognize it as a crime scene or a fight scene of some sorts. He sent a quick text to Hisashi with his location so as to not alert the detective that was most probably off duty by now. He went in, capture weapon in hand and ready in case of a possible altercation. It was the first time that he got to see the place from the inside. It was disgusting. Things all over the place. A nauseating smell of rotten food and dirt built up. The ceiling definitely had some fungus and the floor was sticky and splattered with beans. The lights didn't work either. Had he been living in these conditions? It didn't take long to clear the house. There was no one there and no other sign of the kid anywhere. One of the rooms, clearly at some point the kid's. He could avoid taking an extra second when he recognized the kid in a picture. He looked like a normal kid then, but much smaller. What the hell had happened? His hand started to tingle at the realization that something could have happened to the kid. The feeling of billies climbing his throat got almost unbearable at the sight of one single droplet of deep red liquid right outside the door. And then another, and another. He paced around in hopes of seeing something else. But after maybe 6 or 7 drops, there was nothing else. They were sparse and far in between, which was good. At least there was no profuse bleeding. But nonetheless, he became extremely worried. His kid was out there, alone, and maybe heard at 4 in the morning. The drops indicated a way that was in an open space. Having no way to narrow it down, Aizawa became frustrated with himself. There has to be some. There was something. He knew the kid. If there was someone out there qualified to find him, it was him. His phone buzzed, but he ignored it. He went to the kid's favorite place first. The rooftop building. Nothing. The jelly pouch still there felt like a punch to the stomach. The hiding spot from where he watched him was next. Nothing. Pacing around, the black-haired hero didn't want to admit that he was about to have an anxiety attack any moment now. There was no time for that. He had to calm his breathing. It was getting out of hand, getting louder by the minute, getting louder and low. Except it wasn't his breathing. The familiar feeling he detected the night the kid opened the door. Like the air was dense and silent, except now it was dense and loud. It had to be him. It had to be. Without reckoning his movements, he activated his quirk. Uselessly, as he could not see the kid just yet. His heart was in his mouth, trying to jump out as his eyes got so dry it was itchy. There, curled up next to a huge yellow cloth, was a big chunk of hair that he just knew was him. Aizawa let all the air he didn't know he was holding go, the air echoing even though they were in an open space. He activated his quirk. The kid didn't move in the slightest, but the air seemed to be quiet again. "Kid," shouted, did his best to keep his voice steady and calm to transmit it to him. He was almost positive the kid was mute and not deaf, but there was the doubt of him being neither or both too. He didn't react. Stepping closer but slowly, he crouched down to be at his height, keeping a safe distance so as to not freak him out. He couldn't see any immediate injuries, but he also could barely see anything with the lack of streetlights and because of him hiding his face in between his knees. He tapped the floor next to him twice, as he did to get his husband's attention when he was not wearing his hearing aids. Also nothing. He blinked. The air stayed normal this time. He prayed to some unknown god so that the kid wouldn't be unconscious, or worse. Gaining courage and losing some life years, he decided to tap his shoulder, just enough for him to at least lift his head. Nothing. That was his cue to get serious. He got closer and without an ounce of force put both his hands on the kid's shoulders. When he failed to react again, he made his way to his face to pull his head out to check him. And then he felt the muzzle, a device he knew by heart and hated with all his might. The kid was wearing a effing muzzled, the straps lost in between his curls. This one was rusty and deeply pushing into the kid's cheeks. Some red was already visible, and he could bet the damage would be worse once he was able to take it off. And he was awake, wide awake he had to add, just not fully there. His eyes were puffy and red, but most of all they were heavily glassed over. Kid, can you hear me? His eyes didn't even move, he just blinked slowly. And God did his chest ache at the sight. With one agile hand he took his phone and called his husband. Phone trapped in between his shoulder and ear to use both hands trying to figure out how to get him out of the leather and metal lock. At the second rig he picked up. Shoo, what the hell? I'm worried over here. Why did I have the kid. He is completely dissociated and I mean gone. He swallowed hard. Zashi, I know this is hard on you, but he has a muzzle on and I need your help. If you don't want to CH, I am 3 minutes away. Is he hurt? His voice had turned serious, and God, if he wasn't the best for it? I think so. He couldn't stop his voice from trembling. He just couldn't get the damn thing off. Okay, stay with him, I'm bringing the car and calling Tsukachi. And the line went dead. As he waited for his husband, he tried making a quick check for other wounds. He decided to let the muzzle alone so as to not pull on it and risk more damage. But in his state, the kid didn't react to his touch at all, and he finally picked him up. He was just so light and small that he was making the conscious effort to not move him too much, fearing hurting him further. At the 3-minute mark, Hisashi parked the car very illegally on the sidewalk, slamming the door open and running towards them. He tried to hide the flinch at the sight of the muzzle and just opened the passenger door for them. At Aizawa's signal, he also took the yellow backpack and put it in the back seat. Once in, Hisashi drove straight to the hospital, no questions were asked, and Aizawa couldn't help but notice that at some point the kid had grabbed the end of his scarf as if his life depended on it. It was going to be a long and painful night. The second they went through the hospital door, everything went too fast and too slow at the same time. The kid didn't let go of Aizawa's scarf at any moment, forcing the men to follow him to get checked and tested. The view of doctors running around the kid was not pleasing at all, but the fact that he didn't react to his environment until they were almost finishing the tests was way worse. Shouta asked for his husband to wait for Naomasa and to talk to him. The detective obviously needed to talk to him, but by going through Yamada first, he gained some time to stay with the kid and to get the muzzle off before risking putting him in a bad situation. They both needed to be at their best if they wanted to help the kid. By the time 3 nurses had managed to get the device off, they had taken a blood sample, and a doctor with an X-ray quirk came to check for any internal damage. The sight of his face in bright light and without the metal in it was awful. His cheeks had bloody scratches, and the bridge of his nose had a reasonable size cut that was most probably the source of the blood he had seen before. The rest of his body was not in any way in better condition. They changed him into a hospital gown, and even one of the nurses sucked air in as he saw his chest and back littered in mostly old scars, with exceptions of some in his shoulder that were probably a week or so old. His ribs were showing, and they were bruised too. One particular bruise stood out and made the hero's blood boil. One perfect bruise in the shape of a hand on his upper arm. It was obviously new, like those in his ribs, and yet the kid stood still as he was cleaned by the kind nurses, up until one tried to clean his hair in the sligless. Aizawa immediately catched the change in his eyes, first slowly blinking, then watering, and lastly rubbing his eyes with the scarf. It seems that was the last piece he needed to come back to earth, looking at the soft gray material with confusion. He stopped touching it as if it was insanely hot and looked around, still a bit sluggish. He was sitting in a hospital bed. His arm had a bandage, and a doctor was right behind him with some weird blue light coming from his fingers. The nurses also seemed to notice the change in behavior and proceed to leave the room to not overwhelm him. Aizawa was grateful for it. The kid's eyes started watering at full force while watching the doctor, fear creeping in his expression. Aizawa wasn't really one to reassure kids, especially not traumatized ones, but nonetheless he moved to his line of sight, offering his heavy scarf as playing material. The kid accepted the offer, careful as to not touch the owner. Just as his hand started feeling the fabric, his green eyes met black ones. "I in trouble," he signed. Aizawa held his breath a second, calmly shaking his head. Why would the kid think he was in trouble? Or was it just a poor use of sign language? "Could I talk to you for a second, Eraserhead?" The doctor unknowingly interrupted them. His fingers were already back to normal. He nodded, took off his scarf completely, and left it in the kid's lap, who just locked his hold onto it, a bit too strongly, he admitted worryingly. The doctor closed the door behind her and gave him the chart for him to see. He wasn't exactly sure why they gave him access to his medical records, but it made sense if there was no one responsible to make medical decisions for the kid. There are 2 broken ribs, an ankle sprain, and some scarring with the bruises you saw. Most definitely the result of some quirk. She started looking blue, not really worrying wounds, and normally we would heal it with someone's quirk, but she turned to see the door. The little square glass let her see inside if she took a step back. In this case, we cannot use any kind of quirk because he wouldn't be able to handle the drawback. He is severely malnourished, and by his breathing I am guessing he has some type of respiratory infection. The lab results should take a day or 2 at most. She saw the kid with deep sadness in her eyes. It's going to take a while before he is in good health, and then we can put his vaccines up to date. Do you have his vaccines records? He asked, confused. Yes, of course. He was born in this same hospital. There was no way. They have been in the hospital for maybe an hour and a half, and they had already figured out who the kid was. Aizawa started to quickly flip through the medical files. At the bottom there was his birth certificate. Izuku Midoriya. Rai. As in green. Part of his name was literally green. Fitting at least. He would take a copy to take home. He kept going through the pages and stopped at the date of birth. Wait, he is 6. The tired man couldn't help but to sound surprised. Yes, but he is severely underweight, and that probably didn't help him to gain any height either. The woman looked at him for a few seconds, as if thinking of her next words. I didn't find anything, but his mother is a nurse. She worked here up until last year, I think. I'm sorry, I can give you more to look into. That is plenty, thank you. Aizawa saw Mike across the hall. He was nervously smiling and came to his encounter, leaving Naomasa behind. The poor man was still in his pajamas and only with one hearing aid in. Probably because he was in a hurry to get them. His wedding band was on though. He automatically lost some tension on his shoulders at his sight. They always helped the other to be grounded. How is the little listener? Can I see him? Did he say something? He mumbled, moving his hands all around the place. The doctor looked at him stunned. She most likely couldn't recognize him out of his hero uniform. He is in good hands but has some recovery ahead of him. He settled instead of going into detail. He passed on the files and pointed to the door. Do you want to say hi? He is scared, so don't be funny. Mike looked at the doctor and she seemed to understand that they wanted to talk alone, so she went back in with Izuku, making sure the kid could see the hero from the little window. Aizawa had to admit it was adorable the way the kid looked at the window once every 30 seconds, pretending he wasn't looking but still softly petting the scarf in his lap. His eyes landed in Mike again, who looked, to put it lightly, suspicious. Mike had his eyes full of tears and his cheeks were getting red by the second, a huge contrast with his creepy smile. Eyebrows raised. Aizawa thought something was really odd. Maybe he was nervous. They took the thing off, he added, but the expression didn't change. It was getting weird. He has a little blood on the nose, but if you don't feel up to it, you don't have to meet him. There was a long silence that was giving Shouta a bad mouth taste. What kind of charade was he playing? Well, actually, yes, I do have to meet him. The declaration sounded odd, almost mischievous. And why is that? He was kind of used to his jokes and funny things, but it really didn't seem like the time and place. I love you, Zashi, but you can't be funny with the kid now. I really do hope you love me. A nervous laugh was all it took for Aizawa to know that whatever he was planning was already unstoppable. Because I just used my emergency foster license. You did what now? And they went home. Before leaving the hospital, the couple went to explain to the kid that he could no longer stay there and that he was going to stay with them until he got back on his feet. However, the doctor that was still in the room looked confused at the way Yamada signed away the kid. She took the other hero to the side and whispered, I'm sorry, Eraserhead, but are you sure the kid can understand that? It may be better if you explain the situation to him. That won't be necessary. Izuku knows sign language. We believe he could have been taught as a baby even. And he had to say, the name of the kid had a nice ring to it. Did something pop out on his physical exam? On his physicals? No, not at all. Are you under the impression he was born deaf? He didn't respond, just nodded. There wasn't really a reason to believe he wasn't. After all, he didn't respond to his name at all. But again, there was the possibility of him just not being able to communicate and learn for that reason. He wasn't born deaf or mute. We usually check for that matter when we see a muzzle, but it's not the case. I think I gave you all of his records, but I'll check that. After that, he was given some extra papers of medical exams he had at another hospital, a quirk specialist hospital. The first conclusion Aizawa had was that then the muzzle was quirk-related and there had to be something else as for what he knew sign language. But he was even more bewildered at the diagnosis he had at age 4. Quirkless. Attached to it was even the X-ray of his foot, showing the classic structure of a quirkless person's feet. What the hell was going on here? He could clearly remember the instance on the alleyway when he found him. There was no physical evidence of his quirk, but the hero would bet his hero license that the kid had won and that he erased it on that alley. He promised himself to talk to Hisashi about what was really happening with Izuku, but at another time. The way that the kid was looking at the loud hero was enough to not even be able to be mad at him for not talking about bringing him home before. He really needed a calm and safe space to stay at. And truth to be told, if the quirkless status was in his records, he was inevitably going to have a hard time in the foster system. The blonde had excused himself, saying that way the medical bill would be footed by his insurance and that he just needed a place to get his health back. Aizawa thought it could have been two things. One, he saw how Aizawa got attached to him. Two, he saw the kid in the muzzle and wanted to give the help he wasn't given. He hoped it was the first one. They had the space and the money to help the kid, and they had talked about kids. This would be a nice test to see if they would be up to adopting in the future. He just didn't want to admit that the idea of fostering this specific child made his heart tingle. The feeling only grew a little at the sight of the kid shyly grabbing the blonde hand to get off the stretcher. The way home was silent, and when they got there the kid was noticeably anxious, his hands pulling on his hair ever so slightly. Making the first step, Yamada entered first, turning all the lights on and giving the kid and ensuring a smile for him to walk inside at his own time. "How does dinner sound, little listener?" he added, singing and speaking at the same time, something he usually did when at home. The kid waited a minute or so, taking in the view of the place, then turning to Aizawa, who he was obviously more comfortable with. He didn't seem to find whatever he was looking for, because he looked again at the blonde and then at his shoes. Aizawa took that as an opportunity to try something. "Even if you are not hungry, you should eat a bit before going to bed, kiddo." His husband opened his mouth to say something but stopped when he saw the kid tear his eyes away from the floor to look at Aizawa. He then nodded slowly. So it was true. He wasn't deaf. Mike put two and two together and looked at his husband as if he grew a third eye. Well, technically he did tell him Izuku was deaf, but to his defense he actually thought he was when he told him. Aizawa stayed at the sofa with little Izuku while Mike made dinner. They both know how to cook, but with the dietary restrictions the kid had, it was better to leave it to him, who was much more experienced in the kitchen. They settled in one of the two lovebird sofas in the living room. He helped the kid up and surrounded him with chunky pillows to help him be comfortable due to his ribs, but the kid truly showed no sign of being in pain. Aizawa hoped that it was because of painkillers and not because of a buildup of pain tolerance. They ate dinner on the coffee table on the futon. Yamada made some simple soup and broth with some cooked vegetables that would be easy for the kid to digest, and for then he just added some red meat and noodles, not wanting to make the kid feel as if they were eating something better. He also put a white rice bowl in the middle of the table to see if the kid would want some. The second they started eating, the kid tried getting up, but Aizawa put a hand on his shoulder to indicate to him to sit back down. "At least try some. If your stomach is too upset, we can sleep after 3 bites, he said, maintaining his voice firm yet soft. He wanted the kid to know that he was to try things before refusing them, but that no one would force him into anything. The kid sat back down, looking confused at his plate and then at both of them. "If there is something you don't like in it, you can take it out," tried Mike, talking, needing to experience firsthand the kid responding to sounds. "I eat now." The kid signed with adults. The couple look at each other. Was the kid raised differently perhaps? It was obvious then that the problem wasn't food itself, but the way it seemed to be presented or how they decided to go about it. "We usually eat together, yes," Aizawa simply stated. Effectively enough, the kid started eating. No one had the heart to say anything, but the kid was making an absolute mess of the table and the floor. Soup going into the rice, his clothes, hell, even one of the cats seemed to have a stain. He was doing his best, but he didn't want any help and his hands were heavily shaking, and the way he used the spawn proved to not be efficient. There would be time later to teach him that. He wasn't able to finish the whole soup, and God did he try. He poor kid was absolutely stuffed with only half a bowl and no rice. Aizawa was warned that the kid would only be able to stomach a little as he was used to eating little to nothing. But that didn't help the feeling that he was letting him starve through the night. Hazashi had absolute heart eyes when he cleaned Izuku's mouth with a napkin. The kid just let him do whatever, kind of trying to hide the fact he was cleaning the floor with his t-shirt when they were taking the dishes to the kitchen. They helped him to take a bath, but at that point the food had settled and he was half asleep, so much so that he let them try to wash out his hair as far as possible. It would take a lot of work to get rid of the matting, but for now they were happy enough with him not sticking the whole house. They would have to try again tomorrow with the kid a little more conscious. Funny enough, he was completely asleep by the time they slowly pat him down with the softest towel they had, making sure to not hit any delicate spots or sensible areas. Yamada almost started crying at the sight of the kid's back. A huge burn scar going from shoulder to shoulder. It was healed but horrible to see in a kid nonetheless. Sadly, because of the emergency situation, they didn't have a room ready for the kid and they didn't want to put any kind of pressure by making him sleep with them. So they settled in all of them sleeping in the living room with lots of blankets and pillows, and tomorrow they would have the time to put a room together. At the end of the night, the couple made a small nest of blankets and pillows for the already unconscious kid to rest in. Aizawa thought that the frown in his sleep made him look older, and Yamada thought that it didn't really pair up well with his baby fat he still had in his cheeks. But even with a heavy heart, they were able to fall asleep too, in the comfort of finally knowing the kid had a good place to stay in, and people that would do anything to care for him. Izuku was so confused. He really didn't understand very well how he landed in his current situation. But he didn't have the courage to say or do anything about it. President Mike told him that he needed someone who would take care of him and that he was going to live with Eraserhead and him for a while. He said it really nicely, and Izuku was going to leave his house anyway, so he decided to not say anything about it. The first day went on so fast that he barely remembered anything at all, but the second day made things a little more real. Aizawa told him that they arranged a room for him and that he needed to stay on a rest bed most of the time for the following days. He couldn't fathom the idea of him staying so still for so long, but agreed anyway because adults knew better. It seems they decided that he needed surveillance since they would come in every few minutes to bring things or talk to him. Izuku was so very glad to finally meet someone who knew sign language. It made things so much easier. They were really kind too. They gave him food and a pill that took the pain away and even talked to him. They made sure that he understood that they were going to take care of him and that he could tell them if he liked, disliked, needed anything. He wouldn't dare to ask for anything, but was incredibly happy to know he still had his backpack. Mike helped him unpack and clean how little he had, and even asked for permission to wash his clothes and backpack. Through his hero analysis notebooks, Mike learned he liked heroes and asked if he wanted to be one when he grew up. Izuku didn't answer. Sensing the tension after the question, he continued talking about how many heroes he knew and that, if Izuku wanted, he would look for some videos of himself in action for him to look at. He was surprised to learn he was also a hero. He didn't know heroes could have other jobs, and he decided to wait until the videos to learn about his quirk. That way he would not annoy the adult. Yamada, on the other hand, wasn't so happy. They gave 2 weeks for hero work, but I can leave my own radio station. He babbled on his husband's shoulder. I can get some things from the market on the way if you want to. It will only be 2 days a week and we can. I told you it's fine, Zashi, the underground hero said. I'm not going to die for being a few hours alone with him, repeated. I'll miss him already, he pouted. He is really quiet though. Do you think he is okay? He looked pretty distressed when he woke up. It will probably take him a while to get used to things. They both nodded. The kid woke up well into the evening, the exhaustion getting the best of him. It took him a while to remember where he was, and after eating just a tiny bit of pudding he was out again as if he didn't just sleep for 14 hours. Now the kid was on his room surrounded by pillows. Mike was in the room with him for an hour or two and took notice about how polite and silent he was. It took a great effort of him to keep his volume at a minimum to not scare him, and it took a lot more to not overwhelm the kid with questions. For God's sake, the little listener was living with him and he didn't even know his favorite color. He calmed himself down. The kid wasn't going anywhere and needed to take things slowly. There would be plenty of time to get to know each other. The other thing was that there were a ton of things they needed to do for the kid's sake, but the fact he didn't talk would make things harder. In the first instance, they needed the kid to make a statement just to clarify some things, and Naomasa's quirk wouldn't work if he did not give a verbal answer, which takes us to the next point. They needed to figure out why the kid didn't talk at all. He knew sign language. That meant that he didn't talk for a while at least. The medical examination determined that his vocal cord, throat, and ears were perfectly fine. If anything, his ear worked even sensible to sounds, listening better than the average kid his age. Aizawa explained to his husband about the night he found him, about how he felt some type of quirk in the air and how he was able to erase whatever it was. There was the option of selective mutism, but even that is normally caused by something else, and Shouto was sure that it was quirk-related. He insisted on taking Izuku to a quirk specialist. But was it really possible for him to have a quirk with the proof they had that he was quirkless? Mike had the theory of a secondary quirk, but that didn't erase the X-ray that said otherwise. They would give the kid some time first. Then when he felt more comfortable and needed some checkups, they could take him to a specialist. Mike went to the radio station and promised to be home as soon as possible. But it would be at least a couple of hours in which he intended to make the kid comfortable with his presence. The kid in question was in his room trying his best to reach for his coloring pencils without making a face. It was likely that he was still in pain even with the medication. So Aizawa handed them to him and saw him drawing some hero he didn't know. Hey kiddo, how about I clean a little while you do that? Izuku looked up, the cuts on his nose and cheeks looking nasty. We don't want it to get worse, right? He just nodded, and Aizawa made it his mission to clean him up. By the looks of it, one of the cuts was probably at least a bit infected, so he put some cream on that one and simply cleaned the others. Being that close to the kid meant being able to see just how uncomfortable he was with someone touching him at all, and the contrast to how he flinched in the hospital made him feel closer to him. He also wanted to work on his hair, but was afraid of pushing his boundaries as he would not refuse anything. You have really pretty hair, he started, trying to be calming. Izuku responded something that Shouta didn't quite catch. Can you say it again? Is like mom's. He signed and then touched it, feeling firsthand how mad it was. Like his mother, huh? Well, at least he now knew how the woman's hair looked. Kind of. He would willingly omit the part where Naomasa was working in order for his parents' arrest. He didn't need to know that yet. It is a little messy, don't you think? He started putting the creams and first aid kit supplies away. Would you like me to brush it? The kid immediately shook his head and Aizawa suppressed a heavy sigh. Before he could even think of another trick for the kid to let him do something, he saw Izuku grab one lock of hair and uncurled it, seeing how far it went. Surprisingly enough, it went even below his neck. The kid then made a scissors sign and pretended to cut it. You want to cut it? The surprise was palpable in his voice, only receiving a strong nod in return. I can't do it, the little one frowned. But I have a friend that cuts her own hair. We can ask her to do it. Another nod. Sooner rather than later they would have to tell Nimuri and their other friends that they suddenly had a kid to take care of. And if the kid wanted a haircut and Nimuri could help, then so be it. Even better, Tensei had a little brother his age. It would be a great opportunity to introduce them. He just hoped that wasn't pushing it. Surprisingly enough, the time with him flew away, the kid being mesmerized by the TV and constantly just changing channels as if the buttons were more interesting than whatever was on the kid's channels. By the time Aizawa finished making dinner, Mike came through the door with a huge smile on his face. Welcome home. I'm home, he sang, his laptop in his hands. I brought videos for the little listener. He said he likes heroes, so I want him to see my debut video. It will be adorable. He bit his lips in an effort to keep his voice down. You can show him after dinner, go wash your hands. And they did. They ate dinner next to the kid's bed so he wouldn't have to get up, and after they ate they set up the computer to watch Mike's debut as a hero. Funny enough, that triggered a domino effect. Mike pressed play. It wasn't an immediate response. The video started just fine with some minor appearance of Mike in the background. He had been a flashy student and already had some following during his student years because of the radio station he and some others made in UA, so when he debuted there were already people wanting to watch the voice hero. The video was filmed by the media. It was a low-class villain too, so the level of violence shown was about right to show a 6-year-old, no blood, no gore, no deaths involved. So the couple was not expecting Izuku's reaction at all. He seemed excited at first, but the second Mike used his quirk, everything changed. The kid flinched hard. The sound wasn't that loud either. Shouta made sure to lower the volume of the video, so why? Izuku's eyes started watering, and in a mere second he was crying a whole waterfall. He closed his eyes and covered his ears. The plate he used a few minutes ago ended up on the floor when he tried backing up to get away from the electronics. He was having a complete meltdown, his cheeks full of tears, and somehow he remained quiet. He was biting his lips pretty hard and soon felt a metallic taste fill his mouth. While Mike shoved everything aside. Are you all right there, little Liz? He was stopped on his tracks. Both tiny hands were quickly moved to cover the blonde's mouth. His eyes showed a silent plea for him to not say anything. Still crying profusely and shaking his head, the room stayed silent. Yamada didn't remove his hands, and instead stayed still, looking confused but calm nonetheless. Aizawa moves both hands up, letting him see every movement to not surprise him. He then signed. He is not going to scream. But Izuku wasn't watching him. He was watching Yamada, not even blinking. So Aizawa persisted, this time talking and hoping for a better reaction. He is not going to scream, kiddo. He then turned to look at him, utter terror on his face. Both pro-heroes noticed how Izuku was looking at his ears, searching for something that wasn't there. When he decided that his ashi wasn't going to just explode, he let him go, his hands shakingly retrieving from his face. I won't talk, Yamada signed, not feeling confident enough to say anything. The kid was still crying, hyperventilating even. He was moving his hands from one side to another, not finding the correct one. So his finger spelled C-U-R-S-E. Both adults in the room looked at each other, not really knowing what to think. Yamada knew not to take it to heart. Izuku was so young after all. Aizawa thought about that word, trying to make sense of the situation. But at the moment, calming the kid down was more important. He was crying hard enough for him to worry about his breathing, his injuries probably aggravating the issue. He moved to be even closer to him, placing a tiny hand on his chest and his larger one on top. Copy my breathing, okay. For a second there he was sure the kid would pass out from lack of oxygen, but after some minutes he was breathing slower and his sobbing was softer. Can you tell us what is wrong? His voice was so soft that it was barely audible. Izuku took his time again, clearly still recovering from all the crying, but then looked at Yamada, who had a soft expression. For once he didn't feel the need to hide to cry, and although it was something good, he wished to stop crying at all. He tried explaining something that not even he knew for sure, so he made it simple. You see URSE and I see URSE. He then ended the sentence by pointing to his ears and making the sign for blood. As if that statement wasn't creepy and concerning enough, he then proceeded to put one finger to his lips as if it was something to keep a secret. What the hell was that all about? How do you even respond to it? Did this kid's parents tell him horror stories before bed or something? Because whatever was going on was really nightmare material. For what felt like an eternity, no one said anything. Izuku was looking awkward and moved towards Yamada, crawling into his lap and forcefully giving him a hug. For the outsiders, it was really obvious that Izuku didn't want that kind of interaction, almost as if he was doing it for Mike and not for himself. Was he somehow trying to comfort him? He decided to simply accept the very weird hug and hug him back, looking up at his husband and mouthing a very alarmed OMG. His eyes so open that they would pop any second now. Aizawa waited, deeply disturbed by whatever was going on. He used the 3 minutes that hug lasted to plan what to say next. Kid, do you know what my quirk is? Izuku, who was now a lot calmer but still a little shaken, didn't respond. I can erase people's quirk. He pointed towards the voice hero, including his quirk. Do you know what his quirk is? This time Izuku seemed to put 2 and 2 together. Quirkless, well, that was even more confusing. Quirks and quirkless. He is not quirkless, Izuku. What you saw is his quirk. He could almost see the gears working in his head, so focused that for once he stopped crying. Do you know what this curse you talk about is? Where did you hear that? He saw a frown growing on the kid's face. Pure confusion, unconsciously still fingers pulling curse. Was it that ingrained in his brain? Mom said I have Quirks. Yamada's face turned grim, as if hearing the news of the kid being poorly treated was personal. It was just at that moment that he realized before his husband what the kid meant. Everything laid out so clearly in front of him now. Maybe he even had more answers than questions. He wanted to say so much, but he decided to test where they were at. Trying so hard to put his own grief and pain aside, he looked at the kid tenderly. Izuku, he said, voice a very soft whisper. The kid was alarmed but didn't try anything this time. You can do that too. He pointed to the computer on the ground. If you can do that, it's not a curse, baby. The term of endearment just did the trick. The kid started producing some fat tears again, and the sight was just so heartbreaking because he refused to let them flow freely. It's just a quirk. No Quirks. He didn't seem all that sure, but he also was trying so hard to have an explanation, anything that would give him a chance in life. There are no curses, honey. And his own eyes filled with tears too. It's just that some quirks are hard to control, that's all. By that time the kid was already beginning to sob again. I don't think you are quirkless either, kiddo. Aizawa tuned in, slowly guiding his hand to his head. The kid didn't even notice him patting his head. That night I found you, he began, testing the water. I was able to erase something. And I think you felt it too. He looked at him, a half smile as he scratched his matted hair. I can only erase quirks, and I think that was one. No quirkless, he said, his facade falling apart. These were almost strangers in his eyes. Why were they so soft, so kind? Why did no one else talk to him like that? I don't think so, no. He paused, not wanting to give the kid the wrong idea. But even if you were, you are not cursed, Izuku. The kid started trembling so hard that for a second he thought he was about to have another meltdown. To his surprise, the kid looked at him, eyes full of tears and a dream looking right through his soul. He could finally say his question. I can be a hero too. The answer was just in front of his eyes. But he wanted to hear it. He wanted someone to believe in him as he believed in Kaken. He wanted someone to tell him that getting to 30 was not as far as he could get. He wanted someone to tell him he could do anything he put his mind into. Yes, Bunny, Yamada responded, no lie in his eyes. You too can be a hero, added Aizawa. And like that, they all melted into a hug that lasted far longer than it took for the kid to calm down. He knew then that with this people's support he too could be a hero. The next few days were rough. Izuku's health was still fragile, and putting more stress on top of it was not exactly recommended. The next day he woke up with a fever, and when they called in to inform the doctor that saw him, they were informed of his blood test results. Maybe the path of recovery was slightly longer than they thought. As suspected, Izuku had a lung infection, and although it was something to not take lightly, it was treatable with some antibiotics. Antibiotics that were making things a bit harder. His stomach was delicate enough, and with the antibiotics he could barely eat anything. After an inspection, it seemed that the apartment Izuku was living in had some nasty fungus, and using that as evidence, the detective added child endangerment to the charges his parents would face. He couldn't just yet add child abuse, as Izuku couldn't give a statement. On top of being bedridden, the poor kid was really anxious. He seemed a lot more comfortable around Aizawa, but there was a little bit of panic in his eyes every time Mike raised his voice to anything higher than a whisper. So for now the bloat had to limit himself to whispering in sign language, as frustrating as it was. The first 3 days on the new medication he would puke almost anything he ate, and his fever was going down so slowly they were taking his temperature almost every hour. They decided to bring the recovery girl for a second opinion on day 2, but she also said that as long as the temperature didn't go up, the kid would be okay. Recovery girl gave them the number of a nurse she knew whose quirk was quirk perception that would let them know without 1,000 tests what Izuku's quirk was and how it worked. She also congratulated them on the kid. None of them had the heart to say it was a temporary foster situation. On day 4 though, the kid looked better, his fever went down a lot and he was able to eat half a plate of rice and soup. His mind also seemed to be less fogged and he even had the energy to ask for his hero's notebooks. At day 5 the couple thought it was time to bring the cats back. They had 2 fluff balls, who were staying with Nimuri under the excuse of the house is being fumigated. It was also a good time to talk to Nimuri and ask for that haircut too. At this exact moment Hisashi was outside the apartment trying to calm Nimuri on the phone. If she was any louder his hearing aids would just explode. "What do you mean you suddenly have a kid?" she yelled again, as if he didn't just explain the situation 3 times. "Why am I just finding out?" He parted the phone from his ears a little and let out an awkward laugh. It was unexpected. And well, of course it was called an emergency foster license for a reason after all. "You can meet him now, but we have to keep things calm if we wa. As if I'm asking for permission. I'll be there in 10 minutes. And the line went dead. Oh no. Oh no no no. Before anything he would have to make Shouta wait for her. She would listen to his grumpy ass. They really loved Nimuri, but he could be a lot to handle and there was no way in hell they would let her come in screaming and wanting to hug a kid that needed help to get up to go to the bathroom. If Mike already had a hard time keeping his voice low, he couldn't imagine how bad things could go if anything went wrong. They can't afford the kid having another meltdown now that he is finally getting better. As expected, she was there as fast as her crappy car allowed her to be. The cats were in their kennels and looked as amused as Nimuri. Shouta was waiting for her, letting the cats in before explaining in detail the situation of the kid. He made sure to answer every question so she won't ask him. He went step by step saying what was acceptable and what not and warning her to not take it personal if Izuku didn't like her, especially if they asked her to leave before things escalated. They really wanted her to meet him, but they had to put him first. After a conversation that was way too long for her liking, she was allowed in. She went to the door the couple indicated and let a big breath out. Obviously excited about the news and meeting the little human. She knocked twice and went in, fully aware of the fact the kid wasn't going to answer. Inside, Izuku was covered in a thick quilt that didn't even let his eyes out. He was completely under the covers and the big lump in the bed was just the funniest way the hero could think of meeting her friend's kid. She stayed there, close to the door, waiting for a signal to come in or go away. She told herself she would accept whatever, but she really wanted the kid to like her. After a minute of two bright green eyes popped out, curiosity getting the best out of him. She understood then what made Shouta soft enough to let a kid into his own home. "Oh Lord, aren't you the cutest thing on earth?" She had to hold an excited squeal before it could scare him off. "Your eyes are really pretty." Izuku didn't respond. He just felt his cheeks hot all of a sudden, but did not try hiding again either. "I am Mike's and Shouta's friend. Do you mind if I come in?" Izuku looked at her and then behind her, where Shouta was standing. After a half smile from him, he nodded and came out of the covers. At first glance, Izuku didn't look too amused at the sight of another person, but with a little distraction and baby talk he was won over. He really didn't say much, as Nimuri was not really familiar with sign language, so the whole time it was more about her talking and coloring some pictures of a coloring book she somehow brought with her. Izuku loved her stories about being a hero. She was even kind enough to not let any sexual or inappropriate jokes slide in. Surprisingly enough, the X-rated hero turned out to be great with kids. Izuku's eyes said it all. He was enchanted by her. Her nursing rhymes and her soft laugh made her the perfect nanny for the future. At some point in the afternoon, Izuku tried getting the courage to ask for that haircut again. But before he could express it, Aizawa asked Midnight if she was willing to do it. Mike, who was settling the cats in their master room until the kids' lung situation was resolved, started to get things ready for the haircut, wondering if it would be taking it too far by taking one strand of hair to mark it as his first haircut. "Are you sure you are happy with cutting your hair?" Shouta asked again. He knew how some people are attached to it. "We can stop any time. Just tap my hand twice and we stop, okay?" He nodded, and in that moment everyone in the room had the feeling that for the kid this was more than just a haircut. They settled the station at his room. He was doing better and there was no intention of him getting hurt by moving too much. A towel around his shoulders, some scissors, water in a spray bottle, some cream for his curls, and a brand new detangling they got for this occasion. Midnight was just as excited to be part of this core memory as the kid was about it all. "I'll be so gentle you won't even notice," she said, starting with the water and detangling cream, softly humming a melody that made Izuku's nervous melt away. Aizawa was impressed by the confidence she had while doing her hair. Her hair was straight after all, but her hands showed expertise. Izuku was incredibly calm during the whole process, even letting the tiniest smile show. Shouta was the only one that made the connection about his hair. Even though it was far-fetched, he knew the kid was used to his mother being the only one touching it. And the fact that Nimuri was doing it so easily told a story of the kid being more used to feeling safe in female company. It made him a little jealous that he would never admit, but he held on to the memory of the kid hugging first, of him allowing a soft head pat. That was enough for now. Healing is a process, he reminded himself. The nursery songs were soon shared by Nimiri's and Mike's voice, both making a silent agreement to keep it soft and calm, no lyrics involved. At that second his heart ached in a familiar way. The sight of the kid surrounded by his husband and close friend, it just felt right. He found himself not thinking of the kid as something temporary. He found himself just wishing to keep things like this a little bit longer, an eternity longer if possible. It was the beginning of his third week with the married couple, and with some quirk-related help he was now able to walk around the house and meet the cats, Princess and Bastard. For the names you can probably guess who named who. Princess was, as expected, all over the kid, no questions asked. She was getting really chubby too, so if the kid woke up one day and couldn't breathe because she laid on top of him, well, she didn't look like she regretted it. Bastard, as his name implied, was being a brat. He made it his mission to follow the kid around and watched his every interaction with Princess. That was his lady after all. But well, we were game over with some treats and pets. Who could resist that anyways? In no time both cats named the kid their leader, sleeping with him and not letting anyone get too close without a warning. Which takes us to the current situation. Both Aizawa and Mike had made arrangements to keep the kid as far away from the hospital and police station as possible, which led to another visit from Recovery Girl with the nurse she once talked about. Asami, the pink-haired nurse that once studied under the guidance of Chiyo, was super happy to be invited to the house of her favorite radio station host. She even got an autograph out of it. Asami's quirk was quirk perception, which allowed her to know another person's quirk and how it affected their body. Contrary to popular belief, it was very useful for her profession. Hello there, she immediately greeted Izuku, who was grabbing Mike's pants for emotional support. Izuku, whose hair was now shorter but a lot healthier and fluffier, waved in her direction, looking at the Recovery Girl who was there before Asami and explained to him her quirk. They all made sure to let the kid know that since this was his quirk he was in full control of the situation, and that really made wonders to keep him calm. Your dad's already talked to you about what my quirk does, right? No one corrected her, just accepting it as a fact. Izuku looked up, his eyes rapidly going from Aizawa to Mike a few times. After reaching some conclusion he looked at her again and nodded. The practicing nurse sat on the ground, and although it was kind of odd, no one said anything. Great, let me tell you how it works then. She patted the ground and the kid didn't think twice before following her implicit instruction. It's quite simple. The only thing I need to do is touch your eyes. He seemed a little freaked by that and she giggled. Not open, I will just cover your eyes with my hands and then I will close mine too. She continued, making sure to use her kid-friendly voice and words that simplified the process. Then I will be able to read with my eyes closed some information about your quirk. Is that okay? Izuku watched her for a second, then turned to Mike and signed to ask something that the nurse was not able to understand, so she also looked at him for translation. He wants to know if it hurts, Aizawa said instead, seeing as his husband was looking more nervous about it all than the kid himself. Oh no, not at all. Although I do get a headache if I use it too many times. But don't worry, you won't feel it at all. Are you ready? He nodded again, excited and moving closer to her, giving her access to his eyes. Asami looked awkwardly at her former teacher and she laughed a little, looking through her purse for something. I always have them on me when we work together, she added, a bag of baby carrots being passed around. It's an activation requirement. They used to call her Cottontail when she was doing her internship with me. Even Shadow laughed at that and the poor girl became red while eating 2 of the baby carrots. Once everything was ready she smiled and put her palm on top of Green Eyes, not making any force nor pressure. She closed her eyes and the other 3 adults could see how for a split second her eyelashes and eyebrows were as green as the kid in front of her. After that they were pink once again. After a minute or so of them both staying in the same position she let go of him. The truth is that she was used to using her quirk multiple times at work, as she worked with kids and most of the time they didn't understand their own quirks yet. Sometimes she used it even to just help their parents keep calm. When she opened her eyes they went from being a light gray to the exact same color of Izuku's, as the quirk function was to understand the quirk as if it were her own, mostly to a body feel level. She couldn't really tell the specifics of how it would work in every situation, but she knew how it felt to have it. Oh, it's a really interesting one, the quirk you have there, she said, blinking until her eyes were back to normal. You told me you were under the impression it was a voice quirk, right? She asked, looking at the homeless-looking hero. It's actually a mental quirk. He can control sound waves basically. Doesn't matter if it is his voice, someone else's, or just a pin dropping. Any sound wave will do. Izuku looked excited, although he didn't fully understand what that meant. He was a bit distracted by her quirk. He really loved all quirks, and his just sounded so interesting too. You mean like turning the volume up or down? Not quite. You see, he can kind of tell the waves what to do, ranging from loud and silent, to redirect them and changing other things with sounds, like the sound vibration can make. She almost said earthquake, but at the last minute decided against it. things shake, moving them around or even forcing things to stay still. She looked back to the kid. Watching kids know about their quirks was something she loved. The joy in their faces and excitement was always adorable to watch. An amazing quirk for a hero if you ask me. She winked at him, knowing well that he once asked if he could be a hero. Izuku was almost vibrating from excitement. His face lit up and he ran up to Mike, making a sign that meant equal before pointing at him and then at Mike. The scene was so cute that the loud hero couldn't stop himself from tearing up. Aizawa took the initiative and proceeded to lift the little one up. He immediately understood that as an invitation to sit on his shoulders and started clapping. Probably the biggest energy boost he had since coming in. I always take a picture for the families that come in to know their kid's quirk, Asami said, getting up from the floor. Would you like one? Even before they could say yes, Hisashi was already moving Shouta to the middle of the living room to get better lighting. He smiled big and they waited until Izuku looked at the camera. Even Aizawa was smiling. Their first family picture once could say. After the picture was taken and Chiyo took another look at Izuku's health, they made their way out of the apartment, but not before Izuku could gift the nurse with a drawing of herself in a lab coat. She swayed to keep it safe until he was a hero so he would sign it. Asami made sure to let the adults know that Izuku's quirk was not one that was acquired for genetics or during birth, and to look out for him, for stress-induced quirks were a lot more unstable if anything. She didn't see any activation requirements or drawbacks, but no quirk had limited power. Shouta reassured her that whatever it was to come they could handle it. Who better for the job than two heroes, one with a voice quirk and one who could erase quirks. That night Izuku slept like a baby, maybe because of the old lady's kiss or because all the excitement wore him out. But either way he was put to bed next to his two guardian cats under the promise to go to the shopping mall the next day. His first outing. Yes, he really was in excellent hands. And if the next morning they had an interesting email, well, that was a coincidence. Totally. It was a special type of day. You see, to properly care for a kid you need things. Plenty of things apparently. The couple had managed quite well with what they had at home and with whatever they could ask of Recovery Girl or Nimiri. But now that the little problem child was well enough for going out, it was time to get him some things. Truth to be told, the most excited person in the car was the driver. Mike was shivering at the mere idea of buying their kid things. He really wanted to spoil him. The kid deserved it anyways. Being both heroes as they were, they had a nice trust fund, and were willing to use most of it now. They were established already, so money wasn't a problem. However, Aizawa made Hisashi promise to not buy things just because. At the very least the kid had to like it. There was no use in decorating his room if Mike liked it, but he didn't. It was his now. No more a guest room. The day actually began when Aizawa woke up to an email from Nezu, his principal from his and Mike's school days. The rat, dog, bear had somehow that they were finally getting some use out of their emergency foster license and wanted to know their little special kid. He also had some offer to make to both of them. Although Shouta was terrified of what Nezu meeting Izuku could imply, he knew that it would be good to get a recommendation letter from him to get the kid into school. At some point it was bound to happen, but he didn't think Izuku was quite ready yet. He thought about a special needs school, but it would probably be a bad idea if they wanted to get him talking again. They would wait patiently, and even if it did not happen, it was worth the try. He needed exposure to people out of his comfort zone. Not yet though. They arrived at the mall at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday, just to ensure that there wouldn't be a ton of people. It was his first outing after all. The greenie seemed a lot happier since realizing he had a quirk, and although Shouta was happy he wouldn't have to go through the hardships of being quirkless, he was also a bit sad that his happiness depended on it. He is a smart kid, but he was probably berated for being quirkless and then for being quirked. He had it rough and he deserved the happiness he had now. Shouta just wished he never had to through it in the first place. Maybe he could ask Nezu for quirk consulting. A stress-induced quirk would definitely needed it. They stopped at the closest parking space. The mall was semi-empty, but they could still notice the kid getting nervous by the second. Shouta turned back to talk to Izuku, who was struggling with the seatbelt. Maybe they needed a car seat. At what age do kids stop using those? Izuku, he called to get his attention. We are here to get you some necessary things, and some not so necessary things, his husband added, interrupting him. Anyways, he black-haired man sighed. That means that if at any point you want to leave, we leave. Okay. Izuku opened his mouth, then closed it and nodded. Weird. Same goes for things. If you see something you need or want, let us know. He nodded again, and then they got out of the car. They started with the absolute necessities. A few sets of sheets, cleaning supplies, and personal hygiene. Hisashi went a little insane in the clothes and had to be reminded that the kid had the final word. At some point they noticed that the kid didn't ask for anything, and later on discover him watching price tags on the things they asked him to try on. It was heartbreaking to know the kid saw himself as an expense and would just not pick anything for himself. They gave him a pep talk that only seemed to work for 2 items, so they paid close attention to what he would touch or look at for a bit longer. It also seemed to help if they got something for themselves too. They got him a bit too many clothes, but it couldn't be helped. He barely had anything that wasn't borrowed from the heroes, and it melted their hearts seeing him smile in other heroes' merch. A real fan per se. As they were looking at different types of shoes, it took them both by surprise to see the kid looking fondly at some glittery red conky shoes. They were clearly marketed at girls, but it seemed he just enjoyed red shoes in general, as it was mostly the color he looked at. When asked if he wanted to try them on, he pretended he didn't know what they were talking about. So Hisashi had to get a matching glittery yellow pair to get him to understand that there was nothing wrong there. Shoes are just that, shoes. And if Shouta felt left out and got black ones too, well, time went on insanely fast after that. It seems that glittery family shoes got the no judgment message across. They decided to make a stop to eat something near the smaller shop side. Something catched Izuku's attention, so badly so that he took off running, scaring the absolute shit out of them. Not that a kid was in any way faster than two pros, but still. After following him, it was kind of funny to see him so excited at a small merch store. It looked like general merch too, not just hero-related, and the shop window didn't exactly look especially interesting for kids, so it was hard to know what grabbed his attention. He stayed in front of it until they both caught up to him. He had a shiny look on his face and politely asked to go in. There was no discussion there. With that expression, Shouta was sure the kid could ask for the whole shop and Mike would sell the car if necessary to buy it. Izuku went in and didn't even pretend to look interested in the things. He went straight to the counter and climbed on top of it, clapping a few times on a weird repetitive pattern. 1 2 1 -2 -2. Izuku. Nick was the first one to react. He took him by both armpits and held him up, letting him rest in his hip. We can't go climbing in stores, honey, he added, looking embarrassed. 1 2 1 -2 -2. The same pattern of clapping was heard from the back, and heavy steps were followed by the apparition of an old lady. The lady looked around and his eyes shone in tears at the sight of the kid. Izu, good lord, I thought something happened to you. She quickly walked up to them, and the kid struggles to get out of Mike's embrace. Oh my, you look amazing. And hello there. She fixed her glasses and watched the confused couple. I'm Nima, nice to meet you, and you are. They both had to admit, it was definitely odd to see a woman so old looking at them with such mistrust. Was she someone from Izuku's life before he started living with them? We are his foster family. Even weirder was Mike sounding unsure of himself. We are Izuku's parents, and what a surprise those words are coming from the underground hero. May we ask, where do you know Izuku from? The lady, Nima, took a look at Izuku. The kid looked healthier and so happy there was no denying he had a deep affection for those men, let alone the fact that they had bags full of kids' toys and clothes. Oh Izu, I'm so happy for you, hun. And she truly looked the part. God, she looked about to burst into tears even. Last time I saw you was what? 2 months ago. Izuku smiled and the lady touched his hair affectionately. That alone showed a deep trust from the kid. Your hair is so soft now too. I'm sorry if I was rude. Would you like to have some tea? And it was nice, so really nice to know someone from his past life who talked about Izuku on a personal level. It really gave them some perspective about what his life was before them. They learned something that hospital or police records didn't have. And it was the first time they suspected the abuse he suffered was not only from his home life. That day they learned about his former school. And about someone else. Kaken, maybe Nezu could actually help with more than a recommendation letter. On Saturday the family of 3 went to UA. Nezu was rather clear on how he wanted the meeting to be. At UA, on a no-school day, and most importantly, both adults and Izuku had to come. Aizawa politely tried convincing him that there was no point in bringing Izuku, but the mouse, bear, dog principal would not give in to his demands. He also asked for a bit of milk, as he had run out of it the day of and wished to have some tea for them all. Aizawa cursed as a sailor, but ended up just making a quick stop for the damn milk anyways, murmuring, what am I, the effing milkman? Mike was not pleased when Izuku asked what effing meant. They all went by car, and the kid seemed to be under the impression that he had to dress his best, for he was wearing black pants and a t-shirt that the couple found hilarious. It just had the word fancy suit on it. Izuku didn't have a proper suit, but well, there are not many occasions where a 6-year-old would need one anyways. They got there, as early as it would be to wake up a young kid. It was 9 a.m. and Mike had the suspicion that Shouta had barely had an hour or two of sleep. He couldn't even imagine how it would be when he had to go back to patrol the streets next Monday. They would probably have to make a schedule on how to take care of Izuku as they both worked at weird hours. Well, that is why they need the recommendation letter anyway. The huge doors automatically opened when they got too close with the car, and they were all a bit nervous. Izuku to see the magnificent institution and his principal, and the couple at the thought of Nezu meeting their kid. The non-human was insane and there was no denying it. They just hoped it was curiosity for the adoptee and not a plan for some weird experiment. They took longer than expected to get to the office, giving Izuku the time needed to take the view in and ask his question. He was told that the principal was not human but that he had human-like intelligence, so he wasn't really sure what to expect from the situation. He just hoped to one day be in the same halls as a student and not a visitor. He knew he was smart enough for the support course, but with the discovery of his quirk he hoped to be a great hero student. The office was obviously built for the comfort of the short animal-like principal, so no one said anything when the door handle was just at the perfect height for the youngest visitor to open. Inside, Nezu was waiting very casually next to the teapot. Too casually. Oh, just in time. Please come in. He adjusted his tie and started pouring in 3 cups. I take it you are the famous Izuku. A nonchalant smile towards the boy and he sat behind his desk. It is so refreshing seeing someone so young in this institution. Next to pro heroes trained here too. Wonderful. Please make yourself comfortable. They all sat in the places Nezu had indirectly assigned them by putting their cups to. Izuku took a bit longer to understand what he was seeing, but then decided that it was rude to stare at the creature for too long and sat himself to some hot chocolate in front of him. Shouta put the milk in the middle of the desk, clearly annoyed. Glad to see you doing well, Nezu. Long time no see. Mike interrupted the odd silence. This cutie here is Izuku, yes. He doesn't talk, so please fee. No worries, I'm well aware. The smile as he took a sip didn't do anything to amend the strange feeling his knowledge left on both heroes. I'm sure you are here because you need help re-enrolling him in school, am I correct? Basically yes, Shouta intervened sincerely. And we would like to know what you actually had in mind when inviting us here. Oh please Aizawa, no need to get so serious. I'm just curious about what you both have been up to after all these years. He took another sip before continuing. And of course take this opportunity to extend an invitation as hero teachers for both of you. If we didn't accept last year, why would we now? Shouta immediately added. He knew the job would actually be very beneficial for them and Mike especially had been very interested. Well, to be completely honest, you have a kid now. He started searching for something in a drawer. And by educating some teens you could learn one thing or two about how to raise one. Not even mentioning how a regular day job could benefit a family environment. He took a whole folder and sat in front of a very confused Izuku. And why did you want us to bring Izuku for? Mike meddled in, trying to avoid the argument that every year they had via email. They could talk about the repetitive job position later. There was no need to expose the problem child to adult matters. And what is that exactly? Well, for what I know, little Izuku has a very interesting quirk. Aizawa's eyes flashed red for a second, staring intensely at Nezu in a type of warning. Over his dead body he would let the mouse experiment on his kid. If that was the case, the meeting was about to be cut short. Let's not get too agitated now, please. I hold a special place in my brain for small humans who have yet to develop. This folder holds all the information I have about students of all courses and years who have some type of sound quirk. I just thought it would be useful as a reference. Aizawa let slide the in my brain statement and went to grab the folder before Izuku. I rarely see this type of. He meditated his next words carefully so as to not create any extra doubts in the kid's mind. Exposure-based quirks. So with your permission, of course, I would like to give him my very own quirk counseling. This time it was Mike the one to feel the need to hide his little listener. Izuku was already too overwhelmed with all the quirk stuff to really understand what quirk counseling with Nezu could entail. Mike put an arm in between the rat and his son, unconsciously already refusing the offer, even if it meant to let go of the teacher's offer too. We are glad Izuku's quirk piqued your interest, Nezu, he said politely. But at the moment he doesn't need any type of extra exposure that could end up on a decline in his mental state. And maybe it was as rude as the blonde was willing to say. But he still held Nezu at a high standard and felt he owed him some respect. He is still a kid and we fully intend to provide him with a healthy childhood. That is our priority now. No one said anything for a second, turning his attention to Izuku, who was so casually playing with his cup of cocoa. He had a finger in the border of the plastic cup and he was really focused on how the contents of it were shaking in horizontal waves, not even realizing others in the room were watching him use his quirk without noticing. Aizawa tried deactivating his quirk and returning it in less than a second, proving in the way the kid didn't know how to reactivate it. He just took a sip then. The cocoa was cold now. Well, mind me, Nezu giggled. It looks like you might need it even if you don't want it. Aizawa sighed, exhausted at the mere idea. If it puts your minds at ease, I'm not against supervision. And well, you would be able to do so easily if you worked here. Touché. Now I'll give you time to think about it while we go to the next subject. You want to talk about Aldera Junior High and its preschool, right? The bear then lost his jovial smile, turning serious in a second. How about I take Izuku to see the support course inventions while you guys talk about this topic? I don't want to upset the little listener. And while Mike was being a bit selfish and not wanting to know the full details of what his little greenie had to go through just yet, he would do good in knowing when he didn't have to hide his reactions from the horror to Izuku. Shouta was the one that had access to the police reports so far, so he knew best anyways. When no complaints appeared, he held a hand out to a confused Izuku. who funnily enough went to say goodbye to Nezu by petting him. The principal just smiled awkwardly and waved. He would later explain to Izuku that you shouldn't pet people or whatever Nezu was. When the door closed and they were safe from peering ears, Shouta said his opening statement, "Burn that school down and I'll teach here." He would have to settle on something else. Apparently Mike was against arson, too much pollution, you know. Izuku had received his first ever invitation for a play date. Such exciting news did not go undercover. The play date was at a nearby park where no one bothered to go. It was Thursday morning when all the adults decided to reunite in said park. Nimari was the one to actually set the day and place, fully aware of how empty the park would be. Tensei had promised to take his younger brother and some snacks that Izuku would be able to eat. Mike and Shouta would take little Izuku and plenty of things to write on, as the brothers were also lacking in the sign language department. Mike was already so excited to see little Izuku interact with someone his age. He knew for a fact that little Ida was odd for a kid his age, but so was Izuku, so hopefully they would get along just fine. Shouta asked politely that Ida knew beforehand about the Greenie's speech impediment so that there would be no surprises. He also asked to know a bit about the other kid as to take something they would both enjoy to play with. Apparently they were both the logical type, so puzzles were a must. He added a fun fact coloring book for good measure. At this point in time, Izuku should have already started school after the break. But it was well decided that he would just study at home and re-enroll next year. That way he would have time to adapt and would only lose half a year of school. He would have no problem. Shouta was sure his kid was really clever after all. If everything went well, he might even consider taking him to Ida's school. The day was nice, the temperature around 20 and sunny. Mike put a bit too much sunscreen on his kid, but who could blame him? His freckles would probably multiply like crazy if he didn't. He was let to choose his own outfit, and to no one's surprise his sense of style was as bland as Shouta. It took a bit convincing for him to gather the courage to use his glitter sneakers. Shouta decided that there was no harm in sending a text in the group chat asking everybody to tell him they look nice. The kid needed a booster, and he would hold people at point pistol if it was what it took for him to be confident. At the end, the trio wore all glittery shoes and hero merch to the park. Nimari was nice enough to take them there. She was wearing a cherry sundress that covered a lot for her taste, but she knew it would match Izuku's red sneakers, so she wore it proudly. They got there a bit early, and Izuku was in such high spirits that asked for permission to play immediately. Permission given, he went straight to swings. All the adults looked confused as he pushed it instead of getting in it. Izuku knew how swings worked just fine. It's just that he was always the one pushing and not swinging, so he had yet to figure out how to push and hop in while still holding the force to swing without pushing. Ugh, physics is so complicated. What is he doing? A childlike voice catches them by surprise, mostly because of the serious undertone on it. The duo, as Nimari went to help the greenie out, looked down. A small and way too well-dressed kid looked at them, extending his hand out. "My name is Tenya Ida. It is nice meeting you." He shook hands with both confused heroes and then applied some disinfectant to his hands and passed it to Mike. "Hi there. Congrats you two for getting Izuku. Is that him?" Behind the funny little guy was his brother, who looked a bit embarrassed at the hand sanitizer thing. He was looking at the kid in the play area. "His hair looks like a handful, huh? Really cute. I believe those swings are designed to support kids and people under 100 pounds, said the smaller of the Ida family, looking at how somehow it was now Nimari being pushed by Izuku, barely even fitting in the kid's swing. "You want to tell her about the safety measures, brother?" "It's okay, Tenya. She is an adult. She could still get injured and we lack medical supplies at the moment." The older one sighed and just indicated to him to tell her himself, which he did. The couple were still contemplating how a 6-7-year-old was so eloquent. "Sorry about that. Sometimes I think he will be a politician," he joked, sitting next to a nearby bench. "So, how is life as a parent?" Mike let go of a squeal in his efforts to contain his excitement. Shouta just smiled warmly. "It cannot possibly get any better. He really is an angel." His eyes were dreamy when talking about his baby. "He is just so cute and smart. Last week he just randomly started making origami cranes and I took them all to the radio station. He really is adapting well, and so are we," added the hobo. "He has trouble going out and interacting with people, but we still hold hope of getting him to talk again." Tensei took the information in, grinning. "We got in contact with Nezu and he will help us to shut his old school down, but we have yet to find where his biological parents are." "MMHM, you guys think they will try to fight for custody?" Mike started to get uncomfy at that. He had yet to bring full adoption to the table and was hoping that Shouta was going for the same thing. To be honest, it was illogical to think it would be any other answer. He knew he was head over heels for the kid. Watching him behave like a father figure was just so beautiful that it made him wonder if he could have married the man any sooner, even though they married straight out of high school. "Doesn't really matter. We have an order for their arrest." Beautiful answer, really. Shouta also had to agree. Seeing Hisashi be so protective of their little one made him wish they had adopted sooner and created a new type of love for him he couldn't even imagine existed. God, they should renew their vows maybe. It would be adorable to have Izuku as a flower boy. Tensei moved a little to the left, the tension of how his friends were looking at each other making him feel a bit uncomfortable. For a second there he thought they were about to go to the public bathroom to continue things there. Oh God, get a room you two. Nimari came back, breaking their bubble and seeing them blush as teenagers that were caught kissing at school. I have to say, Tensei, I can't believe your little brother just lectured me. They all laugh at that, watching both kids awkwardly playing. It kind of looked as if the one with glasses talked non-stop and the messy hair one just listening, every now and then looking at his guardians nervously. In the playing area, Ida was explaining to Izuku the process behind the creation of the sand they were using in the sandbox. Izuku was listening, of course interested in his speech but a bit self-aware about him not being able to talk back. It had been long since he was frustrated because of his lack of voice. Sometimes he really wished to talk again, but it just felt as if his throat would shut down forever if he did. I am sorry in advance if I am being rude. The blue-haired kid interrupted himself, but I do understand you can talk, you just don't, right? Can I ask why? It was the first time his voice didn't sound with such high authority. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, he added, a bit afraid of scaring him off as he usually did with other kids. And that happened. Izuku got up and went straight running to his parents. He allowed himself to pout. His brother told him what 3 questions not to make. Why don't you talk? Why do you have 2 dads? What school do you go to? But he made one anyway. He wanted a friend but he was just so curious. Was him being curious too scary for other kids? Something touched his shoulder and he had to blink away as his eyes were getting teary. Behind him Izuku was standing with a journal in hand. He didn't left. He just needed to write down to tell him. He smiled at the relief. Maybe they could still be friends. My quirk makes my voice danger. He read aloud and resisted the urge to correct the last character. His quirk sounded dangerous and so very interesting. 2 questions of the 3 would be taking too much of a risk, he thought. Izuku changed the page and scribbled down something. What is your quirk? And that just did the trick for bonding those 2. Together they made an entry in his journal about his brother, even using pictures as reference to draw his hero costume. Izuku loved heroes and Tenaya, his brother. What a wonderful thing to have in common. Coming back from the park after lunch proved to be a task too hard for a tired 6-year-old with a full belly, but Aunt Nimari did wonders with her lullaby in the car. Mike obviously joined the cute song as Shouta held him in his lap while he slowly fell asleep for a nap. He just had such a beautiful day in the park he even got a friend. One that treated him so nice too. For the first time in way too long he relaxed completely, letting himself be washed away with sweet words and head pats. His head rested against Shouta's chest. Hearing his heartbeat was so reassuring in a way. He was there, this was all real, they all loved him and there was no dream to wake from. It was in that position that Shouta's heart almost gave out. The poor man almost had a heart attack because for the very first time he thought he was hallucinating. It was just a second and so very low only he was able to catch it. Izuku was humming along. The plan was simple. Aizawa had talked with Mike about Izuku humming the song in the car for maybe 1 or 2 seconds, and as he suspected he was the only one to hear it, he gave Mike a few minutes to cry his heart out. The poor man swore that day to put his hearing aids on their top volume, but could only handle it an hour tops. They decided against telling Nimari, as they guessed she also didn't notice, just to not give anyone high hopes. After that, Shouta talked to Mike about his plan. They talked about it in sign language, fearing Izuku listening. It felt wrong, but the idea was good. The plan was simple, really simple actually. It basically meant to stop worrying so much about scaring their little one. Once they were more relaxed, Hisashi would probably start accidentally using his quirk at home again. And as a consequence, Shouta would use his to cut him off. Simple. The idea was to simply show Izuku by example that there was no fear in using his quirk in a controlled environment, and that way maybe encouraging him to try talking. Mike was a bit scared of his little listener feeling overwhelmed though, so they would introduce him to their regular behavior slowly. The first time they let their guard down and happened they were cooking. Izuku, bunny, can you give me that can of dashi? Mike was cutting tofu to make miso soup. He was happy to finally be able to cook the same for the whole family. Little Izuku grabbed the can and made a sign. I open. It was impossible to not find adorable the idea of him trying to help in the kitchen, and Shouta thought that it was safe enough to give him the can opener as it was an automatic one. He would just have to put the can in it. He grabbed the can opener and was about to set it next to Izuku, who was drawing in the floor previous to grabbing said can. Before he could hand it over, they started hearing an odd scraping sound. Mike put a hand on his husband's shoulder, stopping him, carefully watching what Izuku was doing. He was rubbing the can against the floor. He truly was giving it his all, his tongue between his lips in concentration, and the adults were left standing stunned at the odd behavior. Finally, after maybe 2 whole minutes, he retracted the cannon with just a few taps against the floor. The can opened as if nothing. What the hell? Shouta couldn't contain the bad word when receiving the can from a smiling Izuku. He even noticed he was slightly agitated. Looking closely, he then understood that he wore down the sides of the aluminum so much that it ended up giving in an opening. Don't cuss. Izuku, how did you learn to do that? Still smiling, Izuku proceeded to simply indicate, if hungry I take cans. Aizawa wished he didn't understand what that entailed. Izuku was left alone long enough that learning to open cans manually was probably one of the only options he had to survive. He had forcefully learned how to take care of himself since no one else would. Aizawa had to swallow the knot in his throat and the ache in his chest. He made sure to not make the situation a huge deal and just crouched down with the can opener to teach him how to do it. He took another can and showed him how to put it in and to wait until it was done spinning. It is easier and you won't hurt your fingers that way. Excited at the sight of the spinning part, he shook his hands in the air and clapped happily. Shouta just gave him another can to try for himself. He just looked too cute to not allow him to. That is, Adoraa expectedly, so he was cut mid-sentence by his quirk being erased. His eyes only flashed red for a second, but it was more than enough. In less than that, Mike was looking worried sick and crouched down next to Shouta, looking behind him. There, covering his ears and eyes closed. Izuku hid himself as fast as possible under a cabinet. I'm so sorry, baby, he said, his voice guilty and so very soft. I got carried away. I didn't mean to scare you. The underground hero put a hand on top of the one covering the youngest one's ears. Everything is okay, kiddo. That is what my quirk is for. He seemed to react to that, taking both hands off and watching them, as if expecting for them to be bloody. They weren't, so he looked up, confusion and relief clearly showing in his factions. He watched them both and then analyzed Mike for a minute or so. No danger. No danger here. We are pro-heroes, remember? He seemed to grasp the concept, so he continued. There is nothing wrong with not having full control of a quirk, especially when the people around know what to do. The rest of the lunch and afternoon the kid remained silent and deep in thought. Mike was afraid that he had instilled a fear of not only his quirk but his presence too, but Izuku didn't run away from him, nor did he seem more distant. But Shouta was sure it was quite the opposite. He believed that he at least now had the tools to question what he previously knew, but it would be up to him to decide if he was ever comfortable enough to talk. He would never let anyone pressure his kid to do anything ever again. The blonde's fears melted away when Izuku knocked twice on their door that night, asking him specifically to read him a bed story. He held his emotions down to keep it casual. Maybe that way he would be able to do it every night. Shouta would fight to death for that spot though. He kept his voice down and soft, making funny voices when indicated and keeping up with the plot as well as he could. In what universe would he be expected to read Moby Dick to a 6-year-old kid? He could barely understand it, but it was his request, so he complied. It took around 20 pages for him to start snoozing off, his head falling slowly to the side. Mike put the odd book down and made sure Izuku was comfortable before covering him well and leaving the night light on. He even dared to give him a kiss on his forehead even as the kid still looked at him, his eyes closing sleepily and the smallest smile kind of saying goodbye for the day. The loud hero shut the door carefully so as to not wake him up again and pouted with his hands on his chest as he pushed himself away from the room and into the living room where his husband was. I think it might work, he said, getting closer. He was so adorable just now. I'm going to have cavities, I swear, not that I mind. The only answer he received was a half smile that didn't reflect on his eyes. Hey, there is something wrong. If it's about the quirk thing, we can drop it, hun. Mike sat at his side, grabbing his hands to give him some simple caring messages. It's not that, although I didn't particularly enjoy watching him get scared. He sighed heavily, giving him a short kiss and then looking back at his computer. Then, it's about the teaching job. We can still decline it. I believe Nezu will be willing to help either way. He really likes Izu. Shouta huffed and shook his head. Then what? I'm running out of options here. Naomasa sent me an email stating that they found Inko Midoriya. Oh lord, is she in custody then? What about Hisashi? He realized then that his husband was avoiding looking him in the eyes. Shoo, what is it? You are scaring me. They only found her head. For the next few days Mike had to step in with caring for Izuku. It wasn't as if Shouta was never there, but most of the time he had long and tiring shifts helping patrol and investigate the area where the head of Inko Midoriya was found. A week into the opening of the case, the missing body was yet to be found in Naomasa. Mike and Aizawa had decided to keep it under the radar until they had more information on it. It was already obvious that it would be a hard case, but keeping everything hidden from the kid just felt wrong in every possible way. It was his mother after all. But without information nor the body, they couldn't even make a proper burial, let alone answer whatever the kid may ask when he found out. They themselves had no answers, just one clean cut to the head. No sign of any trauma, no blood, no hard edges. The poor woman was decapitated post-mortem and in a place far away from the warehouse where she was found, since there was trace left of any blood or tools to indicate it happened there. She had been decapitated post-mortem, probably with a power tool or a quirk. The exam also revealed that she had most definitely died from oxygen deprivation, but that didn't rule out anything really. There was no smoke or trace of water in her nose, so they had as the best option manual asphyxiation. For now, the police believed that the head was put there as a warning either for the police itself or for other criminal groups, as it was a high alert zone for drug and gun trafficking. But how did Inko end up there? She didn't seem to have any connections with that kind of criminal activity. And in her old house there were only signs of child neglect and maybe domestic abuse. No drugs, no weapons, nor money laundry that led to that conclusion, hence why it was hard to place any new charges. As for Hazashi, it was as if he disappeared in thin air. The police had absolutely no way of finding him. The car under his name was trashed in a nearby highway, completely clean of anything. It was so clean even, that it took them a month alone to find out it was his, only because a replacement had a serial number that registered as sold and installed in that specific car. Izuku had to try and conceal the fact that he missed seeing Aizawa on a daily basis. Most of the days he really wanted to see him, and the days the urge and loneliness got too strong he would pretend to be asleep and wait until he came back after a late-night patrol. He would only peek through the almost closed door of his room, not wanting to blow his cover. Izuku is smart. He knew that something had to have happened for him to suddenly come home so late and leave so early. He still appreciated when Shadow would come in to let a goodnight kiss in his forehead, or when he said goodbye before leaving even when he thought he was sleeping. But he just really wanted to play and learn things with him again. The kid didn't have the courage to ask Mike if he was tired of dealing with him. But if it happened with his parents and even teachers, why would this time be any different? At least he still had Mike. And he got to spend his afternoons studying with him and Nezu, although Mike mostly just listened and stood there confused. When Mike also had to go to work, most times in the morning, he would let him spend the time with Nimiri, who insisted in being called Auntie. But he ended up giving her a sign name that translated as asleep. It had some sense because of the way her name sounded like the word sleep. But it was kind of weird because it didn't quite fit her personality. She also was now trying her best to learn some sign language, and that only made Izuku feel a bit guilty, like a burden even. And like a loop, he started overthinking. He didn't want other people to accommodate him or even grow tired of him. He just wanted to be able to be with other kids and to have what others had. But at the end of the day, he always made things difficult. Making others learn sign language, making others prepare a room for him, spending money on him like a liability. Even Nezu used his time to teach him things. Funny enough, the creature was the one to notice his dark mood first. Hazashi, would you be so kind as to go to the teacher's lounge for more cocoa? I'm afraid I ran out, he said after pretending to look for it while making tea for him and Mike. And while you go, you can check out the place and maybe make recommendations for updates when you start working next year. Mike simply smiled, petting the green curls and excusing himself. Izuku was taken back when he closed the folder they were working on. As the lessons were going on for only a week, they were still doing some research on stress-induced quirks, and they would only proceed to investigate his quirk once Aizawa was able to attend their session. I believe that you have a lot more of the potential your mind is allowing you to give today, Midoriya. Izuku moved awkwardly in his chair, not looking at the mouse. I think that something is bothering you and it may be better to get it off your back. I am very good at problem solving if that brings any comfort. When Izuku brought himself to look at the bear-like creature, his eyes watered, but he didn't allow them to become full of tears. He knew Nezu was beyond intelligent, but perceptive too. What did he do that let him know? Aizawa is tired, he signed, mostly because he didn't know how to describe it. He couldn't describe a feeling he couldn't name. Yes, I do know from another source that he is now in charge of more investigations, so it is only logical for him to be tired. He actually always looks tired. Is that a problem? Tired of me, he corrected himself, trying to explain it as a fact rather than an emotion. All people tired of me. People tired, people leave. Nezu made a pause, realizing the current problem was far out of his hands. He was never one for human emotions and far from being able to provide emotional support for anyone, let alone a kid this young. In all honesty, he was interested in Izuku's abilities and brain matter. The chemical reactions emotions had on a body and mind was something he had never taken as a subject matter. And in your experience, do you think that the people that left before are worth keeping? Izuku didn't seem to fully understand that statement, so he talked again. Human emotions are very hard to understand when you are not the one feeling them. So what I can tell you is that this is a matter of emotions, Midoriya. The emotions you feel towards Aizawa should not depend on what others made you feel with other actions. If you see that Aizawa is tired when he spends all day outside, has it occurred to you that what he is tired of is outside? Nezu stood up and sat on top of his desk. If I were to put the negative emotions I had from past events, it would not be fair on those who weren't there. But having people know about those previous events helped them understand what unavoidable reaction I may experience towards certain actions or words. Problem Child was somewhat aware of the experimenting Nezu went through, exactly as he said Mike had talked to him about it as a way to warn him to not bring some topics for discussion. This may be a secret, but I was told to help speed up the adoption papers under your name. The white creature smiled, this time more cheery. I do believe that is good news that cheers you up. I adopt. The youngest signed. I am afraid children cannot adopt other children. The fact is the adoption papers have your name in it. There are only certain emotions that could lead to an adoption. Unfortunately, their time was cut short as Mike reappeared with the cocoa in hand. The lesson also died right there, and although Nezu was fairly proud about how he handled the situation, he could not have known the domino effect it had on Izuku. That night, Izuku was left a nervous mess in his room, refusing to tell Mike anything even when he realized the little one looked so distressed. Azashi made sure to make a reminder to ask Nezu tomorrow first thing in the morning what had happened when he left, as it was obvious the change in character the greenie had in those 10 minutes. As smart Izuku was, he always had trouble feeling wanted. He was not really familiar with what an adoption entailed, so he made sure to look it up that night. It was the first time he dared to use Aizawa's computer without supervision, and he later regretted it all. A couple of searches was all it took for him to understand, wrongly, what Nezu talked about. Maybe if Nezu said you are being adopted, Izuku would not have understand you are being put for adoption. Maybe then Izuku would have not escaped a 3-story building apartment from a window in the dead of night. Mike was absolutely distressed. Shouta and Mike were both aware that the blonde was a perfect fit to take care of Izuku, but no one had taken something important into consideration. Hisashi takes his hearing aids to sleep. He was still very perceptive of his sournatings as a hero, but there was no way he would be able to hear the minimal sound Izuku made while scraping. He really had learned to be as silent as possible, and Mike hadn't even imagined a possibility like that. He just knew that if the kid needed or wanted something, he was instructed to go in the room and wake him up. Did he purposely wait to be alone with the deaf hero? At the middle of the night, maybe an hour after Izuku actually left, Mike woke up in a puddle of sweat, something unfamiliar creeping in his chest, not leaving him alone. And of course that for some peace of mind he went to Izuku's room just to make sure he was alright. But Izuku wasn't there. The poor man went into complete panic mode in less than 10 seconds. He trashed the whole house and called his name a dozen times before noticing the window was open and his backpack was missing. The living room security cameras confirmed his suspicions. No, he wouldn't just randomly leave at 2 a.m. in the morning, right? Why would he? He thought he liked them. Did he not like them? The alarms had both sound and light in cases where Mike couldn't hear, so that at least the lights would wake him up, but they were programmed to activate if there was an external intruder. It was only obvious that when opening from the inside nothing would happen. The blonde didn't even bother putting on shoes or a coat before running out of the house with just one hearing aid on and his phone in his hand. Oh Lord, how could this have happened? How could he lose a child under his care? How could he possibly explain this to his husband? How was he going to find his baby? Hisashi ran across the street like a maniac, screaming Izuku's name in vain, not even realizing he was using his quirk. It was like suddenly all his hero training went down the drain. He picked up his phone and had to take some deep breaths before calling his husband. He was so busy holding back tears and searching in alleys that it took him a minute to notice he put the phone on his ear that didn't have the hearing aid. Mike, why are you calling at this hour? The voice of his husband sounded so tired and slow. He hated to put even more on top of what he had to deal with. Izuku, the window gone. The window is gone. There was a pause in which he seemed to understand the panic in the blonde's voice. Did Izuku fall out of the window? Oh God, no. Izuku left through the window. He screamed, sounding on the verge of tears. I had my hearing aids out, and he was gone when I woke up. The following sounds made Mike cringe, a mix of insults that weren't exactly directed towards him and some papers being shoved around. Then some other voices and some more cursing. By then the loud hero was fighting the tears in his eyes, mainly to be able to see where he was going and to find his little listener. Okay, I'm with Neomasa. Send me your loca, but he stopped listening as something grabbed his leg from behind, scaring a scream out of him. Mike, what was that? Looking down, he was met with deep green eyes, filled to the top with tears just like his. Izuku was hugging his leg, backpack still on and face full of mud. He was looking extra sad and was shivering a bit from holding back tears. He didn't look physically hurt or in pain. He just was a sad little boy that got lost in his emotions. Mike didn't waste another second and got down to his knees, hugging his baby as if his life depended on it, letting all his tears flow in a mix of relief, guilt, and the adrenaline rush going down. Izuku, baby, you scared me to death. He cried out, smiling at the sight of his little boy, also letting his tears go down without shame. Are you okay? Why did you leave? Are you mad? What happened? He made his best to sound articulate and calming. but he just wasn't in the best shape to reassure others. At the lack of response, he just hugged him tighter, rubbing circles on his back, forgetting the phone call completely. "It's okay, baby. I love you and that is all that matters, right? We can figure out the rest later." And it wasn't just the words Izuku had been waiting to hear all his life. Thought someone loved him and the rest was just things to work through. He held onto the blonde sleep shirt for dear life, holding back his tears just 1 second more to get his point across. "Sorry, Dada." And at that signal he let out the most incredible and thunderous cry of all time. Much more similar to a high-pitched wail cry than a distressed kid. Mike didn't even move, just took out his hearing aid and continued to hold onto his son for as long as he needed to let it all out. It was the first time he ever heard a quirk louder than his. He just knew he kept on going for a few minutes without letting himself rest. His chest was still vibrating from the cries, letting Mike know he was there, safe in his arms. It was so heartwarming to hear his son for the first time that he had to bite his lip to not use his quirk again himself. It was Izuku's time to be a messy quirk user. He could later teach him one trick or two, but for now he would just indulge in the fact that he was there and that he called him Dada. Because that was exactly what he was. Hell, the kid could call him ugly and he would say thank you. But having the title Dada made him an absolute mess. F all the rest. This was his son and that was a title that he earned. He would put his heart and soul into that title for the rest of his life. Being a hero felt so insignificant next to being a father. It was a long, deep hug that they both needed, and when they moved away there was a look on them that wasn't there before, as if being away from each other was all that they needed to understand they were a family, liked it or not. Hearing aid back on and a message to Shoto later, they went home. The phone call was cut right at Izuku's cry as his quirk interrupted the sound waves from ever leaving or getting to the phone. Amazing indeed, but that didn't meet the fact that he could still hear his problem child voice, even hearing the Dada title he so hard wanted for himself. The loud, quirky duo took a relaxing bath, talking both in sign language and reassuring each other. Mike, once he calmed down, made sure to let the kid explain himself, trying to play down the quirk and voice usage so he wouldn't feel as if he did something wrong. He did tell the kid he had a beautiful voice, which accidentally sent him back to a crying mess. Mike took his time, cleaning Izuku's face and hair, singing a lullaby and taking care of his curls in recovery, untangling them and combing his hair lovingly. He was forced to keep singing and not start crying again when his son hummed with him. A soft, cute little voice that was just angelical. It fitted him so much that he would always remember thinking he would do anything so he wouldn't feel the need to shut up. The explanation itself was a lot sadder than one would think. As Izuku believed they were putting him up for adoption, he wanted to go back to his old house to retrieve something that he wanted to give to the couple. Sadly enough, the apartment was already completely clean of any of Izuku's things. But with some luck they might have kept whatever he wanted in the police station as evidence. Izuku said that it was his goodbye box, but he wouldn't explain any further than that. No one would push him either way. An hour after their arrival, Shoto got there. He was mad that it took him so long to get out of the station and was even more mad that he had to make all the way walking, running. He was absolutely exhausted and couldn't help but to smile widely at the sight. Both singers sleeping in the master bedroom together, curled into each other with their hair slightly wet still. They were holding one another with soft, relaxed expressions on their faces, and it was only fit that he would slip a cover on them and join. Mike was right. They loved each other and the rest they would figure out. The next couple days were delightful. Aizawa was allowed to work on the case from home. That meant more time spent as a family, but more time being careful that Izuku wouldn't use his computer without permission, especially after Shoto found the historial of his previous research. Mike was ecstatic to have his husband at home more and for the extra help, even though their little one made it his mission in life to not be a burden. On Monday, the family of 3 had another visit with Nezu in their plans. And even if Aizawa promised to not hold a grudge for the misunderstanding, he was sure as hell he would not keep true to his word. This time the visit had some heavy subjects to discuss, so they planned on leaving Izuku with Auntie Midnight. They already had some things to discuss: the misunderstanding, the quirk counseling, and how to recover the goodbye box from the police legally, but something new appeared suddenly. The subject had just recently come to light when, after months of Izuku not going to school, a missing child report was made. The person in charge of it was named Mitsuki Bakugo, a mother from the school Izuku used to attend. The worst thing, they lived a block away from his old home. Shoto was livid, absolutely livid. The kid had been missing school for the year now, and even before that he remembered noticing him looking bad during his night visits. He was probably neglected for years now, malnourished and abused for at least 2 years and missing for 1, and she noticed now. In years no one had moved a finger for the poor kid's well-being. Izuku had to wait for a complete stranger to notice him walking alone every night and to do something. He had to rely on a pro hero that just casually saw beyond his random night strolls. What if he didn't notice? What if he kept on living like that? What would have happened then? Maybe he wouldn't even be alive now. "Zuzu, do you know someone named Bakugo?" Mike asked in a casual voice during dinner. The kid froze in his place, going as far as to stop chewing completely, looking at his lap nervously. That was an obvious red flag that none of the adults missed. "A lady by the name of Mitsuki Bakugo was asking to meet you," said Shouta, his voice firm yet soft. "Do you want to meet her?" Izuku meditated on his options and quickly got to the conclusion that meeting his auntie would mean seeing Katsuki. But he would probably behave if she was there, right? He ended up nodding to the offer, even if the couple didn't look convinced at all. Truth to be told, the blonde was hoping that his little listener would say no and that would be it. The police would deal with her and that was that, but he would never deny Izuku his past and it was up to him to meet these people. He would never leave them alone though. Aizawa was going to meet her anyways, just didn't expect him to agree to. The woman was insistent in verifying Izuku's well-being and Shouta had thought that she was most definitely a hypocrite. The meeting ended up being the very next day due to her insistence. They decided on a public space, none of the parties involved being comfortable enough to bring the other to their home. The place where they met was a nice coffee shop next to a playground to keep Izuku distracted in case anything went south. Because, well, the pro hero was already planning on saying a thing or two. They got there and a couple consisting of an ash-blonde woman with a brown-haired man were sitting there. A kid Izuku's age sitting impatiently next to them with a weird backpack on. "Oh great, a leash kid. My name is Aizawa Shouta and this is my husband Yamada Hazashi," said Aizawa, extending a hand in a cordial way. "We are currently the ones looking after Izuku. I assume you are the Bakugo family. What did you want to meet for?" Short and straight to the point. Sometimes he liked to introduce them that way. The way in which people reacted to an openly gay married couple was always a good indicator as to how the conversation would go. She looked more taken back to the looking after Izuku part though. He would give her half a point for that. At least she wasn't a complete a-hole. Yes we are." She looked at Izuku who was hiding behind Shouta's pants. "We wanted to see for ourselves that Izuku was safe and sound," she said, regaining her confident posture once again. "Izuku darling, come here, say hi to auntie." She bent down a bit, frowning when Izuku looked at the other kid and refused to move. "Well, at least say hi." Her voice sounded doubtful once more. "I haven't seen you in so long, didn't you miss Audie?" Izuku waved, uncomfortable but still with a bit of a smile on his face, still not moving from his place and not saying a word. "Hey, who is the homeless guy?" said the little blonde kid, watching Shouta who just rolled his eyes. His mother sighed heavily, as if used to his misbehavior. "Want to say hi to Katsuki instead or did the cat catch your tongue?" At that cue he hit even more, Katsuki coming down from his chair and finally watching Izuku, and an odd and mildly annoyed smile in his face. "What the hell? We ask kindly to watch your language," added Shouta in a second, the woman shooting daggers to him. "I'm sorry he's been a little shy lately," Mike interrupted the awkward silence. "And with the mutism and all. I don't suppose any of you know sign language." "Deku, why are you skipping school?" he yelled again, this time growing closer to Izuku, something that neither of his responsible adults appreciated. "Let us play. You'll be the villain again. Hurry up or I'll beat you up, loser," he screamed again, disregarding any looks from the adults. "I told you to be nice," she yelled, equally as loud as him, smacking him in the back of the head. "Don't call him that." In that same instant Mike picked Izuku up before the little demon could get to him, already aware that his intention was to drag him to the playground. He looked at the confused kid whose confusion turned into anger, small explosions coming out of his hands. "Hey, give him back," he threatened. "You can play with the hobo." Before the kid could say another word he was left speechless when his quirk stopped working, looking at his hands like they had disappeared in front of his very eyes. "I will stop you right there," Shouta said, his voice lost all sign of softness and his air floating around him. "I will not allow you to call my son names, nor to do as you wish as long as I'm here." He blinked, redirecting his tired eyes to the mom. "I'm sorry, madam, but if you cannot control your kid, we are leaving." They are just kids. And what is with all that? What did you do?" She looked at him and then at his son, who once again tried to use his explosive quirk, this time to make sure it was still there. "Who do you think you are anyways? Sign language. And in your quirk." Her kid went running behind her, holding a middle finger to the pro hero even as he looked slightly terrified of him. "We are in fact pro heroes and that right there is illegal quirk usage," he said, pointing to the kid. "And you hitting him and screaming is clearly not improving his bad manners." "Pro heroes," she said, looking suspicious. "Look, they are just kids and the little brat sometimes needs to get things straight. You are no one to tell me how to raise my kids, even if you now decided to play family with Izuku. He already has a family. What happened to Inko and Hasashi? You just expect us to believe you are a good Samaritan." Before Shouta got all on her face about her haughtiness, Mike intervened. Izuku resting in one arm and hero license in the other, wearing a fake smile that it was rarely seen in him. "We are in fact pro heroes." He showed her his license, not letting her grab it. "And as you see, Izuku is at the moment a lot more comfortable with us than with your family. May I ask when was the last time you saw him? Because, to put it nicely, He was in a very rough situation long before we were lucky enough to bring him home to us. When she opened her mouth but nothing came out, he continued. What is worse, it looks like you didn't know about his selective muteness, nor did you realize he needed help before. May I, while we are here, recommend some quirk counseling for your kid and family therapy to improve the ways of you with your child. Have a nice day. Honey, I will wait with Izuku on the playground, all right. And as if he didn't just offend 2 generations, he went on his way to play with little Izuku, who was obviously distressed about the exchange. Mitsuki was about to open her mouth, red with a mix of embarrassment and anger, but was stopped in her tracks as a hand rested on her shoulder. Her husband, who hadn't said anything beyond formalities, looked at her like begging for something, picking up an angry Katsuki himself and addressing the remaining hero. I'm very sorry about this. I personally was aware of Katsuki's and Izuku's friendship falling apart, but I didn't know it was this bad. My apologies. He bowed a bit, as much as the kid in his arms allowed him. If it is possible, I would like to check up on little Izuku another time, alone maybe. We wish to be there for him now, even if we weren't back then. We were good friends with his mother and we couldn't see past that. We are sorry. Aizawa signed. The man seemed a lot less heated than his wife and kid, understanding the situation immediately. He calmed down a bit. Although he fully intended to see the extent of the bullying Izuku had obviously suffered, it was no good pressuring a parent who didn't pay any mind to the issue before, nor to a kid who was used to getting things his way. They probably hadn't even been in contact with Inko in a long time too. There was no information to be gained there and he knew that. That is always up to Izuku, he stated, but I am willing to let him choose another date when things have calmed down. Regarding Izuku's parents, he looked at Katsuki, who was avoiding all looks and finally decided to simplify things for his sake. After all, he was still a child. They were deemed unfit to care for him. He settled with that, gaining a startled look from both. And I know it sounded harsh, but please consider quirk counseling and family guidance, for his sake at least. With those parting words, he nodded off and gave the man his cell phone, warning to keep it to himself and for emergencies, as he was still a pro hero. That was probably one of the most uncomfortable talks he had in a while, but at least he got something out of it. He now knew something else he had to ask for when they went to meet with Nezu. Aldera's school had to have some camera footage, right? That would be more than enough to bring them down. Hell, if this experience told anything about how kids behave in school towards Izuku, he might as well force some kids into counseling. It was the least they deserved. And to be expelled, obviously. The fall of Aldera Junior High School was a circus, for them at least. Nezu said that it was his way of apologizing for the misunderstanding he caused by talking private matter with Izuku. And with that alone, Aizawa knew it was going to be bad. He wasn't expecting it to be this bad. To process an entire school is not an easy task, and it is normally a lengthy process. Unless you are Nezu, that is. In less than a week, Aldera Junior High School was permanently closed and in process of becoming a non-profit organization for the quirkless. The first thing he did was pull some strings in the police force to legally demand all video footage of the school's cameras. That alone would take months if he wasn't such a scary individual. The video footage was thousands of hours from multiple cameras. So instead of watching them all or hiring a team to look at them for him, he did what he thought was the easy way out. The madman designed an artificial intelligence that could detect quirk usage, verbal abuse, and physical abuse. It wasn't a perfect system, of course. He only had 2 days to make it after all, so he missed some incidents. Even then, he had more than necessary to raise hell in that institution. At least 80% of the teachers lost their jobs and teaching license. The other 20% got relocated to well-known schools with zero bullying tolerance. He even decided to hire one outstanding teacher as an intern in UA, after seeing her stand up for a student that obviously had problems at home. She brushed her hair before classes and ate with her under the staircase. He was sad she didn't meet Izuku sooner. Maybe then the kid would have had a better fighting chance there. Out of the teacher that lost their jobs and licenses, a whooping 32% was charged with something along the lines of child neglect, child abuse, assault, child endangerment, and for those who had not actively cooperated with the abuse, turned a blind eye. Nezu made sure to find some dirt. A fraud here, tax evasion there, even identity theft in one particular case. That was a fun one. Most of them were left with a hefty fine that would take them a lifetime to pay, or with some time to cover serving the public. Others, however, were even faced with jail time. Nezu loved to send people to jail, a lot more than he liked doing the right thing. Mike was relieved to be with Nezu and swore to never be against him. Lord knows he would be able to deal with that kind of torment. Mike's personal favorite was the long list of students that were now by law required to take quirk counseling and a family course of anti-bullying. The same students and parents that would have mandatory weekend helping the new center against quirk discrimination that their old school turned into. The Bakugu family was obviously one of them and wasn't just the cherry on top. They also tried to get the doctor that diagnosed Izuku as quirkless, but that was a big no-no. because Izuku was very quirkless. Now that he was a lot more confident in going out, they took him to update his vaccines into a quirk specialist. The lady, the gentleman, well, their quirk made it quite difficult to know. A weird and colorful skin mutation that apparently runs in the family. They let the family of 3 know to use they, them pronouns, as technically no one in their family had a designated gender. It was also a great opportunity to teach Izuku about they, them pronouns and non-binary people. The doctor was absolutely fascinated by Izuku. A 1 in a million case. You see, apparently some people could experience a traumatic event that would force them to activate a quirk that could run so far in the family tree that would be impossible to track down. That in itself is a 1 in 10,000 case. But this type of lifesaver's one-use quirk where, as their name indicated, one uses only, with some long-lasting effects that could go from a nasty scar to chronic pain. A body is not made for more than one quirk, at least not if they are not completely compatible. Some of those unfortunate souls would end up dying anyway, as the quirk is not enough to save them or the quirk itself kills them. After their purpose it served, the quirk vanishes again, and if the situation repeats itself it does not appear again. The quirkless, on the other hand, would be able to hold a quirk like this for a while since it wouldn't collide with another one but will eventually be gone too. They had never seen something like this before. Izuku had actually activated 2 quirks in one traumatic event, the doctor concluded. The first quirk was a mildly useless one. The doctor referred to it as glue trap mostly because they found it funny. Glue trap was basically that, a sticky part in Izuku's brain that let him understand and decode information without letting it go or needing to hear it a second time. It could be considered as a memory quirk if it wasn't because of the effect it had in the second quirk. Glue trap would write anything down, not letting a memory or a knowledge escape ever, so much so that when the quirk that actually would help Izuku stay alive appeared, glue trap trapped the quirk inside Izuku, just as it had trapped itself inside Izuku before. Fascinating. 2 perfectly compatible quirks. They registered Izuku under the 2 quirks, glue trap and sound wave control. This new knowledge only meant a lot more counseling, thought Nezu was still eager to do. Magically, so there was now an open space reserved for Izuku to start school next year in the same classroom, thought. What a wonderful coincidence. Izuku now talked. Not a lot, but a few words was a lot more than before. Most of the time he would only say 1 word at a time. Water, hug and sad were the top 1 right now. He hadn't said Dada again, nor had he referred to Aizawa as something similar. Mike was always there to remind him that it was a critical moment when that had happened, and although it was a milestone, he had a long list of milestones he crossed before Mike. Physical contact was a big one, and so was admitting to being afraid when he was left alone when it was time to sleep. That was a conversation they had after he was found sleeping under his bed one night. Aizawa was sure they would get there. There is no rush when they have all their lives ahead. The case of Izuku's talking was now under the statement of selective mutism. The only people he ever spoke to were Mike and Aizawa, although Nimiri heard him once, but he was not talking to her. It was a deep relief to start working on his quirk with Nezu now that Aizawa was there to stop it when it got out of hand and Mike to give tips and tricks. A dream team, really. Nezu gave Izuku the news about Alder, and Aizawa also stated at that first meeting during the incident about the adoption thing and how sadly they would not be able to adopt him until the problems with his bio parents got resolved. They would get there, he promised, and Aizawa never breaks a promise. Sometimes I do wish I had met little Izuku first. It would be a delight to adopt you myself. Half-joked Neku. Aizawa didn't think it was too funny. An outstanding individual for sure. The old video footage proved that you were extraordinary well before gaining a quirk Midoriya. He praised, almost fondly. Almost. If you still desire to be a hero in the future, I would be up to making a recommendation letter myself for another hero school or to save you a spot right here. I think that is the bare minimum for the effort you put in your lessons with me, little human. He promised, a creepy fire in his eyes. By the time I'm done with your lessons, you will have no problem getting into any course. And Izuku smiled. Genuinely so. Maybe Nezu did understand to some degree human emotions. For the first time, Izuku took pride in the praise he got. It felt like a reward, like something that he had finally earned. Yes, he earned this. He earned this sense of relief, this pride in himself. Maybe quirks are important, but they are tools, and tools alone are nothing without a handler. And God knows Izuku did not handle anything at birth. He now knew better than to wait for good things to happen. He was ready to not wait anymore, even if what was in front of him was nothing but a nightmare. After far too long, the Inko Midoriya case was making progress. Not the progress Aizawa had hoped for, but it was something. They finally found the body, not because of their own merit, but because it was given on a silver platter. Her body was found in the exact same place where her head once was, in almost perfect condition and extremely cold. Obviously being kept frozen to avoid decomposition. The police retrieved the body and reunited it with its head, now ready to make a proper autopsy. Just as suspected, she had died from asphyxia. Her body didn't show any signs of struggle either, nor did they find any other evidence that could be used. It was actually the lack of something that gave them an ambiguous clue. A nail was missing. Just a single nail. The message was clear. Whatever they were looking into made the people who killed her uncomfortable. They were getting close to uncovering something and decided to return the body to keep the attention away from whatever was going on behind the scenes. They were finally getting somewhere, but things got worse really fast. After the body was found, Mike came home late after a shift in the radio station to a neatly pink nail set on the welcome mattress. He almost missed it if it wasn't because it was on top of a white paper. No note, not threat, no nothing. Rightfully so, Mike freaked the F out. The possibilities were obvious. It was either a threat to Izuku's well-being because of his connection with the victim or a threat to Shouta for his connection to the case. Either way, it was bad news. Really bad news. Even worse, it was time to break the news to Izuku that his mother was gone. The couple made a deal that same night to not frighten their little boy. They contacted Naomasa and he came in to collect the nail and paper as evidence. That night they had a couple of heroes on site to avoid any problems. But after that first night they would take time off work and made security arrangements, especially since a child was involved. Everyone thought it to be the right answer. It was settled then. They had to break the news to little Izuku. Mike asked Aizawa a few minutes to calm down first, noting that his husband probably needed them too but just wasn't willing to admit it. He made chai tea and some coffee for the underground hero, setted them on the coffee table and kind of organized the sofa cushions in a nervous space head. The idea of Izuku crying broke his heart. He guessed that Shouta told him to come to the living room as he arrived looking nervous and sat in the middle portion of the sofa, a small All Might plushie in his hands being crushed to death in between his fingers. He looked at Mike who sat next to him and then back to Shouta, his eyes filled with nervousness. Guilt. I'm in trouble, he signed, letting go of the plushie like he accepted his sentence before knowing his charges. That was the first time Hisashi realized they had never really needed to scold him. They had obviously corrected some behaviors and manners every now and then but never felt the need to scold him. He really was a great kid. No, Bunny, you are not in trouble, Mike said, his voice sweet and mellow. And even if you are, there is no reason to be nervous around us. We are always looking up for you. He saw his little shoulders relax a bit. He took a big breath of air and looked at Shouta. After all, he was the one that knew best about his mother's case. Izuku, the black-haired man, called, making sure to keep his voice low. We have news about your mother, he announced, and the kid got tense again. I'm really sorry, kiddo, he said, really to throw the bomb on him with a lump on his throat. But the police found her dead. They all paused, waiting for a reaction. But there really wasn't anything there. Izuku looked at him, eyes wide open but nothing more. He then looked at Mike, almost as if to verify what he said was really true. He then directed his eyes to the plushie in his hands, not quite grabbing it so hard anymore. After what appears to be too long, the blonde got worried, knowing the kid had a history of dissociation. He looked at his husband, who was not looking any less worried, and proceeded to gently put a hand on his shoulder. It is okay to be sad or angry, little listener, that is. But before he could say anything else, Izuku fingered spelled a name. Was Hisashi? Him? Was he asking if he killed his mother? What? Before the loud hero could panic at the out-of-character accusation, Aizawa interrupted. The truth is that we don't know. He lamented having to tell something so morbid to a kid that young, but there was no good in sugarcoating something like that. We haven't seen or heard of your biological father, but it could be a possibility. Aizawa moved closer, not even waiting for the kid to give a response to move him to his lap. I know this doesn't make things better, but we believe it was painless and will do her justice no matter what. Oh, his father. His biological father. He couldn't help the nausea that stopped him from talking from the mere idea of his own father killing his wife. God Lord, he was only 6. What kind of parents were they for him to get to that conclusion himself? This time he didn't wait. He moved close to Izuku too and hugged them both, feeling his son tremble under his touch. You can let it out, he whispered, but Izuku didn't quite do it just yet. She didn't love me. They heard him whisper. His voice is slow and full of emotions really to spill. I love her, he continued, and broke into a silent cry. And wasn't that the most heartbreaking thing he could ever say? It was probably the most he had ever said, and Mike kind of wished he didn't. How could he possibly mend a heart so broken, so young and full of holes his parents were supposed to fill? What parent book was out there on how to fix your toddler's broken heart? How could any of them hold his pieces together when he felt like sand in their hands? But he couldn't lie to himself, nor was he willing to lie to their son. Izuku had every right to be angry and sad for not having the parents he deserved for the beginning. Sometimes, he said, not even trying to hold back his own tears, parents don't know how to love their kids in the way they deserve to be loved. He put on his best smile when Green Eyes looked up to him, spilling tears by the liter. And sometimes people miss people who aren't nice to them, and that is okay too. You don't have to like someone to love them. Green Eyes watered even more, lips trembling in anguish a child should never feel, and Mike led him while he cried himself, cuddling even closer, making the three of them just one messy hug. I didn't know her, so I can't tell you what she did or what she didn't, but it is okay to hold her memory dear even if she hurt you and you feel you can't forgive her, Aizawa said, his voice slightly uneven. We are not here to replace her, he stated. We are here for you in any way you are willing to accept us. He rubbed his back, trying to coach him into that deep cry that he was holding in. And so he did. He cried. A long, deep, loud cry that he put his small little heart into. He let the tears flow because he couldn't possibly know what else to do. His mother was gone. The only person, besides Mike and Shouta, that at some point looked up to him. The person that loved him until he was quirkless. The person that broke her promise to love him no matter what. The person he loved regardless of how much she lied to him and ignored him. The person he hated that he loved. He cried for hours until he was so tired and drained that he was falling asleep on Aizawa's lap, who never stopped rubbing circles on his back. She can have my goodbye box, Papa, he mumbled, holding his shirt wet from his tears. It was a bittersweet moment for Aizawa as much as it was for Mike. They didn't exactly hold Midoriya and Co. in high standards. But having this little kid openly admit to love her while at the same time accepting them as their parents made them wonder if they should be grateful to her for leaving them with the blessing their little kid was. They all stayed there, long after the little one fell asleep, holding him as if he was made out of glass, repenting to have met him or helped him before, thankful that they had him now, that they had each other. Aizawa promised himself he would give Midoriya and Co. the best burial he could get and give his kid a last chance to say goodbye to the woman who tried and couldn't find it in herself to raise him. He deserved that much at least. That and a safe home to always come back to. They could give him that and so much more. And they would. The day went as well as a funeral could go. On a cloudy day, Midoriya and Co. had a lovely funeral that had a lot less visitors than a funeral should have. Nezu was generous enough to offer to pay for the funeral, and although they had the money to do it, the couple accepted anyways under his insistence and with the condition of they deciding the arrangements. The human-like bear was also smart enough to only go for a few minutes to give his script condolences, a bit afraid of ruining a moment like that due to his lack of sentiment towards the victim. Nezu just couldn't find it in him to feel bad for an abuser, but he wasn't about to ruin the memory of a last goodbye for a kid. He is not a monster after all. When he went, a tie slightly more formal than normal, he took with him the goodbye box as the greenie had called it. It took a bit of convincing to get it back from the evidence in the police station. The rat found it quite curious how far he was willing to go for a kid that wasn't his. He passed the oddly shaped jewelry box to the kid and went on his way, not needing to watch him open as he had already looked inside. Not that he would tell Izuku that. Izuku received the box gracefully, still trying to understand everything that was happening. Mike really wished his first funeral service wasn't at such a young age, and especially not his mother. The blonde made sure to pick the best picture of the woman he could find in all the mess of album pictures the police offered to the funeral house. He was sad to find out that there were many pictures of Izuku as a baby, but very little of him as a toddler. He picked an old one where the woman was smiling and in her nurse uniform. It seemed to be around the time Izuku was born and she looked genuinely happy. There was really no need for an explanation. The place was decorated with so many flowers that Izuku had forgotten for a moment why they were there at all. White flowers filled the empty space the non-existent guests left, and in the middle of all a big brown casket next to a picture of a woman he had almost forgotten how she looked when she smiled. The casket was closed and the kid was thankful for that. He would not be able to handle seeing her cold and still when she used to move around so much he couldn't follow suit. No one even dared to imagine an open casket funeral, for her body was no longer in a good state for one. And Aizawa sure as hell was thankful that Izuku didn't ask to see her either. That was a picture that no child should have of a loved one. But it was not much sadness that he felt but confusion. A room filled with flowers and a huge wooden box was not exactly what he thought funerals were. But, again, he really didn't know what to expect. It was overwhelming, as if there was something he should do or say. But he had no instructions. He had no way of knowing what to do or feel. He grabbed his box and clinched it close to his chest, suddenly feeling uncomfortable with everything going on. For a second he thought about asking to go home, but he had yet to give his mother the gift. Even if she didn't want it nor would she use it. He felt awkward. Every look he received seemed full of a sadness he didn't feel, of pity he didn't want, and of faking condolences for a woman they didn't meet. It felt empty. It felt wrong. Some doctors that said they worked with her, and 1 or 2 police officers he never met. Empty words for an empty space she left. He walked back to Aizawa, who patiently waited for him to finish examining the photo of her mother. He wished he could remember her smiling, but a frown and a grimace was how he actually remembered her. What sad memories he held of the woman who promised to love him. He looked back at the man who opened his heart and house to him. He had a soft gaze on, not a pity one nor a fake smile. He just looked as overwhelmed as Izuku felt. And in that second it felt wrong to give a goodbye gift to someone who didn't want it. The box was exactly what you could expect from a young kid. an old box painted with bright colors and a bit of glitter. It seemed that at one point was a shoebox of his, judging by the size and shape. On the top carton lid it read "When Gone," and Aizawa chose to believe it was a misunderstanding from a kid that was far too young to know how to write. So Izuku opened the small crafted jewelry box under the man's curious gaze and took out a funny little plastic ring. He debated for a minute. There was some weird thing inside that only made sense to him. He had kept a bit of a reminder of every time he felt happy. He wanted to give his mother more, but in the end he came to the conclusion that most of his happiness didn't come from her, and she would get the fair amount of happiness she gave him. She didn't want the autograph a low-ranked hero gave him, nor his first hero analysis notebook. She wouldn't like his pink sippy cup, nor his All Might chocolate coins. Not even the shiny star sticker he got in kindergarten, and she especially wouldn't want the set of pretty keys he had. She didn't even want him. He decided to get an owner for every item. Something they had to remember him with, not like his mom that left him empty-handed. He gave the box to Aizawa with the sign hold and spun back to his mother's memorial. He did his best to tie the All Might limited edition ring pop to the flowers on top of the casket, getting close to it with aching eyes and whispering something about how good he thought she would look in yellow. He thought about how he would never see his favorite ring again and started to tear up. He would never see his mom again either, would he? He blinked the tears away when he felt a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Mike brought some people who want to see you," said the underground hero with a voice that made the kid want to cry again. "It is the Bakugas. We can tell them to go if you don't want to meet them," he clarified, because even if the hero didn't want them there, it was up to his son to decide how his goodbye would go. Izuku nodded, a shine in his eyes coming back at the family name that Aizawa had yet to understand. The first person of the family he saw was Katsuki, and he almost didn't believe his eyes. Kaken was crying. He had big fat tears rolling down his face even as he held his grumpy expression. For a second he believed that maybe it was a bad idea to have him there, but the second they got close enough he remembered that it was Kaken. He could never kick Kaken out. Not when he was for once expressing something else than anger. "Stupid Deku," he murmured, choking in his own words. "Holding back your tears and shit." He dubbed it for one short moment more before hugging his green friend. "I know you miss Auntie," he said. His sobs were poorly hidden. "I will, so cry or I'll punch you." And the waterfalls finally opened, while two friends held each other as they should have always done. At that moment he couldn't even pay attention to the other adults crying in the background. Bakugo was still rough around the edges, but Aizawa could see the change beginning to form within him, and so did his parents. He was trying to get Izuku to cry his heart out, and it was the first time Mike remembered that they were too young to understand any of this, to have the emotional regulation to confront such changes. For the rest of the day Mike pretended to not cry for the hurt he saw on his son's eyes while he comforted him, singing to him when he was too tired to hold himself up. Aizawa let one tear slip and swore to not let Izuku forget that there was no need to hold his emotions in, even when he couldn't put a name on them. That day Aizawa received Izuku's first hero analysis book and Mike a tiny pair of his favorite gloves. They went through all the things he kept in his goodbye box, and he told them the happy memory each thing held. The set of keys, though, they kept. After the funeral came a period of calmness that didn't feel right. The family had entered another routine, a calm and perfectly calculated one. Because of the threat, they had to put a lot of security, hidden security. They stayed in the apartment complex in hopes that whoever left the nail on their door would foolishly return and be caught red-handed. So, they opted to increase their security in ways the normal eye wouldn't notice. Their security system was updated, and the apartment next door was now occupied by another underground hero in disguise. There were also always a few officers near. No police cars nor uniforms on site so as to not be noticed. Izuku didn't catch on to the changes at first, too tired with his grief to see anything around him. But soon he started to grow suspicious. Whenever any of his dads left for work, someone else would come. At first it was just Auntie Nimiri, but then it was other heroes that he could recognize. Tenya also came often to visit with his brother Tensei, who he hadn't even noticed attended the service of his mother. Another hero, he thought. The windows were now always closed but now had a small metal security check on them. Finally, when he had to go to UA to have his quirk counseling with Nezu, they used a different car, and there would be more people around the office and in the entrance, as if people were watching him. He tried his best to not grow paranoid, but the facts spoke for themselves. They were in danger, and putting two and two together he decided by himself that it had to be Hisashi. Mike had also noticed that Izuku was acting differently. He was hiding more often in his room. He didn't ask for help to complete his hero analysis and would not let anyone but Nezu see them. Most importantly, he was growing nervous by the day, and it didn't take a genius to know it was due to the 24/7 surveillance disguised under friendly visits. There were also other factors that the couple had to consider with Izuku. He wasn't doing good with everything that happened, and they couldn't blame him for it. Since the funeral, Izuku became even more silent, shy, and even skittish. He would never ask for anything at all. only accepting things if offered, going as far as to not tell when he was hungry or when he had hurt himself playing with it. It was like suddenly the little light in his eyes he had gained over the months had dulled. Admittedly, there was not much they could do about it. Grief was an ugly process that could not be hurried up. They started offering things more often instead of waiting for him to make the first move, from simple snacks to asking if he wanted to sleep with them at night, which he accepted every time. The nightmares. As if he hadn't been having a rough time already, his sleep was filled with nightmares. Aizawa didn't really know when they started, nor did Izuku tell him, but one night he just went to check on him randomly, only to find him tossing and turning in his bed, forehead full of sweat. It broke his heart that he cried so silently when he woke him up. He was fixed in denying he wasn't okay, but he trembled under Aizawa's gentle touch, and a hug was all it took for him to fully indulge in his care. Aizawa slept with Izuku that night, being woken up 2 times more to the same scenario. God, the poor kid really couldn't catch a break. At breakfast, he obviously had some trouble connecting with reality, and after what Shouta saw that night, he made something up about his room needing remodeling to encourage him to not be embarrassed to sleep in between the couple. At the end of the day, they let Izuku choose a new wall color and let him draw on it, but even after that, he decided to keep sleeping warm and cuddly with the pro heroes. The play dates also helped him a lot. Tenya was a bit odd for a kid, but he absolutely adored playing with the granite, and he always made sure to not bring things that would make him uncomfortable. He really was a nice kid. He helped Izuku improve and catch up with school. And in no time it was Izuku who had to explain new things to him. The 2 cute nerds always had a blast learning about random subjects. Shouta almost choked on his coffee when he heard Izuku talking so very low and shy with him. After that, they became almost inseparable. Tenya would be now the one to insist on play dates, and Mike had started making jokes about him having a little crush on his cute son. Tensei overheard them and didn't say anything, just smiled at them. Interesting reaction. He would have to secure with Nezu that they go to the same class next year. Watching him make a close friend and be a kid almost made Shouta forget about his duty as a hero. Almost. When Naomasa called with the weirdest news he could have heard over the phone, he had taken it almost as an offense to interrupt his quality family time. Shouta had forgotten so bad about it that the detective had to remind him about the keys he gave him to investigate. Right, the keys Izuku had. The keys looked a little funny, too chunky and heavy to be house keys and too colorless to be a toy for a kid. Truth to be told, Aizawa wasn't expecting anything to come out of it, so he gave them up to be checked for a chip or to look if they corresponded to something under the family name of Izuku. So, you don't know what they are for? The black-haired man stated tiredly. I do, but I also don't. He signed over the phone, exasperated. It seems they are for S container, but well, we don't know which or what does it have inside. So go check which one opens. He rolled his eyes, kind of already knowing it was not that simple. Or check in the database for any Midoriya or Enko's maiden name. Already checked and there is nothing. So either your kid just found some random keys or it is under a fake name. Got it. He finished for him, watching back at how Izuku tried to sleep on Yamada's lap. I can't ask him. He has enough on his plate for his age, he says, even before the other man can make the suggestion. Well, you will have to, unless you want to try one by one on the thousands of shipping containers Japan has. The silence extended a bit before he talked again. We both know that you don't keep old chairs in a container. It could very well help us find his father. I'm his father, Aizawa corrected, voice irritable, and instantly regretted it. Even if he was stressed, there was no reason for him to say something like that to Naomasa, who was nothing but helpful. Sorry, that was out of place. It's okay. I wouldn't be exactly happy if my kid was in danger, he said jokingly. Aizawa could still remember how he made him think he had a son for months just to find out he had a huge dog called Yuki. He stayed silent for a minute. Yuki had probably received better care than Izuku had with his parents. With parents that shitty, he just couldn't fathom the idea of them giving a kid a key that could actually be valuable or useful. Maybe he really just found them around. Not one in his right mind would give something important for a kid to not lose. Even worse if you treat your own kid like shit. Are you still there? Aizawa looked back at Izuku. He wasn't just any kid, he could be trusted. But Izuku didn't trust anyone, so he would probably not give the key to just anyone. Not even police. And what police officer would search up a kid that young? Invisible dots started to connect in his mind, racing like the wind. What if someone gave them to him to avoid police finding them if they were to be caught? Can you look up if any container is under Deku? He knew it was a stretch, but there was nothing wrong with following his gut every once in a while. As in useless. I guess the line went quiet while he could hear the computer keyboard being used with a bit too much force. He heard a gasp and more background noise. How did you know that? Let your team know. I would like to see what's in there as soon as possible. And the line went dead. It kind of felt like he was going to open a Pandora box. He just hoped it was a jewelry one. The mission was on. It was in no way a dangerous mission of the sort, so Aizawa wasn't really worried for that matter. What had him worried was what finding Izuku's biological father could entail. For the first time in his life, he hoped to find something really illegal. If those containers were to have something really bad on them, he could easily gain Izuku's full custody without having to put him on the stand. He was sure that piece of shit he had as a father would not want to fight for custody. But on the rare occasion that he did, there was barely any evidence that would be irrefutable in court. It was confirmed that Izuku was heavily bullied in school, so they would use that to justify his injuries. Even the huge scar on his back that he was sure was made by his father's fire-breathing quirk, it could be said to be made by Bakugo's explosion quirk. About the abandonment, he could say it was just the 2 first weeks when Izuku missed school, since apparently the little one continued going even when he was completely alone. Even during those 2 weeks, he could argue that he thought he was with his mother, and since she couldn't argue back, it would be a lot harder to make Izuku testify, which would only help his case since he could barely even talk to them. If it came to it, Aizawa and Yamada both knew it would be a long battle that would only help to deteriorate their little one's mental health. The kid had received blow after blow his whole life, and they didn't want to see what would break the camel's back. So there he was, in front of a container that was hopefully full of guns or something of the sort. But life tended to be disappointing. Izuku's life especially. The container was almost empty. It only had some plastic bags and some cardboard boxes that obviously used to contain something. The police had nothing to do but to take samples of everything and to close the place down. Miyamasa had other plans though. Since he was in charge of the whole operation, he decided to keep everything as they found it. He alerted those in charge of managing the control of the containers that there would be an agent with them at all times, and with a single picture of Hisashi Midoriya they waited until there was any new movement. The next movement, though, was at the Aizawa home. The officer that was undercover next door received a threat too. Their mother's old wedding ring laid on the front door just like the nail once was. They had clearly been in her home even if she didn't notice. They had been caught. The couple then decided to move to a separate location. They moved into a small apartment next to the Air Force. It was really far and loud because of the planes, but it was also casually close to where the containers were kept. Izuku was now irritable most of the days. The poor kid could barely handle all the noise and all the people that were there for security. He missed his play dates with Tenya and wanted to see the family cats that stayed now with Nimuri. Yamada was worried that this could be a step back into his progression with verbal communication, but when no other officers were around, he still talked to them. Most of the time he just asked when they could go home. Izuku was really smart. He knew that this was far more important than just another case. Otherwise he would not be brought along to everywhere they went. But he also knew better than to ask questions around that would possibly get him no answers. So he sat still and did what he did best: hero analysis. For the past few weeks he had dedicated his everyday life to analyzing his current favorite hero, the Racerhead. At the beginning of the week he had asked Mike for any videos of him fighting, and although there were not many, the blonde was happy to comply as he didn't usually ask for anything. In a matter of days, the pair made it their routine to make time in Mike's schedule to watch hero videos and hear the little one rambling quietly. It was a new part of him that he was happy to see. At Apper, the kid could just ramble strings of information that should be far from his reach at such a young age, and it was fascinating to see. He was comfortable enough to do it around both of them and no one else, even if he didn't realize he did it. Yamada had to admit that the level of genius the kid had was overwhelming, because it was hard for even someone his age to stay on track of what his analyses were and what he said too. But Izuku was patient and loved heroes as much as he loved his daughter. "You should see it, Shu. There are at least 10 pages about your fighting style alone," he said excitedly, since Izuku only ever made his analysis with Hisashi. "Well, it sounds really cool, but if he doesn't want to show me, I can't force him to." "Don't you have some pages too?" he established, getting ready to go to the station again, even though he had just come to the temporary apartment. The loud one shrugged, some sadness in his eyes at seeing him go so soon. He knew they were closer than ever, but that didn't help the feeling of loneliness when he was left behind for being a bit more of a public figure. "I do. But he is still uncomfortable talking about his quirk, and they are similar to some degree, so." He sighed dramatically. He can't wait to practice with Nezu again. He is going to make him evil, I know. He can try, but I actually think he has a soft spot for Izuku, refuted the blonde, thinking about how he actually let the kid pet him, even after they told him to not do so. He didn't seem to like it though. Izuku heard them talking. Not that they were whispering, but he should have been sleeping. It was actually a hobby of his, eavesdropping when he thought they couldn't see him. He just loved the way they talked to one another, so gentle, so loving, and minding the other. Mike lowered his voice a ton, and Aizawa would make sure to be on his line of sight to talk if he was not wearing his hearing aids, even signing as he talked it loud. Izuku remembers that his parents' bio-parents never looked at each other like that, not even before he was diagnosed. It was a funny feeling, really. He didn't fully understand, but it made him bubbly and warm inside. It was even better when they talked to him in a similar fashion. Izuku wondered if Kaken's parents talked to him like that sometimes. He made the final decision to uncover his facade to give his latest analysis notebook to his papa, who accepted it as if it was pure gold and told him to actually go to sleep. He would come back in the morning and they could review the analysis together. Izuku couldn't wait to hear what he thought about his suggestions. Funny enough, Izuku would soon discover how good his suggestions were. Shouta was fascinated. There was no denying that his son was incredibly smart, but to make suggestions to a pro hero at the ripe age of 6. Incredible. Currently doing paperwork in the office with his detective friend, he had spent the first 3 hours of his shift reading what his kid gave him. Admittedly, there were bits where you could tell a kid wrote the analysis, mainly because of the childish handwriting or the drawings or the lack of specific words to describe things. But all in all, he fully understood why Nezu was so fixed on him. With the right guidance, the kid could easily be a great strategist. But with the wrong guidance, hopefully they would never know. There were some suggestions that he was surprised he never thought about them himself. Just slight changes that would make his fights a bit more comfortable or give him a bit of an advantage. Tying his hair to not show when his quirk was activated, including night vision on his goggles, and even making some type of humidifier system to avoid his dry eye. He was currently reading about special movements he could include while fighting. Funny enough, some of them already existed, which only reinforced the idea of how great the whole analysis was. Shouta was especially interested in those that included his capture weapon. They weren't necessarily complicated moves, but instead ones that favored the weight on the scarf to make him not the focus of the attack. He was about to finish reading when Naomasa came running, his face filled with determination. There is finally movement on the container, and with just that moment's notice, everyone started to get ready and run from one place to another. Shouta couldn't stop his heart rate from going up with just the idea of getting a resolution for his kid. He knew Hisashi was most probably going to be there as the one in charge of the unit and even in charge of whatever operation they were doing. He needed to get the man behind bars to get some closure. He didn't even care what type of crime it was as long as it assured him that he would never be able to touch his bunny again. For the first time in his whole hero career, he knew he was way too involved in the case to be rational, and for the first time he didn't care. When the other pro heroes got to the place and made a quick plan to close the place down without anyone escaping, they went straight to action. The plan was simple: surround them and try to catch every one of them. The problem: they did not believe there would be more than 4 or 5 people at best. It seems that there was no intention of keeping themselves hidden, as that many suspicious men at that hour would obviously catch some attention. There were at least 13 men from which they only knew the quirks of 2. Even worse, there were only 3 heroes available at such short notice. A rookie and limelight hero. Both of them had hardly ever met Shouta before too. Just great. They divided themselves. The rookie, known as Rock Lock, and the limelight hero, known as Ed Shot, went together to the front of the building to wait for the signal. Shouta, on the other hand, was going to the back to force his way in and take a look at what it was that they were moving into the container. With his set of skills, it didn't take him longer than 10 minutes to get in unnoticed and to look at things from above. The picture was a dark and blurry one. Most people inside were running from one place to another, bringing very carefully mini freezers that could not be heavy enough for the 2 people that would bring it in. It was obviously whatever they were trafficking, and Shouta decided to not indulge too much on what was possible inside that needed refrigeration and was so small. There were at least 10 or 15 of those mini freezers inside when they stopped running around and finally settled inside, most probably waiting for the buyer. There are only 2 doors. Barricade the front one and get police cars to surround the back one, murmured the eraser hero through the transmitter. I will knock the closest ones and bring the rest to you by going through the back. Rock lock the front door and try to touch as many as you can and lock their clothes in to immobilize them. Thankfully, his teammates decided to go and just not argue. None of them were really a man of many words. He clicked his tongue when he realized that Hisashi was nowhere to be seen, probably being the main link to the buyer and doing business while the rest did the dirty stuff. He prepared himself for just a second and then jumped from the ceiling beam where he was hiding. As planned, he landed on top of one of them, knocking him out even before he ever tried to fight back. The sound immediately alerted the rest, and in a matter of seconds he jumped straight to action. It seemed that only 3 of them had a mutation quirk he could not use his own against, so he went first to the closest 2 and tangled his capture weapon around them to knock them out against each other. One of them, with a quirk that resembled jello, engulfed the other one, who was then led on the floor unconscious and full of orange goo. I'm guessing none of you want to turn themselves in, he mocked when all of them tried to circle them. Okay then. Using his scarf as a lasso, he warped to the beam and used it to hold his weight up and kick another one to the chest. This one had an obvious eye-related quirk, so, cringing at the thought of him being in the receiving end, he used the sand to blind him long enough to crash his face to the ground and not getting to know anything else about his quirk. A flying torn grazed his side, barely having enough time to not get stabbed right in the stomach. Looking back, he saw a man and soon realized that it wasn't a torn but his own very sharp piece of bone that he was throwing. He jumped back to avoid another one, and another, and another. A mutation quirk for sure, as Shouta's didn't get to stop him that easily. Using another man as a shield, he protected himself as he once again jumped up to avoid the situation. With 4 down, he decided it was time to make his exit to the back of the container. He didn't need to pretend to struggle to get back up, because he actually was. And between the goo in his shoes, the flying bones, and the guy with the suspicious gas quirk, he barely made it to the door, covering his face as much as possible, not wanting to know what the gas was for. He made it to the door, and Rocklock and Edshot sprang right to action. Edshot goes straight to the mutant quirk type, saving Shouta some trouble, and Rocklock tries to get as many as possible. But after a number of villains are locked to lock another one, someone else gets set free. They are still outnumbered, but the plan seemed to work well enough to take some more down with minimum damage. With quirks out of the way, Shouta is left with a semi-damaged capture weapon and skill against brute force. The results are just according to his calculations up until he hears a deep hurt growl coming from Rocklock that distracts him. It is just half a second he loses focus, but it is more than enough to feel himself engulfed by infuriating pain on his left arm. He steps back as fast as possible, but the damage is done. Part of his hero suit disintegrated, and his entire arm up raw and bleeding takes away some mobility and speed, and Shouta knew he effed up. I swear you little stupid heroes just can't mind you own effing bussiness. A roar-like voice makes him look away from the nasty wound and up to a man a few inches taller than him. Y'all looking effing homeless too. He snarls, getting closer again, smoke coming out of his mouth. It clicks instantly. This is the piece of shit Shouta was looking for. Midoriya Hisashi. The same man that he was sure was the artist behind Izuku's huge back scar. The same man that left him off to starve and put him in a hospital. The same man that appeared in his little boy's nightmare most nights. He doesn't look like the pictures. He looks beat up and confident all the same, and the pro-hero feels nauseous when he recognizes his son's freckles in this man's face. He is nothing like his son. He would never be. How many warnings to leave us alone do you need? At this point I think you want me to kill you. That is a lot of talk for someone with 15 men that cannot take on 3. He lets out. The pain in his voice is clear, but he keeps his stand. Yeah, you like to take the trash for me anyways, right, hobo? Another fire breath comes his way, but this time he dodges, his movement slower than usual. My old house, my stupid wife, my worthless kid, and now my useless teen. Goddamn, I can have shit now, can I? You want my dirty laundry too? So you did kill her, he states, fully aware that a confession on his body cam would be a cherry on top once he takes him out. Didn't have to. She refused to work and my other doctors got pissed off. You can meet her later. A huge fireball comes his way and he dives low but still catches it. The realization hits him like a truck. She refused to work. She was a nurse. Freezer containers. They were trafficking organs. He doesn't have time to digest the information as coming through the fire comes a kick on the stomach that throws him off, landing on his back, next to an unconscious Rocklock. His body screams in agony and Shouta pushes the pain aside. Rolling in the ground, he evades another kick, right where his head was. Immediately, Eraserhead uses a round kick to force himself to get back up, trying to move Hisashi away from the fallen hero as well as dodging every punch and fire breath. As his own breath starts to pick up, he knows he is far too tired and wounded to take a more aggressive stand and claim victory. With Rocklock out of service and Edshot out of range and fully occupied, his mind starts to run for a better answer. As much as he is dodging most punches, so is Hisashi with every blow thrown his way. He knows he is getting slow and predictable, and he hates his body for failing him now when his head wanted more revenge than justice. He can barely block his quirk for seconds at a time, and Hisashi picks up on using his fire when his hair is down far too quickly. Another fire breath and then he is tackled to the ground. All air escapes him and a direct blow to his head covers his eyes in blood, completely losing focus of the situation for longer than he wished to admit. He can feel the weight of the man on top of him and his hands wrapping around his neck to block his airways. Even as he chokes and the lack of air builds up pressure on his head, he can only think on one thing. The night that Izuku had a nightmare, Aizawa was there to calm him down and stood there, eyes stinging as his son narrated for the first time his nightmare. This was his nightmare. It was about the day he got his quirk and the traumatic event that led to it. Izuku fully believed that his father was about to kill him in the same way that he was trying to do now with him. Aizawa is furious. How dare he put Izuku through this exact same thing? His lovely, clever and shy kid. The kid that had opened his heart to another set of adults even after everyone in his life had failed him. The kid that made him promise to always come back home from missions. The same kid that would fight off the sleepiness just to try and see Shouta come back from patrol. He promised he would always come back home. And he was not one to break a promise. With what little strength he had left, he did the only thing that came to mind. He looped his capture weapon to a light pull. and then from the back to Hisashi's chin and pulled back with all his might, hoping that Izuku was right about his analysis. A strangled noise was all he heard as the air re-entered his lungs. Hisashi startled back close to the pole and backed away from Shouta just long enough for him to get back to his shaking legs. Still holding onto his scarf, he waited for the natural reaction to put his hands to his throat to take it off and made another loop to secure one of his hands around his own neck and another loop to tie him to a pole. I can't believe that worked. He barely avoided another fire breath that had no clear aim and closed the distance between them. "See you in court," said the underground hero with a lopsided bloody smile, and before getting questioned by the choking man he smashed his head against the light pole, enough to shake the structure and break the light bulb from above. With the man out like a light, ironic indeed, he let himself fall to the ground and wait for the paramedics. Apparently he had moved a lot further away from his fellow partners during the fight. It was okay. He could wait a few more minutes before going home. Maybe he could smash his head a few more times while no one was watching. Damn, the body cam. Well, I guess a nap would have to do the trick. Shouta woke up in a daze of lights way too bright and a loud whimpering in the background. He tried his best to close his eyes and go back to sleep. He had the headache of his life and felt like sleeping a few years might help. "I saw you wake up," said a voice way too high-pitched to be his conscience. "Stop pretending to be asleep." "Oh, wait." He let out a low growl and felt the lights go down a notch even with his eyes closed. Taking this as a cue, he opened his eyes again, focusing with little effort on his whipping husband. "You are in a hole for taking a nap after such a nasty concussion. Are you trying to make me a single father?" Without really realizing, his shoulders relaxed at the face of the blonde one. It must have been a really long nap if he worried about him that bad. "Oh, a bed. Ah, he was at the hospital again, wasn't him? Where is our bunny?" he whispered, looking around until his eyes laid onto the small sleeping boy in the hospital chair. Wasn't that the most adorable picture ever? "Take a picture," he muttered more to himself than to Mike. "Already did," snickered Mike. "A hello. I love you would have been nice though." Mike moved over next to the bed and signed dramatically, although there was a heavy smile on his face. He took his husband's hand in his and rubbed a bit of warmth into it, looking as if he was about to say something really cheesy, and Shouta had to pretend he didn't like it for the sake of a reputation he didn't have in the blonde's eyes. "You know you are very hot with a bloody face, but next time I would rather it be fake blood, please," he joked, and Shouta let out an amused hum. "I would be very pleased to inform you that it might have been some of Hisashi's." Mike looked back at his sleeping son, making sure he wasn't actually hearing anything. "That does make me feel better, thank you. But anyways, how are you feeling?" Shouta took a minute to recall the state of his body. Did he feel great? Not really, but a lot better than back at the alley. His arm was bandaged pretty heavily, and if he moved it he could feel the tension of the skin, meaning a burn scar was most definitely under all the clothes. Apart from that, his head hurt like a beach, but all in all he had had it worse. "Could be worse," he said sincerely. "I'm guessing some type of healing quirk was used on me." Hummed Hisashi, checking him out. "Yes, recovery girl is waiting for you to get a bit more stamina to go another round." "Fair enough. And what about you and Bunny? I hope I didn't scare him too badly." "You were only asleep for about a day, but he made you about 35 drawings for a fast recovery. I am going to decorate the entire living room with them." He bit his lip and made a funny hand motion, almost being unable to hold up how cute his son was. "And about you-know-who, he was unfortunately treated and taken to police custody. Naomasa doesn't think he would be able to put up a custody fight with what they got as evidence, but he also does not seem to care for one. So there is that." Aizawa remained quiet for a while. His thoughts conflicted in between being happy for having no custody battle and sad for knowing their little Izuku would have to live knowing his bio-father wasn't even going to try to get him back. There was also the fact that, eventually, when he was old enough, he would learn about what his father had done to other people for the sake of money. And that would probably be a lot more traumatic, especially since the greenie looked to be very aware of the fact that both his parents didn't love him. "She didn't love me. I loved her." The words from before Inka's funeral were still very present in his mind, and Shouta had to remind himself that the kid was in loving hands now to not fall into a domino of anger for the injustice his son went through. "Bunny will be happy to know we can move back to our old apartment." Half an hour later, when Izuku woke up, he made it his mission to cover Shouta in drawings of himself and the family cats. Aizawa had to admit that he noticed at first how Izuku was holding back tears, and well, he couldn't blame him. Hospitals are scary, and probably having your dad sleeping with bandages on was not what he thought their next play date would look like. Mike picked him up to sit on the hospital bed next to Shouta, and they played card games while the blonde filled the discharging papers. Recovery girl said that she would rather have the second round of care at their home, so that Izuku was more comfortable. The favoritism towards the little one was obvious. She barely even talked to the hero, to reprimand him for scaring her youngest assistant and for sleeping with a concussion. Both heroes tried to pretend it didn't shock them seeing Izuku talk so much so fast, but the volume and speed of his speech decreased as time passed and his nerves settled. Shouta smoothed his hair and said he was sorry for scaring him, but that it was a reality heroes had to face sometimes. He was a rational man. He couldn't promise him that he wouldn't get hurt ever again. He could, however, tell him that he was very good at his job and that he would always give the best of him to come back home to him. That was more than enough for Izuku, and for Mike too. Both of his crybabies needed reassurance every once in a while. He could give them that. It was getting harder pretending to be, though. Their game and chit-chat was interrupted by a nurse who came to collect his sign and make the last vitals check to write them down. Well, Aizawa-san, it seems that will be all for now. Recovery girl will give you a few vitamins to take after he does the home visit. They are only for the effects of her quirk, nothing to worry about. Is Papa going to be okay? His soft voice interrupted what Shouta was going to say. Oh my! Aizawa put his hand in Mike's mouth to shut him up. He is going to be perfectly fine, sweetie. He will be as good as new by the end of the week, answered the nurse, looking at a timid Izuku. Your papa is a strong hero. Heroes take care of you and we take care of heroes. So leave it up to us. Here, give this to your papa as an official nurse. She gave Izuku a little band-aid and waved goodbye. Oh my god. Izuku talked to a complete stranger, as in, a full-on sentence. No stutter, no avoiding eye contact, no nothing. Want to put on the band-aid, kiddo? Offered the black-haired patience, extending his injured arm and trying his best to not freak out at the great advance he had showed just now. I wanted to be sure, he whispered as he peeled the band-aid, obviously noticing the reaction they had as he talked to the nurse. She liked my shoes. Mike laughed a bit at that, remembering when they just got there and that same nurse commented on his shiny red sneakers. It was just amazing the huge steps their kid was making, all in his red glittery shoes. Once they left the hospital, the happy family of three prepared what would be their last meal before going back to their apartment. Mike had to make most of the packing and the dinner as Shouta was still tired from the whole ordeal, but Izuku helped, folding clothes and organizing things inside the boxes. It was both adorable and a lot more efficient than Yamada. It was at that moment that Shouta let his body relax completely. He was finally going home. No more threats, no more running, no more worrying about his family's safety 24/7, and no more worrying about Izuku's papers. They were finally going to go home. They were finally going to make the papers official. And Shouta had just the best idea about how to commemorate this. Hell, even he could afford to break his tough facade sometimes. Yamada was nervous. He knew he shouldn't be. Shouta would never do anything to hurt him, of that he was sure. But what if something happened late last night and he didn't know because he was not at home? What if he changed his mind last minute? What if he was just doing this for him and not out of his own will? It had been a few months since they had finally settled in their house and finished the adoption process. Izuku's birthday was 3 months ago and things were finally settled and going through the path of recovery. Izuku had finally gone back to school, to a private institution where the couple was a bit more calm, sending him knowing he would have Tenya by his side. The little couple of nerds had decided to skip a year and go directly into third year of primary school, and as expected they had little to no difficulty passing the necessary exam to do so. Nazu recommended them to not let Izuku skip too many years, just because he thought his peers may not take too kindly to a bigger age difference. Bakugo was upset about Izuku going to a different school, but at the end of the day he too had a long path to healing before they could call each other friends again. Surprisingly, he didn't try to escalate the matter after Izuku said it once. In 5 months' time Izuku had made incredible progress. He started showing his charm more to other people, and soon anyone that met him for more than an hour could not help but fall in love with the timid, smart, and shiny bunny. He was more energetic and talkative. Within the walls of their home it was now not a weird occurrence when Izuku talked in full sentences. He would mutter under his breath so rapidly when writing in his analysis journals that was both scary and endearing. He allowed himself to cry more often too, after Shouta ingrained in his brain that he didn't need an excuse or reason to cry. Sometimes emotions are just big like that. And that was a phrase that Izuku used every now and then when he couldn't explain what he was feeling. Hisashi was so proud of him. Oh my god, stop sweating. That mascara is not waterproof and neither is the suit. Nimuri rolled her eyes, probably knowing what was going through his head. You know what? Plan B, wait here. And before he could even open his mouth she was gone. He took a deep breath and looked in the mirror. He was afraid. He wasn't the most feminine man. And this is the biggest amount of makeup he ever wore, even though it was only blush, mascara, a gloss, and some very mild brown eyeshadow. On top of that his suit was white with a trail attached to the pants in an attempt to mimic a wedding dress. He tried once, but dresses just didn't seem to go with him. Was it too much? What if Shouta thought it was too feminine? What if he didn't like it? What if he thought he looked stupid? What if, pretty? A little high-pitched giggle made him yelp in his place, taking him out of his line of ridiculous thoughts. You look so pretty, Donna. At the door was an adorable-looking Izuku, eyes shining like emeralds, and Hisashi felt like a prince when his little one came close to caress the white fabric. He smiled, showing all his baby teeth, and grabbed his hand. Do we have to wait more, Dada? Papa is waiting. Hisashi ruffled his hair and picked him up. He couldn't stop the happy thought about him being so much heavier since the first time he held him. Just a few more minutes, Bunny. A tiny hand grabbed onto his lashes delicately, mushing them softly in between his fingers and then looking in awe at the black tint in them. Izuku wiggled himself as he often did when he didn't want to be held, and the blonde hero put him down. He stared at the white suit for a long time, keeping his hand with black mascara on them up in the air so as to not touch anything. AMD Hisashi couldn't help but do funny twirls to show off to his son. "I knew Plan B would calm you down," said Nimiri with a side smile from the door frame. She was wearing a dress too modest to her liking, but will a maid of honor had to make some sacrifices. Of course it would. He just had such pure energy surrounding him. When he was happy, there would no one in that room with a gloomy face. How could he even doubt Shouto when they had such a lovely family together? Of course Shouto was doing this because he wanted to. He was the one to ask, for God's sake. Shouto would never fail him, nor would he fail Izuku. That is just the way he is. Their hero. "Auntie, can I have some paint too?" His voice was softer than he intended, still trying his best to be loud and clear, showing her his black fingertips. "You mean makeup?" "Sure, baby, as long as your dad is okay with that." Hisashi bit his lip in adoration for his baby. Deep down, Izuku knew the effect he had on his dads. He rarely asked for anything, and when he did, if they couldn't give it to him, they found some alternative to make him happy. "Of course, Bunny, just know that it can get in your eye and be a bit itchy, right?" He meditated on the consequence, but finally he ended up using the mascara anyway. God, the kid really had the best lashes. "Well, we have 3 minutes left. So, Izu honey, grab this." She gave him a wooden basket small enough to only contain what was needed. "Go grab the robot kid and wait for us at the door. Don't open the door, just wait for us there." As if it was his life mission. He saluted them and ran out, holding the basket with both hands and an excited smile on his face. Robokid was the nickname Nimiri had used for Tenya since she heard it from his brother, probably because of how much he liked to play by the rules and his robotic hand motions. "You better not chicken out now, you look too good to be a running bride." She left out a big sign and pressed her hands on her dress. "I tried convincing him to wear any other types of shoes, I swear, but he just loves those red chunks. I wouldn't dare to ask him to wear anything else, it's part of his charm." They saw the glittery red shoes when they approached the door, the bridal music already starting to pick up. Izuku went first, throwing the flower petals as practiced, with the minor mistake of using all of them too fast and running out of them halfway. Tenya put a handful of his own petals on his friend's basket, and they made it to the end of the aisle without further issues. Aizawa bit the side of his cheek to avoid laughing at how Tenya was already expecting Izuku to run out of his petals, as he did in every rehearsal. They were possibly the cutest flower boys to ever exist. "Hi, Papa," muttered his bunny, loud enough for the first row to hear him and melt with his gleaming smile. Aizawa didn't answer, simply took his hand and put him to his side, not letting go as Mike started to go in. He didn't have a bouquet. Instead, he was casually carrying a small wooden lantern that the couple had made with scraps of what once was the goodbye box. It didn't look anything like it. Now it was more like a decorative piece that they promised to put small paper stars on whenever they had an appreciation moment for each other. The lantern glowed warmly with the tiny paper stars moving around. Shouta sucked a deep breath at the sight. He looked very different to what he did on their wedding day, but the same deep stare was looking back at him, looking so deeply into his soul that he had to remind himself to breathe again. He looked amazing in white. The amazing contrast with the green background of the outdoor wedding made him look stunningly gorgeous. Shouta had to take a few seconds to thank a god he didn't believe in for Mike's poor taste in man, and he could hear him in his head saying, "I actually have a great taste, and that is why I'm with the best." There were really no words to describe the burning feeling in his chest and the tingling of his hands. He realized then that no matter how many years passed, Mike would always find a way to take his breath away, to sweep him off his feet and make him wonder what could he possibly have done in his past life to get such luck in this one. His dry eye didn't help him to keep the tears at bay, and he quickly took the handkerchief and wiped them out before they could even fall, immediately knowing his friends would tease him to the end of times for this. He was so happy that he liked it, and he put a ring on it. He took the shaking hand of his already husband and held back, kissing him. Instead, he whispered, "Hello, you look as beautiful as the day I married you," only to have to pass him his own handkerchief because of the tears the blonde didn't bother to hold back. He looked just as happy and enchanted to look at him as Shouta was looking back. "We are here today to renew the vows of this lovely couple." And even though there were not many people at the ceremony, and even if the party was a lot more cheesy and less wild that Nimiri and Tensei wanted, he would love to do it all over again. And the last thought he had before falling asleep that night was a very memorable one that he knew he would agree with tomorrow and 20 years from now. "I hope I can find them both on every lifetime." Izuku wanted to be a hero. There were few things Shouta was sure of, but he knew for sure that his little Izuku was going to be a hero. Izuku started showing interest in heroism as soon as he felt comfortable with his quirk, and his fathers were not surprised to know it was a passion of his even before his quirk came in. so they did what any good parent would do. They nurtured his passion. It started with buying him material to improve his analysis, by Nezu's recommendation, and soon transformed into putting him in taekwondo classes. Admittedly, at the age of 8 Izuku wasn't any good. He was most of the time overpowered by his peers who, even though they had the same age, were taller and stronger. But by the time he had his green belt, Shouta made sure to let him know that he was often overpowered too. It was then when his stealth and agility came in handy. Izuku soon understood that sometimes one hit well delivered was better than being the strongest in the room. He enjoyed fighting with Tenya. Even though the taller one was not in fighting classes, he still was eager to learn every trick the green one was willing to teach him. By the end of the year, Tenya had also enlisted into taekwondo. Izuku had admitted once that he was a bit sad that Kaken wouldn't get into the classes too, but the kid was still into anger management classes and they didn't recommend putting him up against other kids. Instead, he started Parker, which was both enough to tire him out and good exercise for another hero wannabe. Yamada was delighted when Izuku started opening up to them. It started really slowly, by asking for things no kid should be afraid or embarrassed to ask, and it developed into long night talks about how he felt and he occasionally needed help to understand his own feelings. Izuku was also put in therapy. Things were going well, really well even, and Shouta knew that, but even then the fear of his own son going into heroics was there. The idea of how many heroes ended up was nightmare material, and he couldn't fathom the idea of one day being his son, the one in a position which he couldn't get out of. His own psychologist told him those were valid fears. But at the end of the day, all he could do was make sure he had all the tools he needed for when that moment happened. And it began Izuku's gun training. He was not going to give a 9-year-old an actual gun, not if his Ashi had a say in it, but he offered up some combat lessons that include knife throwing and how to deal with an armed enemy. Nothing major really, but it was always nice to see his son excited, and it was a great way to get some quality time and a good exercise in. Shouta had to admit it was really scary when one day he just moved a knife midair so that it would hit the target, and how he had discovered with his data that if he was careful enough he could manipulate air direction with low and almost imperceptible sounds waves. He knew just then that he had nothing to worry about. Not when his kid had the help he deserved. I love you, I really do, but don't you think this is a bit much? I mean, how many people are we hosting? Like 10. Don't be rude, he will love it, you'll see. Nimiri mumbled, a balloon still in her mouth as she tried talking and blowing at the same time. We will be 8, I think. The Bakugas will send Katsuki over but have work to do, so they won't come over until dinner, I think, clarified his blonde husband, who was hanging some shiny serpentine around. Then why can the cake I picked up feed a small army? Shouta signed and put said cake on the fridge. He could banter all he wanted, but the truth was that everyone knew he was just as excited as everyone else. Izuku's birthdays were always really special. The kid never asked for anything but was made to make a list of at least 2 items he really wanted. That way they could give it to Nimiri so she wouldn't bring anything weird into their house. Asashi had established a family tradition a few birthdays ago, when it had been obvious that even as time went by Izuku had trouble asking for things in general, and at the end of the day he appreciated more the thought behind a gift than how much he had wished for it. The tradition was simple really. Every birthday and Christmas they would give him 3 gifts. 1 thing he needed, 1 thing he wanted, and 1 thing they wanted him to have. That year was extra special. Izuku had finally reached the double digits, and not only was he doing great in school, he was finally showing some signs of the rapid growth preteens showed at some point. Shouta was kind of hoping he would pass the blonde demon in height soon, but he knew he was destined to be a short little broccoli. Everything was ready and in place 10 minutes before they expected Izuku to come through the front door with his friends, and when his Ashi went to open it he was shocked to find 4 kids instead of 3. Hi kiddos, come in. He shushed them in and looked at his husband a bit confused. Dada, Papa, thanks, it all looks really good. I love it. Glad you like it, Bunny. Do you care to introduce her new friend? Said friend was hiding behind Izuku. His hair was almost as fluffy but a deep purple, and they couldn't see his eyes because he was looking at the ground. The kid seemed to be skittish and nervous, and if it wasn't for the fact that he was holding hands with Izuku he would have kind of guessed his son had kidnapped another kid. Yes, he is Atoshi. I found him in the park playing alone and asked if he wanted to come to my birthday party. He said no one had ever invited him to one, so he is a bit nervous. Can we show him the house? Izuku was recruiting friends in the park because he didn't have enough to fill his birthday table. Mocked Bakugo, and Shouta held in the will to kick him out. Maybe he would never fully understand why his son liked him in the first place. Very funny Kaken. If you have so many friends I guess I shouldn't go to your next birthday party then, said the green fluff, and he heard a contained laugh from behind him, from Nimiri surely. I was kidding. The kid backtracked, looking both annoyed and slightly amused at the new developed bickering they had going on. Izuku, please tell me that the kid's guardians know they are here. Ah, yes, he has 2 moms. I thought that it was really cool. They seem nice. They are probably a bit behind because we ran a bit. I kind of invited them too. He scratched his head, suddenly embarrassed. I should have asked. I hope it is okay. Of course, Bunny, it's your birthday, you can invite anyone you like. Izuku hugged both his dads rapidly, and after the kid gave a timid bow, Hitoshi was more or less forcibly pulled to the garden, followed by Bakugo and a profusely apologetic Ida. Just a minute later, two tall women apparate at the door that Hisashi didn't bother to close. Hi, we are really sorry, they just won us over. I am Sai and this is my wife Mimi, it's nice to meet you. One of the women, the short-haired one, gave a deep bow and shook hands with Hisashi and Nimiri. Shouta was still watching the kids run up to the water balloon-filled buckets he had prepared. He would have to give poor Hitoshi a change of clothes later on. I'm assuming you are young Izuku's parents. We are sorry for showing up unannounced. But Hitoshi is really shy, so it's always a nice surprise when kids want to socialize with him, said the other one. She had a funny-looking mutation in her cheeks that made them have scales, probably some kind of snake quirk. Oh, I'm flattered, but the little bush parents are there. I'm just a fun auntie. Shouta showed a crooked smile at the confusion and the irony in it. I'm Aizawa Shouta and this is my husband Yamada Hisashi. A pleasure. Please come in. Izuku is also shy in making friends, so we were a bit surprised too. But we have plenty of space for extra guests. Both women apologized for the misunderstanding and the sudden visit and came in. Only a few minutes later did Nima appear too, a big smile and gift in hand. The old lady had at some point become like a grandma to Akuzu, and they were delighted when she told them about a nice cute house with a garden that was on sale in her neighborhood. Shouta would never admit to it, but having such a kind woman near them was a relief, with them being heroes and all. Even though it had never happened, it was good to have an emergency contact nearby. He was also glad to introduce Izuku outside of the hero community. Sometimes it felt like it was all the kid was exposed to. The adults went outside to watch the kids play, and to everyone's surprise they were all playing to throw the water balloons. Even Hitoshi and it was two teams, but at the end no one could tell who was against who, and they opted for chasing Mike around, and if no one came to his rescue, well, they were too busy laughing. Both married couples seemed to get along as they were a chill pair, and Shouta was glad there was no one louder than his husband. Nima had also joined in the chat, and they were gushing about how cute the kids were and telling embarrassing stories about them. By the time Hisashi was half dry, it was Nimura's turn to step in, but he ended up terrorizing the children instead of being a target. It was to be expected. About 2 hours in, the doorbell rang again and the Bakugas came in, bringing a present that Shouta could only guess was wrapped by Katsuki. It was kind of obvious that its contents were some type of figurine. When the sun started to come down and dinner time was approaching, the kids were sent to dry themselves. As expected, they all came looking like mini Izukus due to them having to borrow his clothes. Except for Ada, of course. You could never catch him unprepared. They had pizza and a lot of junk food for dinner. Nothing fancy against Ada wishes, but they all enjoyed the snacks and jokes flowing in the warm and comfortable atmosphere. At one point or another, the kids disappeared into Izuku's room, who was most probably squeezing information out of their new gang member about his quirk and writing frantically an entry about him. Later on, he came back down to take a few cards and board games with him, so it seems there was nothing to worry about. Nima was nervously rearranging the houseplants as she often did when she felt unease. She confessed she was worried that Izuku would not like her present this year and that she had a replacement in case that was the case. Hisashi assured her, after seeing a photo of said present, that he would love it. And so it came. Cake time. Most of the time, Izuku's birthdays were during the day, but he had asked to have a pajama party this time, so they had chosen to cut the cake at midnight, even if usually everyone was asleep by that time. When the clock turned to 12 and the date was finally July 15th, everyone surrounded Izuku and singing happy birthday. The candles lit his smiling face, and he couldn't help but wonder what Izuku had wished for when blowing them out. He wondered if it was something he could provide for him or if it was something for the future only himself could get. But by the looks of it, it wasn't something that worried him too much. It was a warm picture that just got better and better every year. Hisashi was crying at how old their baby was getting, and Shouta was smiling as he helped Izuku to get the cake out of his hair. Courtesy of Katsuki, of course. He was also a bit overwhelmed by the idea of time going so fast. But he stayed strong, knowing that Izuku was prone to cry while opening his presents. It was actually quite the miracle that he wasn't already. He would have to invite Tensei for dinner as a thanks for covering tonight's shift so he could be with his family. One by one they all hugged him, even his new friend, who seemed a lot calmer and cozy now. Ada went on a lecture about how smashing someone's face into a cake was both dangerous and disrespectful, but even he was having fun. When everyone had a hair-free piece of cake, they all sat around Izuku to see him open his presents. The couple apologized once more for getting there empty-handed, but there was nothing they could have done after they were suddenly at a stranger's birthday party. The first present he opened was Ida's. It was a long but thin box, and Izuku made sure to unwrap it carefully as he always did with Ida's presents. Shouta still didn't really understand why. Out of the box he pulled a strip of what at first looked like stickers, and Izuku was soon smiling widely. It was planets and stars that stick to the ceiling that lit in the dark. Sadly, Pluton is in the set even if it no longer is considered a planet. My apologies, said the blue-haired kid, pulling his glasses with a smile. That's great. Thanks, Ada. We can put them on tonight. He got up to give him a short hug. Ada always gave thoughtful gifts. And he wondered if this had something to do with the fact that Izuku still slept with a night light on. My turn extra, followed Katsuki, who was pushing himself in between the hug in an attempt of putting his gift in his friend's hand. Izuku laughed it off and grabbed it, first shaking it and taking his time to mess up with the blonde. This gift was a medium-sized box that was very poorly wrapped in shiny yellow and red gift paper. After a minute of hearing Bakugo complain about how slow he was, he finally opened and took the All Might figurine out of the box to admire it from all angles. It's the Silver Era one. How did you get it? It doesn't matter. Now you won't look like a loser in the park with the one bastard chew. That's so mean. Bastard just wanted to play too. As if some bastard left the couch and came to the birthday boy for cuddles. Izuku made a fake attempt to hug Bakugo, who just responded by making gagging noises and moving away while the rest laughed. Next came Nimuri. Izuku grabbed a decent-sized box and looked at it very awkwardly as soon as he picked it up. The box is symbolic. Your gift is in the garage and don't pretend you didn't see it. I can already tell you tried writing it, Nimuri said, half laughing and pointing at his scabbed knee. Izuku blushed profusely and scratched his neck and nodded. His auntie opened up her arms and he ran up to her for the hug she had been hoping for all day. You told me you fell, he yelled indignantly. I mean I fell. From the bike. Yamada's laugh was sure to be heard in the whole neighborhood, and Shadow allowed it for one more second before activating his quirk and hiding his own grin. After thanking his auntie for the not-so-surprise, they all decided he would show the bike to the other kids after opening the rest of his presents. He was sure Bakugo would try to ride it and fail because it was slightly too big for them yet, and it would be a lie to say he didn't want to see him fall too. Okay, I guess it's my turn. That one is from me, dear, said Nima. A nervous smile plastered on her face as Izuku grabbed the soft paper wrapper. Nima always liked to wrap her presents in newspapers, and she chose carefully the news on it depending on the person she was giving it to, and would even go as far as putting some perfume in it before actually wrapping. It became a sort of tradition to also give her presents in the newspaper Izuku would select for Christmas or birthdays. He would usually choose some with flowers on it for her love towards gardening. Izuku took his time seeing the news first. It was about a rookie hero that had made his debut recently, and Hisashi could almost imagine Izuku cutting and pasting part of it in the entry he would do about that hero. He put the newspaper aside to analyze later and unfolded what looked like a sweater. You know how I started knitting, right? Well, I remembered the first time I saw you and couldn't think of anything else, she whispered softly. Izuku went red as an apple, and Shadow wished he understood the reference to their first meeting. The sweater was black with beige shoulder pads and a gray high neck with a weird pattern on it and a cape of some sort. It was also probably a size or two too big for Izuku. It seemed no one could pinpoint his size correctly. Is that they? Whispered Hisashi in shock, cute little tears accumulating on his eyes, as if it wasn't the 7th time today that he was about to cry. If he paid enough attention he could see it. It had some resemblance to Present Mike hero costume, but they couldn't quite understand where the cape came from. The first time I came into Nana's shop I asked if she had any Present Mike merch, and then I told her he should wear a cape, he explained, his eyes shining with a nostalgia that it was odd in him. Immediately he put it on, moving his hand to pet the soft material and then using the sleeve to wipe at a wannabe tear. I love it, Nana, thank you, he whispered in the deep hug he gave her. His parents could do nothing but be grateful at the sight of Izuku having such a lovely woman in their son's life. After their short emotional moment, Izuku prepared himself for the last 3 gifts of the night. He always loved to leave them at the end, as much as he always left the best part of any food to eat at last. He decided to go first for the something you need gift. They all had the same wrapping paper but had a little note on top so he knew what he was opening. It was a medium to small flat box that resembled to some point to Ada's, just not as long. Izuku took it out and smiled brightly at it. It was a small device called Kindle that older generations used for the sole purpose of reading. Newer and more complex ones had been made since, but both Hisashi and Aizawa knew that Izuku didn't want the last one nor the most expensive one. Izuku was always worried about the price of things, and it took him a while to unlearn that money was a problem that kids didn't need to worry about, no matter what they spent on him nor how much things cost. It was okay to want things, and it was okay to not like the things that had already cost money. But at the end of the day, this was something practical that he would use to read wherever he went. This is so cool. Thanks, dads. You are welcome, kiddo. Just make sure that if you disassemble it to see what's inside, you have a printed copy on how to put it back together, Yamada joked, making an obvious reference on how Izuku loved to know how each thing worked. The second gift was something you want, and Shadow was sure he would regret buying him this, but well, he was allowed to spoil his nerdy son every once in a while. This was by far the biggest box. It was heavy too, so Izuku made sure to not shake it nor to move it too harshly, probably guessing what it was based on the size alone. Lately, Izuku had started doing some biology experiments under Nezu's guidance, and so the kid had been eyeing on the internet for far too long for a small set to make his own experiments at home. He was most interested in bacteria and germs, which Shouta decided he didn't want to much about. So they decided to buy him a bacteria growth kit, which mainly included a small microscope and various types of glass containers to collect, dissect, and examine germs and bacteria. Later on, Shouta would probably have to put limits on not putting any bacteria cultures on their fridge. He most definitely didn't want that thing close to their food. The other kids came closer to watch the whole kit unfold, and they all marveled at the many pieces that would probably take a few hours to put together. The image in the box would have to do for now. Now I can download some material about germs cultures, he mumbled to himself, soon falling into a spiral of things he could get germs from. Thank God we didn't choose the chemistry kit, mumbled Hisashi, giving Shouta a surprised look when Izuku started assembling the microscope without the need of any instruction. He could only agree. That kid was destined to eventually make some type of nuclear bomb if left unsupervised. Izuku had to take a minute to relax himself for how excited he was before he could put the kit aside to open the last gift. Something we want you to have, Shouta mumbled, suddenly and unreasonably nervous. Admittedly, it was probably the most inexpensive gift of all, and he didn't know how he would feel if Izuku didn't like it. But it was a scenario he took into consideration as he wrapped it. After all, Izuku had never been ungrateful. It was something pretty obvious to see when they had to make his friends take him out to play so he wouldn't help in his own birthday party. Hell, you could give the kid a candy and then take it away and he would still say thank you. Even if he didn't like it, it would still be nice knowing that he would have it. Izuku grabbed the last present in his hands and shook it. No sound came from it. It was soft, but not as soft as a sweater would be, and definitely not harder than a box. It was as if some type of unboxed thin plastic was inside, and Izuku found himself at complete loss at what it could possibly be. Hisashi grabbed his husband's hand a bit too hard in excitement, and he returned the gesture, a bit less excited and a bit more nervous. As soon as Izuku realized what it was, he gasped audibly. The gray hard fabric sat in his hands as they trembled in excitement. It's a bit ratty from use, Shouta said rapidly, as if feeling the need to excuse himself. Is this a capture weapon? Their bunny's voice was shaking and filled with an emotion they have only seen on a number of occasions. It actually is my first ever capture weapon, he said, which explained the wear it had. I thought it was time I passed down to you. Shouta moved closer, just enough to pat his kid on the back. Hisashi left him because he knew this moment would be important to them both, and because he was already crying and didn't want to smear any snot on the presents. The mere touch on his shoulder seemed to be enough to open the waterfalls. Izuku launched himself at Shouta, who fell on his ass as he didn't catch him on time. They were left there as Izuku cried his eyes off while mumbling thankayo, thankayo, thankayo way too low and snot-filled for him to fully understand. He decided to ignore his own eyes watering in order to better hug his son. His legacy, the one person that he wanted to make a better world for. Soon Hisashi joined in because hell, everything was already covered in tears. Shouta hugged his family as tight as he could, for once not caring about peering eyes and camera flashes. He hugged them because they made his life better, worthy. He hugged them because they were the only thing he would rather die to see get hurt. He hugged them because he was scared of the future because it was unknown. He hugged them because he wasn't scared of going forward if they were by his side. He hugged them because in their arms was the only place he felt perfectly safe. He hugged them because unknowingly they saved him. Yes, Izuku was going to be a hero. If only he knew that in his eyes he already was. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.